The skies burned with an ominous red as the planet's core destabilized, shaking the ground violently. Buildings crumbled under the immense pressure, their crystalline spires falling like glass rain. Panic filled the air as citizens moved around like headless chickens, their faces twisted in fear and despair. In the heart of this chaos, Jor-El sprinted through the collapsing corridors of the Kryptonian Science Council building. The Codex, a glowing, crystal artifact containing the genetic essence of Krypton's people, was tightly clutched in his hands. His white ceremonial robes were singed, and his face bore the marks of a desperate man who carried the weight of an entire civilization. Jor-El, Lara's voice crackled over his communicator. Have you secured the Codex? Yes, he panted, ducking as a chunk of ceiling crashed behind him. But Zod's forces are closing in. There's no time to lose. Ahead of him, a detachment of Zod's elite soldiers emerged from the smoke, their weapons trained on him. Surrender the Codex, Jor-El, one of them barked. General Zod demands it. Jor-El's eyes narrowed. He tapped his wrist console, activating a defensive drone that unleashed a barrage of energy pulses, forcing the soldiers into cover. Using the distraction, without looking he darted into a nearby laboratory, one of the council's most secretive experimental chambers. The chamber was a chaotic mess of shattered equipment and glowing consoles. In the center stood a teleportation device, its angular frame buzzing with unstable energy. It was a prototype meant to explore the theoretical boundaries of spacetime, a project deemed too dangerous for public use. Jor-El's attention snapped back as the lab doors exploded inward. Zod's soldiers stormed in, blasting at anything that moved. Diving for cover, Jor-El gritted his teeth. There was no escape now. As shots were being fired over Jor-El's head, he began lamenting the fact that he most likely wouldn't be able to send the Codex off with his son, Kal-El, in hopes that he would one day restore Krypton's people on a planet that wasn't collapsing. Suddenly, a stray blast struck the teleportation device's control panel next to him, causing it to spark and overload. The machine began to hum ominously, its energy field growing wild and erratic. Jor-El, Zod's voice boomed as the general himself stepped into the room. His imposing figure, clad in dark battle armor, radiated fury. You cannot save Krypton. Hand over the Codex, and we can rebuild our way. Jor-El ignored him, frantically looking for a way to escape his current situation. Just as he contemplated jumping out the window and having his drone catch him, a beam from Zod's rifle struck the ceiling, causing debris to rain down. A massive chunk struck Jor-El's shoulder, sending him sprawling. The Codex slipped from his grasp, landing directly into the teleportation beam. No, Jor-El reached out helplessly as the device roared to life. The Codex dissolved into the beam, vanishing into a glowing vortex of light and energy. The machine overloaded further, sparking uncontrollably. Zod's rage was palpable. He grabbed Jor-El by the collar, lifting him effortlessly. What have you done? He snarled. Where's the Codex? Jor-El smiled weakly, blood trickling from his lips. I don't know, but you'll never find it. Before Zod could react, an explosion rocked the lab. The teleportation device imploded, tearing a rift in spacetime. The force threw everyone back, and the scene dissolved into chaos. The Codex drifted silently through the infinite void of the multiverse, glowing faintly as it spiraled between dimensions. Time and space warped around it, pulling it toward an unfamiliar universe. Warping through the void, the Codex began to resonate with something, a fading soul. A 17-year-old boy named Marshan Byron hovered on the edge of death, his body frail and broken from a long, losing battle with a terminal illness. His life was only filled with the entertainment of manga, anime, and comic books as he laid in his hospital bed for more than 10 years. His thoughts were a swirl of regret, yearning for the life he never truly lived. As the Codex approached, it glowed brighter, sensing the boy's potential. In a cosmic dance of fate, the Codex merged with his soul, reshaping his essence. Energy surged as the genetic template of Krypton fused with the remnants of his humanity. The mutated soul continued traveling through the void to enter a universe different from his own in many ways. A new destiny was forged, a soul reborn with the genetic legacy of an entire civilization. What is this? Where am I? The thought surged through my mind like a thunderclap, raw and panicked. I couldn't see clearly. Everything was blurry and distorted, like looking through fogged glass. The world around me felt enormous, overwhelming, and foreign. My limbs wouldn't respond properly. They felt weak, small, and uncoordinated. Why can't I move? I tried to speak, but all that came out was a garbled coo. A wave of helplessness washed over me, more intense than anything I'd felt before. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't some strange hallucination. Something was wrong. Suddenly, a face came into focus. It was warm and kind, framed by dark hair and soft features. She smiled at me, her voice soothing. You're okay, sweetheart. Mommy's here. Mommy. The word pierced through my panic like an arrow. My mother died while I was young. No, this wasn't possible. I wasn't a baby. I wasn't supposed to be. The last thing I remembered was the hospital. The pain. The endless beeping of machines that were keeping me alive. The moment everything went dark. I had died. I was sure of it. So how was I here? The woman rocked me gently in her arms. My vision cleared slightly, just enough to make out another figure standing in the background. Tall, broad-shouldered, and imposing, with a thick mustache and an air of quiet authority. Are babies usually this small and fragile, Debbie? His voice was deep, steady, and carried a faint edge of curiosity. Yes, Nolan. The woman, Debbie, replied with a soft laugh. Even you had to be small and fragile as a baby. You're not exactly exempt from biology. She turned her gaze back to me, her eyes filled with love. Look at you, my little Mark. You're perfect. Mark, Debbie, Nolan. The names echoed in my mind, distant and faint, but undeniably familiar. I clung to them, desperate for something to anchor myself. They meant something important, something that explained all of this. But the pieces wouldn't click. My thoughts were a chaotic storm, and every time I tried to focus, the warmth of Debbie's arms and the exhaustion in my tiny body pulled me back into the present. For now, I let the names drift into the background, choosing instead to observe the people in front of me. Debbie's voice was kind, soothing. She held me with a tenderness I hadn't felt in years. Her touch reminded me of my own mother, gentle but strong, protective. It was almost enough to calm the storm inside me. Almost. My eyes drifted to Nolan. He was terrifying, not in a conventional sense, but in the way he stood, the way he watched me. His gaze wasn't cruel, but it wasn't warm either. It was calculating, curious, like he was waiting for something. I couldn't make sense of it. I couldn't make sense of any of it. My body, my surroundings, these people, they were all wrong. And yet, the warmth of Debbie's arms and the exhaustion in my small, fragile body made it impossible to fight the confusion for long. I let my eyes drift closed, the storm in my mind settling into a quiet hum of unanswered questions. The answers would come later. For now, I had no choice but to wait. 5 years had passed since I woke up in this strange new world, confused and helpless. In that time, I had settled into the life of Mark Grayson, the son of Nolan and Debbie. Despite the occasional pang of unease that came with the fragmented memories of my past life, I'd grown to love my new parents. Debbie was everything you'd want in a mother, caring, warm, and endlessly patient. Nolan, though stern and reserved, had his moments of genuine affection that made me feel safe. It wasn't a bad life so far. In fact, it was wonderful. I have a family, a home, and a sense of normalcy I hadn't felt in my past life. For a while, I let myself forget the nagging sense that something wasn't right. I was happy, or at least as happy as someone who occasionally remembered dying could be. Mark, my father's voice called out to me. I turned to see him standing in the doorway, his towering frame filling the space. He gave me a small smile. Come with me. There's something we need to talk about. I followed him silently, wondering what he wanted to talk to me about. The room was warm and richly decorated, with bookshelves lining the walls and a large desk in the center. He motioned for me to sit on the small couch near the window. He sat across from me, leaning forward slightly, his forearms resting on his knees. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp like he was gauging my reaction before he even said anything. Mark, he began, his tone steady but serious. You're old enough now to understand the truth about who I am and who you are. I looked at him confused, my 5-year-old brain wondering what he meant. I'm not from Earth, he said. I'm from a planet called Viltrum. It's far away, in another galaxy. Our people are strong and resilient. We're protectors, Mark. We've spent centuries traveling to other worlds, helping weaker civilizations thrive. That's what I came here to do. He paused, watching me closely. I kept my face neutral, though my heart was pounding. The pieces were clicking into place, faster and faster. The word Viltrum, the idea of traveling to other planets. His reserved, calculating demeanor. My stomach churned as my repressed memories pulled together, forming a picture I didn't want to see. I fell in love with this planet. He continued, his tone softening. With your mom. With you. And now, Earth is my home. It's our home. One day, you'll understand what it means to be a Viltrumite. You'll grow stronger, faster, and more capable than anyone else on this planet. It's in your blood, Mark. You're special. His words should have been comforting. They should have made me feel like I was part of something greater. But instead, they made my stomach churn. I couldn't stop thinking about what I remembered and knew was coming. This wasn't just a second chance at life. This was the life. The Invincible universe. And my father was Omni-Man. The same Omni-Man whose mission was to weaken Earth for the Viltrumite Empire. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my head. The memories of my past life were clearer, now like a fog had lifted. I was in the Invincible universe. I was Mark Grayson, and I was going to have Viltrumite powers. I couldn't stop smiling as I stared up at the ceiling. This wasn't just a second chance. It was the chance of a lifetime. Sure, I knew what was coming. I knew about Nolan's mission and the dark road that lay ahead. But right now, none of that mattered. All I could think about was flying, fighting, and finally getting to live the kind of life I'd always dreamed of. And if things went off the rails, well, I had knowledge from my past life. I could change things, make this story my own. For the first time in years, maybe even longer, I felt truly alive. The future wasn't just bright. It was invincible. Mark threw himself into training with an intensity that surprised even him. He couldn't exactly tell his father why he was so driven. Nolan would have been suspicious, but he used every opportunity to build himself up. His school gym became his sanctuary, and he signed up for martial arts classes under the guise of wanting to get ready for when his powers awaken. By the time he was 14, Mark had developed a solid foundation in multiple fighting styles. Boxing taught him precision and endurance. Jiu-jitsu gave him control and grappling techniques. Muay Thai made his strikes devastating. With his Viltrumite powers not awakening yet, Mark relied on his wit and willpower, pushing his limits every single day. Late at night, when the house was quiet, Mark would practice in secret. He shadowboxed in his room, replaying techniques in his mind over and over again. He studied online footage of fighters and heroes alike, analyzing their moves, imagining how they'd fare against someone as strong as a Viltrumite. The years passed, and Mark's anticipation only grew. He waited for the day when he'd finally feel the strength of his Viltrumite blood coursing through his veins. Some days, he'd catch himself staring at his reflection, wondering what it would feel like to fly, to punch through solid steel, to be invincible. He knew he would have to wait until he was at least 17 due to being a late bloomer like in the comics, but he was still excited. While Mark diligently trained for the challenges he knew lay ahead, he also made a conscious effort to embrace the life experiences he had missed in his past life. He joined his middle school basketball team, made some friends, got his driver's license, and even took tentative steps into the world of dating, all to live a fuller, more balanced life. It happened a few months after his 17th birthday. Mark was taking out the trash at Burger Mart after a long shift. He had taken the job so he could know when his powers would come in, just like in the series. When Mark started lifting the trash to throw it in the dumpster, it suddenly flew off into the atmosphere. Yes, Mark exclaimed as he started dancing around. His powers really did come in just like in the series, and he was ecstatic. But just as the euphoria set in, a wave of physical and mental pain hit him. Mark could feel his muscles tightening, providing strength he wasn't expecting even with his Viltrumite heritage. His senses sharpened. He could hear the hum of a streetlight blocks away and smell the grease from the restaurant's fryer even through the night air. His mind exploded with images. Crystalline towers rising under a red sun. Symbols and words in a language he'd never learned but now understood perfectly. Memories of a world called Krypton, of its history, its people, and its final days. Mark stumbled backward, his head spinning from his heightened senses. The Codex provided him with the memory of how it had fallen into the teleporter, fused with his fading soul in the void, and was the reason he was brought to the Invincible universe. The Codex was inactive for 17 years, until Mark's Viltrumite genetics awoke, allowing the Codex to assimilate Kryptonian DNA with his Viltrumite DNA. Remembering the Superman comics he had read during long hours in his hospital bed in his past life, Mark focused on gaining control over his newly awakened senses. Fortunately, his Kryptonian powers, while impressive, hadn't yet grown too overwhelming to manage. After an hour of concentrated effort to quiet the barrage of sounds flooding his ears, he succeeded in dialing back his hearing to the level of a slightly above average human, giving him a small but meaningful victory. Whoa, that was way harder than the movies and comics made it look, Mark muttered to himself. He walked back into Burger Mart, ripped off his apron, and marched up to his manager, shoving it into their hands. I quit, he declared, and walked out of the store. Mark wanted to get a handle on his powers before heading home, so he made his way to the nearest park. The Codex and my Viltrumite genes seemed to be helping me adapt to my powers quickly, he thought, a mix of excitement and determination bubbling within him. But let's put them to a real test. Scanning the park, he spotted a secluded area surrounded by trees, offering enough cover to avoid being seen. Once there, he took a deep breath, kneeling down to center himself before attempting his first real flight. The sensation was strange at first, like his body was learning to balance two distinct methods of flying. His Viltrumite side provided him with natural biological instincts, almost as if he'd always known how to propel himself through the air in any direction with sheer willpower. At the same time, his Kryptonian side activated a bioelectric field, allowing him to negate gravity's pull and move with effortless precision. The dual sensations felt alien, yet harmonious, as if both sides of his heritage were working together. Mark couldn't help but grin as he pushed off the ground, ready to see just how far his newfound powers could take him. Mark soared higher, a laugh escaping his lips as the trees became dots below him. This is amazing, he shouted to no one, the wind whipping past his face. The sensation was exhilarating, a mix of freedom and power that was beyond anything he had ever imagined. After a few minutes of flying, Mark landed near a boulder at the edge of the park. His landing wasn't perfect, but it was controlled enough to avoid a crash. He stared at the massive rock in front of him, his fingers twitching as he thought about the strength now coursing through his body. Let's see how far this goes, he thought, stepping forward. With one hand, he gripped the edge of the boulder and lifted. It came off the ground effortlessly, as if it weighed no more than a pillow. Mark grinned and threw the rock a few dozen feet away, watching it crash into a tree with a thunderous sound. Next came speed. Mark crouched low and sprinted across the clearing, the world blurring around him as he moved faster than his eyes could track. The rush of air against his face was exhilarating, and by the time he skidded to a stop, the clearing looked like it had been hit by a tornado, with grass and dirt kicked up in every direction. But not everything came as easily. Heat vision was a struggle to control. Mark squinted at a pile of rocks, willing the energy from his Kryptonian side to manifest. It took a few attempts, but eventually, twin beams of intense red heat shot from his eyes, reducing the rocks to molten slag. The burst of energy left him breathless, and for a moment, he felt the strain of using powers he hadn't fully mastered. Okay, heat vision needs work, he thought, wiping sweat from his brow. The bioelectric field also required concentration. Mark experimented with hovering and gliding, carefully adjusting his movements with subtle shifts of his body. Drawing on memories of comics and shows like Young Justice and the comic book version of Superboy, he decided to test whether he could replicate tactile telekinesis. Stretching his hand toward a nearby rock, he focused, willing his bioelectric aura to extend and envelop the object. After a few tense seconds, he felt his aura shift, wrapping around the rock. With a flick of his wrist, he hurled it into the air, watching as it soared out of sight. Awesome, he shouted, grinning as he realized what he had just accomplished. Encouraged, Mark turned to another experiment, recreating one of Superboy's iconic abilities, telekinetic barriers. He envisioned extending his bioelectric aura into a solid, tangible construct, forming a protective shield or wall. With his hands outstretched, he focused intently, imagining the field expanding outward and hardening into a barrier. The air around him shimmered faintly as the energy began to take shape. He thought, the possibilities swirling in his mind. I assumed the Codex would limit me to the standard abilities of a yellow sun-powered Kryptonian. Super strength, speed, senses, heat vision, and X-ray vision. But this is something else. If I can replicate non-standard Kryptonian abilities, who knows what I could achieve? His mind raced with possibilities, a grin spreading across his face. With my knowledge of comics, I could potentially develop powers even Superman never had. I might even be able to project solar energy blasts, like Superman 1,000,000 foot. The thought filled him with excitement and determination. After realizing how late it was getting, Mark flew off and arrived in the backyard of his home, his legs wobbling slightly as he landed. His head was buzzing with adrenaline, his mind racing with the possibilities of what he could do. But as he stood there, staring at the house he'd grown up in, reality came crashing back. He had his powers now, powers that were incredible, world-shaking. But that didn't change the harsh reality. His father was Omni-Man, and Mark knew exactly what that meant for the future. Sliding open the backyard door, he stepped into the house, where his mother and father were sitting at the table, finishing dinner. Debbie looked up, surprised. "Oh, Mark, I didn't see you come in. What were you doing out in the backyard?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice steady. "My powers just kicked in." Debbie's eyes lit up with pride and excitement. "Oh, Mark, that's wonderful," she said. Nolan had a small smile on his face. "I knew it was only a matter of time," he said, his tone calm, but carrying a hint of satisfaction. "How do you feel?" Mark hesitated, glancing at his father. "Strong, fast, like, I can do anything." Later that night, as Mark lay in bed, he stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. He had revealed his powers to his parents because he knew it was inevitable. Nolan would have found out sooner or later. But now, he had to make a choice. Mark clenched his fists. He knew the timeline. He knew the Guardians of the Globe would die, and he knew it would be his father's doing. But as much as it pained him, he wasn't ready to stop Nolan. Not yet. His training had prepared him for a lot, but he could feel the gap in power between them. "I need more time," he thought, his jaw tightening. "I need to get stronger." As the moonlight filtered through his window, Mark closed his eyes, already thinking about how to push his new powers even further. The sharp sound of knocking woke Mark at exactly 6 a.m. His groggy eyes blinked open to find his father standing in the doorway, already dressed in his Omni-Man uniform. "Up and at 'em, son," Nolan said, his voice carrying a hint of excitement. "It's time to see what you've got." Mark groaned, sitting up in bed. "Now? It's so early." Nolan smirked. "Crime doesn't sleep, and neither should you if you want to be a hero. Come on." Mark sighed, but quickly got dressed. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the first official training session with his dad. He knew he couldn't afford to mess it up, but he also couldn't let Nolan figure out just how much he'd already mastered on his own. If he was going to stick to the timeline, he needed to play the part of a beginner. They flew out to a remote field just as the sun began to rise, the golden light spilling over the horizon. Mark followed Nolan's lead, carefully keeping his flight a little wobbly, as if he were still getting used to it. Nolan glanced back at him, nodding in approval. "Not bad for your first flight," Nolan said as they landed. "But we've got a long way to go." Mark stretched, pretending to shake off some nerves. "Okay, what's first?" The rest of the morning was spent refining Mark's flight, strength, and precision. Nolan explained how to conserve energy during long flights. Mark made sure to stumble occasionally, trying to sell the image of a novice, but he couldn't hide his natural agility. When they moved on to combat training, things got more intense. Nolan demonstrated a series of punches and blocks, encouraging Mark to copy them. Mark hesitated but quickly fell into the rhythm, his years of martial arts training coming back to him. Nolan's eyes narrowed slightly as he watched Mark adapt. "You've done this before," Nolan said, throwing a light jab that Mark instinctively blocked. "Yeah, I took martial arts for a while when I was younger, remember?" Mark admitted, keeping his tone casual. "Good," Nolan said with a grin. "That'll help. But there's a big difference between sparring in a dojo and fighting someone like me." Mark swallowed hard as Nolan squared up. "Let's see how you handle yourself." They began sparring, Nolan holding back significantly while Mark tried to keep up. Each punch felt like a freight train, even when Nolan was pulling them. Mark managed to land a few glancing blows, but it was clear who had the upper hand. After a few minutes, Mark stepped back, panting. "Okay, I give. You're way stronger than me." Nolan chuckled, clapping him on the shoulder. "Of course I am. I've been doing this for decades. But you're learning fast, faster than I thought you would. You've got potential, Mark. You'll be strong one day, really strong." Mark couldn't help but smile at the praise, even as his arms ached from the sparring. "Thanks, Dad. Now, get ready for school," Nolan said, ruffling his hair. "We'll pick this up later." Mark had spent years piecing together how this universe worked, from what he remembered of the Invincible comics to what he'd observed firsthand. He couldn't risk disrupting things too soon. Certain events had to happen, like getting his superhero costume from Art Rosenbaum, and for that, he'd need his father's approval. After wolfing down a quick breakfast and saying goodbye to his parents, Mark slung his backpack over his shoulder and walked out the door. The world seemed brighter now that he had his powers. Everything looked sharper and clearer, as if his senses had been turned up to 11. He could feel the sun's rays energizing his cells, making him more alert like he just had a shot of coffee. As Mark reached the school gates, he spotted William waiting for him near the lockers. William grinned when he saw him. "Hey, Mark, you're looking unusually chipper for someone who's about to spend 8 hours trapped in this glorified prison." Mark smirked. "What can I say? Just feeling good." Before William could press him further, a commotion down the hall caught their attention. Todd, the school bully, had cornered Amber Bennett near her locker, leaning in too close for comfort. Mark smirked. "Right on cue. Come on, Amber," Todd sneered. "You don't have to play hard to get." "She doesn't have to play anything," Mark said, stepping in. "Back off, Todd." Todd turned, glaring at him. "What's your deal, Grayson? You got a death wish?" Mark met his gaze, keeping his tone calm but firm. "Not really. Just figured you'd want to save yourself the embarrassment of getting shut down in front of everyone." Amber smirked, and Todd's face turned red with anger. He clenched his fists, stepping closer, but the bell rang before he could say anything. With a grunt, Todd stormed off. "Thanks, Mark," Amber said, giving him a small smile. "You didn't have to do that." Mark shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Yeah, well, someone had to." After school, Mark made his way to the empty lot behind the building. Changing into a hoodie, scarf, and sunglasses to hide his identity, he prepared for his first outing as a superhero. He knew the timeline. His father would notice his superhero activities soon enough and take him to art shop for the suit. Until then, he had to keep things small, just enough to stay on track. Taking a deep breath, Mark launched himself into the sky. The city stretched out beneath him, and he couldn't help but grin. "This is what I've been waiting for." As he soared over the rooftops, Mark used his enhanced hearing to scan for trouble. It didn't take long to find it. The sound of police sirens and shouting echoed through the streets below. Mark dove down, spotting a police chase unfolding. Two masked robbers and Titan, who he remembered from the comics, were speeding away in a stolen van, the back doors swinging open to reveal bags of cash spilling onto the road. Mark swooped down, landing on the roof of the van. The robbers inside panicked as the vehicle swerved wildly. "What the hell is that?" one of them shouted. "Just pull over," Mark yelled, punching through the roof and grabbing the driver's wheel. With a sharp yank, he forced the van into an alley, bringing it to a screeching halt. Titan and the others scrambled out, but Mark moved fast. He grabbed two of them by the collars and slammed them against the van, knocking them out. Titan tried to fight back, throwing a punch, but Mark blocked it effortlessly, sending Titan sprawling with a light shove. "You're done," Mark said as police cars screeched to a stop nearby. Before anyone could question him, he flew off. "You've been busy," Nolan said, appearing beside him mid-flight. Mark shrugged. "I couldn't just let them get away." "Good," Nolan said, a note of approval in his voice. "But if you're serious about this, you'll need a proper suit. Come on." They flew to Art Rosenbaum's shop, where Mark spent the next hour working on his suit's design. Remembering the solar battery discs from the first design Art showed him, Mark asked to incorporate them into a flexible armor inspired by Vegetas from Dragon Ball. The suit retained his iconic blue and yellow color scheme, with an added bold eye insignia on the chest. Are you sure about the solar discs? Nolan asked, raising an eyebrow. They're practically useless for you. Mark grinned. What if I'm in space and need to charge my phone? He joked, though inwardly he knew the solar batteries could be a valuable asset for his Kryptonian abilities, especially under a red sun. You wouldn't have a signal in space, Nolan deadpanned. Oh right, Mark said sheepishly. What are you calling yourself? Art asked. Mark smiled, looking at his reflection. Invincible. It's finally begun, Mark thought as he stood silently beside his mother. Debbie's soft sobs filled the room as she clung to Nolan's hand, her thumb brushing over his knuckles as if her touch could somehow wake him. Her tear-streaked face was etched with worry, her red-rimmed eyes locked on her husband, who lay motionless in a hospital bed. Mark's gaze shifted to his father. Nolan looked peaceful, almost serene, as the machines around him beeped softly, monitoring his vitals. The oxygen mask covering his face rose and fell rhythmically, the sterile hum of the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the room. To anyone else, this might look like a tragic scene, a hero gravely injured in battle. But Mark knew better. He wasn't injured, not really. This was all an act, part of the facade Nolan was carefully maintaining. Last night, while Mark had been asleep, the Guardians of the Globe had been summoned to their headquarters. One by one, they had arrived, only to find themselves face-to-face with Omni-Man. The battle had been swift and brutal. Blood spattered the walls as Nolan tore through the Guardians with ruthless efficiency. When the carnage ended, he stood alone among the bodies, his chest heaving. Then, as planned, he collapsed to the ground, feigning unconsciousness to cover his betrayal. Now, Mark stood in the aftermath, his chest tight as he watched his mother unravel. How could Nolan do this to her? How could he stand there and let her believe this lie? Mark's fists clenched at his sides, his emotions simmering just beneath the surface. He didn't know what to say, didn't know if there was anything to say. Debbie had been his mom for the past 17 years. In his previous life, his mother had passed away when he was young, leaving him without the chance to form a deep bond with her. But Debbie had always been his true mother in every way that mattered, and it pained him deeply to see her so distraught. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the heavy silence. Mark turned to see Cecil Stedman, the director of the Global Defense Agency, entering the room. His expression was unreadable, as always, but his presence carried an undeniable weight. He nodded briefly to Debbie, his tone soft as he said, I'm sorry for what you're going through. Then his gaze shifted to Mark, his demeanor hardening. Mark, Cecil said briskly, can I have a word? Mark quickly glanced at his mom. She barely seemed to notice him as her attention remained fixed on Nolan. With a crisp nod, Mark followed Cecil into the hallway. The moment the door closed behind them, Cecil pulled out a tablet and tapped the screen. A live news feed flickered to life, showing chaos in the heart of the city. Mark looked at the tablet. Aliens clad in mechanical armor were pouring out of shimmering portals, firing energy weapons that tore through buildings and civilians alike. Screams echoed through the feed as people scattered in every direction, their movements frantic amidst the collapsing rubble. They've never attacked before, Cecil began, his voice grim. They're organized, they're relentless, and they're not stopping. We're doing everything we can, but we're stretched thin. And with the Guardians gone, he trailed off, his eyes meeting Mark's with an intensity that left no room for doubt. You need my help, Mark said, his voice steady. Cecil nodded. You're the strongest resource we have right now. I won't lie to you. This is bad. But I've seen what you can do, and I know you can handle this. Mark had to suppress a smirk. This was the moment he'd been preparing for, the moment he'd planned for. He couldn't afford to mess it up. The Flaxons were just the beginning, a stepping stone to what was coming. All right, Mark said finally. I'll handle it. He glanced at the screen one last time, his resolve hardening. It's time to put my plans into motion. Mark soared through the sky, the wind whipping past him as he approached the battlefield. His invincible suit, crafted by Art, clung tightly to his frame, the bold yellow and blue colors standing out against the smoke-filled skyline. Below him, chaos reigned. Flaxon soldiers swarmed the streets, their weapons leveling entire blocks in seconds. Civilians screamed as they ran for cover, dodging falling debris and energy blasts. He dove into the fray, landing hard in the middle of a group of Flaxons. The ground cracked beneath his feet as the shockwave from his landing sent several soldiers sprawling. Before they could react, Mark moved, his fists ablur as he tore through their ranks. Each punch connected with brutal precision, shattering armor and sending bodies flying. The first Flaxon he took down lay motionless on the ground, his armor cracked open. Mark paused, staring at the body. A lump formed in his throat. I killed him. The realization hit hard. This wasn't like the comics or movies he'd grown up watching. This was real. The Flaxons weren't faceless enemies. They were living beings, and he was ending their lives. His moment of hesitation cost him. A blast of energy struck him from the side, throwing him into the rubble of a nearby building. Mark grunted, shaking off the hit, and looked up to see more Flaxons advancing, their weapons trained on him. The weight of their actions, the destruction, the lives they'd already taken, snapped him out of his daze. They're not here to play fair, he thought, pushing himself to his feet. This is the Invincible universe. It's kill or be killed. A new fire ignited in his chest, and his Viltrumite instincts surged to the forefront. The hesitation and guilt melted away, replaced by cold, calculated focus. Mark gritted his teeth. I might not be a true hero like Superman, but I'm not letting these monsters destroy the city. He charged forward, his movements precise and unrelenting. He tore through the Flaxons like a force of nature, using their own weapons against them when necessary. The thrill of the fight coursed through him, a primal excitement that made his heart race. For the first time, he felt truly alive. The strength he'd always dreamed of having was finally his, and he wasn't going to waste it. Just as Mark was beginning to feel the thrill of battle course through him, he forced himself to stay focused. Protect the civilians first. Keep the Flaxons busy. Hey, need a hand. Mark turned to see a flash of pink energy soaring through the air. A girl landed gracefully nearby, her glowing constructs pushing back a group of Flaxons. Her red hair framed her face, and her emerald eyes burned with determination. Mark froze for a moment. Adam Eve. He had seen her in the comics during his past life, but here, in person, she was breathtaking. For a second, he forgot where he was, transfixed by her beauty. Focus, she called out, breaking him from his thoughts. We've got a lot of these guys to handle. Snapping out of it, Mark nodded. Name's Invincible, he said, stepping forward and punching a Flaxon so hard it flew back into its comrades. Nice to meet you. Welcome to the fight, Invincible, she said with a small smirk, her hands glowing as she created another energy shield to block incoming fire. More flashes of light signaled the arrival of additional heroes. Rex Splode leaped into action, his explosive attacks tearing through enemy ranks. Duplicate multiplied herself, overwhelming the Flaxons with sheer numbers, while Robot barked orders, coordinating the team's efforts. Who's the new guy? Rex called out, lobbing an explosive coin at a Flaxon soldier. Invincible, Eve said as she deflected a blast with her energy constructs. And he's strong, really strong. Good, Robot said, as he dodged a swing from a Flaxon. We could use the help. Mark didn't waste time with introductions. He dove back into the fight, his fists ablur as he tore through the Flaxon forces. He noticed the team was coordinated, but the sheer number of enemies was starting to overwhelm them. Mark took it upon himself to handle the bulk of the army, drawing their fire and keeping the team from being overrun. Mark fought with precision, taking on the majority of the army while keeping the team from being overrun. But his focus wasn't on victory, at least, not yet. He was watching, waiting, keeping track of the time. The Flaxons might have overwhelming numbers, but Mark knew their biology couldn't sustain itself on Earth. They'll start aging soon, he thought, dodging a blast and countering with a devastating punch. I just have to hold the line until then. The battle raged on, the team holding their ground as best they could. Eve's energy constructs shielded civilians and redirected enemy fire, while Rex's explosive attacks scattered their ranks. Duplicate and Robot provided much-needed reinforcements, but the team was clearly starting to tire. Mark noticed Eve falter slightly, and his instincts kicked in. Without thinking, Mark launched himself in her direction. "Eve, watch out," he shouted, throwing himself in front of the shot. The blast hit his back, the force knocking him forward, but he stayed upright, shielding Eve with his body. She turned to him, her eyes wide. "You okay?" Mark grinned. "Takes more than that to hurt me." Eve's expression softened briefly before she turned back to the battle. "Thanks." Finally, it happened. The Flaxen soldiers began to falter. Their movement slowed, their attacks less precise. Armor-clad bodies began collapsing, their once formidable forms withering with age. Mark smirked. "Right on schedule. They're aging." Robot shouted, confirming what Mark already knew. "They can't sustain themselves here much longer." As the Flaxens retreated toward their portals, the team regrouped. Exhausted but victorious, they watched as their enemies began to crumble under the weight of their own biology. For the others, this might have seemed like the end of the battle, but for Mark, it was only the beginning. He turned his gaze toward the largest portal. Before anyone could react, Mark launched himself toward the portal. Eve's eyes widened in alarm as she realized what he was doing. "Invincible," she called out, her voice desperate. "Wait, don't." Her words were cut off as Mark disappeared into the swirling vortex, the portal's energy rippling in his wake. Mark emerged from the swirling portal into a world of harsh, oppressive heat. The sky above glowed dimly with the red light of a sun that began to sap his Kryptonian abilities. For now, the solar batteries in his invincible suit kept him fully powered, but he knew they wouldn't last forever. He surveyed the sprawling alien city before him. Towering structures of metal and glass stretched toward the crimson sky, and Flaxen soldiers moved in precise battalions. This was their home turf, but Mark was strong enough that it didn't matter. Taking a deep breath, he steadied himself. This wasn't just a battle. It was a mission to cripple an entire society. He reached for the collar of his suit, stripping it off piece by piece until he stood exposed to the red sun's rays. His body tensed as the energy drain intensified, but that was the point. He needed to grow stronger without relying on the yellow sun's radiation. He had to strengthen his Viltrumite side, preparing for future battles in places where red suns dominated. He needed to be ready for the real threats: Battle Beast, Thrag, and the Viltrumite Empire. Mark POV. I launched myself off the ground, heading straight for the tallest structure I could see. It looked like a palace, a good enough place to start. As I flew, Flaxen soldiers opened fire, their energy weapons lighting up the air around me. I dodged easily, feeling the thrill of combat building in my chest. When I landed on the roof, the entire building trembled beneath the impact. Soldiers scrambled to respond, their shouts echoing in an alien language. They charged at me with weapons drawn, and I grinned. Perfect. The first soldier swung at me with a blade glowing blue hot. I caught his wrist mid-swing and twisted, the sickening crack confirming my grip strength. "Impressive tech," I said, tossing him into a group of his comrades. "But you have no idea who you're dealing with." Each punch sent shockwaves through the air, their exosuits shattering under my fists. My movements felt heavier than they did on Earth. The red sun was taking its toll, but I pushed through it. Every strike, every dodge, was a reminder. This wasn't just a fight, it was training. The toll of the red sun became undeniable as days turned into weeks. I felt it every time I moved, a slight lag in my punches, the weight in my limbs. But something wasn't adding up. It wasn't draining me as fast as I expected. One night, sitting amidst the ruins of a Flaxen command center, I flexed my fingers, feeling the tension in my muscles. Why am I still this strong? I muttered aloud. By now, I should be at mid-season 1 Mark levels of strength and speed, the guy who struggled to stop an asteroid. Then it hit me, the Codex. The knowledge it had implanted in me rushed back. The way my Kryptonian and Viltrumite genes interacted, the adaptability of my hybrid physiology. My Viltrumite genes were compensating, having adapted to my previous levels of strength and speed under the yellow sun, and reinforcing my Viltrumite strength. Even under this red sun, I was holding on to my powers longer than a regular Kryptonian ever could. I chuckled, leaning back against the crumbling wall. I'm not just getting stronger, I'm evolving. That's awesome. POV end. By the end of the 5th week, the drain of the red sun stopped affecting Mark entirely and left him about as strong as Anissa when she came to Earth. The Flaxen population had been reduced to a desperate few. Their once thriving civilization was in ruins, its infrastructure shattered, and its people near extinct. But they weren't finished yet. The last remaining military leader, driven mad by grief and rage, made one final attempt to stop Mark. Strapping himself with a makeshift bomb of Flaxen energy cores, the leader charged at him, screaming incoherently. Mark didn't flinch. As the leader lunged, Mark grabbed him midair and hurled him skyward. The explosion erupted harmlessly above, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. Mark stood in the ashes of their civilization, his chest heaving. It's done, he thought. They'll never come back to Earth again, and I can finally use this dimension as my personal fortress of solitude. Between battles, Mark used what little downtime he had to learn. Using his Kryptonian enhanced intelligence, he began deciphering the Flaxen language. After dismantling their military infrastructure and decimating their population, Mark turned his attention to what remained, their science and engineering. The Codex in his mind provided a foundation, a wealth of Kryptonian knowledge that allowed him to understand concepts that would have otherwise taken years to grasp. But with the Flaxen's technology at his disposal, Mark wasn't content to just learn. He was determined to innovate. One of Mark's first projects was redesigning his invincible suit. While armor was practical, he didn't like it. He wanted something more flexible, something that could adapt as fast as he could. Using Flaxen nanotechnology and insights from the Codex on chemical engineering, Mark conceptualized a suit that was more than just clothing. It would be an extension of himself. The process took weeks of trial and error. The result was a groundbreaking, environmentally adaptable fabric. The suit wasn't just clothing. It was a living system, powered by a small solar core that absorbed and stored energy. Mark ensured that the suit's energy requirements were minimal so that the majority of the stored solar energy could fuel his Kryptonian powers. The suit had several key features. Mental morphing. The suit was designed to respond to Mark's mental commands, allowing it to morph into different forms, including weapons, shields, or even new configurations tailored to specific scenarios. Environmental adaptation. The fabric adjusted to environmental conditions, providing warmth in extreme cold, cooling in intense heat, or even camouflage in hostile territories. Energy efficiency. Powered by a compact solar core, the suit's energy needs were minimal, leaving most of the stored energy for Mark's Kryptonian abilities. Durability and regeneration. The Flaxen nanotechnology made the fabric self-repairing, ensuring it could withstand extreme conditions and regenerate after sustaining damage. Mark poured weeks into designing and crafting the suit. He used Flaxen molecular engineering to weave nanobots into the fabric, allowing it to respond to his thoughts seamlessly. The solar core was a breakthrough in efficiency, capable of storing immense energy without taking up significant space. During the first test, Mark stood in front of a reflective surface, wearing his eye mask and the new suit in its default form. A sleek blue and yellow design reminiscent of his original Invincible costume, with the eye logo covering the solar core. "All right," he muttered, focusing on the suit. "Let's see if this works." The fabric rippled like water, shifting and reconfiguring. In an instant, a blade extended from his right arm, gleaming under the dim light. Mark turned his hand, and the blade morphed into a shield, its surface shimmering with a faint energy glow. "Not bad. I could add my tactile telekinesis shield on top of this one to make my shields even stronger," Mark said, a grin spreading across his face. He concentrated again, and the suit shifted back to its original form. "This is going to be fun." With the completion of his suit, Mark moved on to his next project. Using the Flaxen's advanced medical chambers and diagnostic systems, Mark began an in-depth study of his own biology. The Codex provided invaluable insights, but the Flaxen tech allowed him to visualize the intricacies of his hybrid physiology in ways he never imagined. His findings were both fascinating and exhilarating. The combination of his Kryptonian and Viltrumite DNA created a unique interplay. Kryptonian cells with Viltrumite smart atoms. His Kryptonian cells, designed to absorb and store yellow sun radiation, were fused with Viltrumite smart atoms. This made the cells far more adaptable and efficient than a standard Kryptonian's. Enhanced solar energy storage. The Viltrumite enhancements allowed his cells to store and process yellow sun energy at a higher rate, making his Kryptonian powers more potent than even long-exposed Kryptonians like Superman. Improved adaptability. The smart atoms allowed his cells to adapt to environmental conditions more quickly. Under a red sun, his Kryptonian abilities didn't fade as rapidly, and his Viltrumite physiology compensated for any weaknesses. This explains everything, Mark murmured, staring at a holographic projection of his cellular structure. I'm not just a Kryptonian with Viltrumite traits or a Viltrumite with Kryptonian powers. I'm something entirely new. He also used the Flaxen medical tech to build a regeneration chamber, a device that could heal injuries, restore energy, and even optimize his cells for better efficiency. I hate the idea of having weaknesses. I need to build immunity to high-frequency sonic waves, he said as he finished calibrating the chamber. With his biological studies complete, Mark turned his focus to physical training. The Flaxen's gravitational technology intrigued him, and he wasted no time building a high-gravity training chamber. The chamber could simulate gravity hundreds of times stronger than Earth's, forcing Mark's body to adapt to extreme conditions. Each session in the chamber was grueling. Strength training. Mark lifted massive Flaxen machinery, pushing his muscles to their limits. Speed drills. High-speed drones zipped through the chamber, firing energy bolts to train Mark's reflexes and agility. Endurance tests. Mark spent hours flying against simulated gravitational pull, honing his stamina. Martial arts. Mark incorporated Torquasm Rao and Torquasm Vo, Kryptonian martial arts, into his martial skill set. Torquasm Rao taught Mark discipline, control, and focus. Torquasm Vo strengthened Mark's mental defenses, making him nearly invulnerable to psychic attacks or emotional manipulation. But the gravity chamber wasn't his only innovation. Using Flaxen holographic technology, he created a sparring room capable of generating holographic copies of himself. These clones mirrored his movements, forcing him to fight opponents who thought, moved, and struck like he did. The first time he sparred with 3 holographic copies of himself, he barely kept up. Damn, I'm good, he muttered, wiping blood from his lip after taking a hard hit. But each session made him faster, sharper, and more disciplined. Mark didn't stop at biology and training. He also delved into the Flaxen's weaponry and interdimensional technology. Their energy weapons, while powerful, weren't perfect. Mark reverse-engineered them, memorizing their best features with his Kryptonian brain while discarding the flaws. Their portal technology, however, was a different challenge. Mark spent weeks studying the mechanics of their dimensional travel, experimenting with ways to control and stabilize the portals. He knew this knowledge would be invaluable, not just for returning to Earth, but for potential future battles across dimensions. By the end of his study, Mark had refined the Flaxen portal device into his special suit so he could open portals with his mind. It's sort of similar to Angstrom Levy's powers, he said, testing the new system. But to perfect it, I need Levy to study how his powers worked. Mark stood in the ruins of a Flaxen facility, his newly upgraded suit shimmering faintly in the dim red sunlight. His body ached from weeks of relentless training, and his mind buzzed with ideas. The Flaxen technology had given him tools to enhance his strength and intellect, but there was a deeper power he wanted to explore, something far more enigmatic than his physical abilities. Kryptonian Magi. The thought lingered in his mind, dredged up from fragments of memories implanted by the Codex and his past life. He recalled reading in Superman comics about how Kryptonian Magi were once powerful wielders of magic, isolating themselves as their civilization turned towards science and technology. The Codex within his soul wasn't just a key to Krypton's genetic legacy. It was a repository of knowledge and potential, and it had something he wanted, the genetic blueprint of the Magi. If they could harness magic through their genes, Mark muttered to himself, pacing the facility's central chamber, then so can I. He closed his eyes, focusing inward. The Codex wasn't just a source of knowledge, it was part of him. Its presence resonated in his soul, humming with untapped potential. If he could find the genetic material tied to the Magi, he might unlock something Kryptonians had long since abandoned. Mark began by using the Flaxen medical chambers to map his own genetic code. As he examined the results, the Codex's influence revealed itself. Strands of Kryptonian DNA shimmered with potential, the markers for his Kryptonian and Viltrumite traits intertwining seamlessly. There it is, Mark whispered, his eyes narrowing as he identified the dormant sequence. Buried deep within his Kryptonian DNA was the inactive genetic code of the Magi. It wasn't entirely dormant. The Codex ensured it remained viable. All he had to do was awaken it. The process was delicate and dangerous. Using the Flaxen bioengineering tools, Mark created a series of targeted genetic activators. He knew he was playing with fire. Manipulating his own DNA could have unintended consequences, but he couldn't resist the allure of unlocking magic. As the activators worked, Mark felt a strange warmth spread through his body. His senses sharpened, and the world around him seemed to glow faintly with an aura he hadn't noticed before. It's working, he breathed, a grin spreading across his face. This is incredible. The first sign of success came during a sparring session with his holographic clones. As Mark dodged a strike, his body instinctively emitted a faint pulse of energy, sending the clone staggering backward. He froze, staring at his hands. He spent the next several days testing his abilities, meditating, and focusing on the energy coursing through him. Unlike his Kryptonian powers, which were fueled by the sun, or his Viltrumite strength, which was intrinsic, this energy felt different, more fluid, more malleable. Mark delved deeper into the Codex's knowledge of the Kryptonian Magi. He discovered that their magic wasn't purely mystical. It was a fusion of biological adaptation and universal energy manipulation. With this understanding, Mark began to push his limits. He experimented with spells, using mental constructs derived from his Codex enhanced intellect. Elemental control. Mark summoned gusts of wind and created small flames, manipulating the environment to his advantage. Augmentation. By channeling magic through his body, he temporarily enhanced his speed and strength, amplifying his Viltrumite abilities. Dimensional anchoring. Using his understanding of Flaxen portal technology, Mark experimented with magic to stabilize and redirect dimensional energy, making his dimensional portal stronger. Mastering magic wasn't without its struggles. Unlike his Kryptonian and Viltrumite powers, magic required precision and patience. Mark's frustration often bubbled over during failed attempts. During one training session, Mark attempted to create a teleportation spell. The energy backfired, sending him tumbling across the chamber. Groaning, he picked himself up, glaring at the faint scorch mark on the floor. But each failure only fueled his determination. The Codex's knowledge gave him a roadmap, and his hybrid physiology ensured he could withstand the strain. Slowly but surely, Mark's control improved. As Mark's abilities grew, he uncovered an astonishing truth about his hybrid nature. With his Kryptonian cells being enhanced by the Viltrumite smart atoms, this adaptation amplified his Kryptonian magical potential. The smart atoms are acting like a magical amplifier, Mark realized during one of his meditative sessions. They're taking the energy I channel and boosting it, making my spells more potent. This is insane. The realization was exhilarating. 3 years in the Flaxen dimension had changed Mark in every way. Physically, he was stronger, faster, and more resilient. His Kryptonian Viltrumite biology had adapted beyond anything he thought possible, and his training had pushed his Viltrumite base abilities to new heights. Mentally, he was sharper and more focused. The Codex, combined with Flaxen technology, had expanded his understanding of science, engineering, and strategy. He wasn't just a fighter anymore. He was a tactician, an innovator, and a force to be reckoned with. As he stood in his newly upgraded suit, the fabric shimmering as it adjusted to his movements, Mark surveyed the ruins of the Flaxen civilization. He felt no regret for what he had done. This was necessary for his own growth, and now he had his own personal dimension that he locked down to outsiders using his magic. I'm not just invincible, he said, a confident grin spreading across his face. I've got magic now. The universe doesn't stand a chance. With that, he activated the portal and stepped through, ready to return to Earth and face whatever awaited him. Mark stepped through the shimmering portal and back onto Earth. The rush of yellow sunlight hit him immediately, and he closed his eyes as his Kryptonian cells surged with renewed energy. It was almost overwhelming. 3 years of red sun exposure in the Flaxen dimension had dulled his abilities, but now, under the yellow sun, he felt invincible. His strength doubled with each passing second, his senses sharpening to a level that made the world around him seem clearer than ever before. The air smelled fresher, the light was brighter, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt at home. Adjusting the environmentally adaptable suit that had been his second skin in the Flaxen dimension, Mark glanced down at his beard and chuckled. I look like I've been through hell. Well, I guess I have. As the portal closed behind him, he turned to see the team standing nearby, waiting with a mix of confusion and curiosity. Adam, Eve, Rex, Explode, Duplicate, and Robot looked like they hadn't moved from the spot since he'd entered the portal. Invincible, Adam, Eve said, her voice filled with equal parts relief and bewilderment. That was fast. Not for me, Mark replied, scratching his beard. Time works differently over there. You've been gone, like, 30 minutes, Rex added, crossing his arms. What the hell happened? Mark sighed, deciding to stick to the story he'd rehearsed. When I got there, I was captured by the Flaxens and thrown into a prison camp. It wasn't just me, though. There was another prisoner, an alien who'd been there for decades. He taught me a lot. Eve frowned, her eyes narrowing. Taught you what? Mark responded. How to fight better. How to push myself past my limits. And, most importantly, he taught me magic. Magic? Rex said skeptically. Yeah, right. Mark raised his hand, summoning a small orb of energy that crackled with a faint glow. The team stared in stunned silence as the orb hovered for a moment before dissipating. After I trained with him, Mark continued, I was strong enough to lead a revolt. We overthrew the Flaxen government, and I used my magic to lock down the dimension. No one from either side can cross over again. That's incredible, Eve said softly, her expression a mixture of awe and concern. Mark shrugged. It was a long 3 years, but it's done now. Anyway, I need a shower. I'll see you all around. Without waiting for a reply, he launched into the sky, leaving the team behind. Mark flew straight to the Global Defense Agency headquarters. Landing at the building's entrance, he made his way inside, nodding to the agents who gave him curious glances. In one of the observation rooms, he found Debbie, sitting by Nolan's bed. She looked up, and her expression shifted from worry to overwhelming relief. Mark, she exclaimed, rushing to him. She threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. You're okay? I was so worried when you went through that portal. Mark hugged her back, his grin softening. I'm fine, Mom. Really? She pulled back, looking him over. You look different. Older. What happened? Mark chuckled. Time moves differently where I was. It's a long story, but I learned a lot. Debbie nodded, her expression turning apologetic. I'm sorry, Mark. I feel like I've been neglecting you. With everything going on with your dad. Mark shook his head. It's okay, Mom. Honestly, the time away did me good. I'm so much stronger now, ready for anything. Before Debbie could respond, Nolan stirred. His eyes fluttered open, and he let out a soft groan. Debbie gasped, rushing to his side. Nolan, you're awake. Mark stepped back slightly as his father's eyes adjusted, locking onto him. For a moment, there was silence as Nolan scanned his son. His gaze lingered on the slight changes in Mark's frame, the subtle signs of greater strength, and the beard that hadn't been there before. Mark, Nolan said, his voice low. You look different. Stronger. Mark shrugged, trying to keep his tone casual. You know me. Always training. Nolan's brow furrowed, but he said nothing more. Debbie interrupted the tension, smiling through her tears. Let's get you home, Nolan. It's time for all of us to get back to normal. The following morning, Mark stood in the backyard of their home, freshly shaved and ready to spar. He stretched, the yellow sun warming his skin as Nolan approached, dressed casually, but exuding his usual air of authority. You've been training, Nolan said, his tone even but his eyes sharp. I can see it. Mark smirked, stretching his arms. 3 years of nonstop training. I'm not the same guy I was before. You're not even going to touch me. Nolan raised an eyebrow, the faintest hint of amusement tugging at his lips. Big words. Let's see if you can back them up. Mark took his stance, the air around him humming with the subtle energy of his prepared muscles. You asked for it. Nolan moved first, a blur of speed as he lunged at Mark with a punch that would have flattened most opponents. But Mark was faster. He sidestepped effortlessly, his movements precise and fluid. Nolan's fist struck empty air. Nolan pressed harder, throwing a flurry of punches and kicks, each one calculated and devastating. But no matter how fast or strong he moved, Mark was always a step ahead. His reflexes were sharper, his speed blinding. Nolan couldn't land a single hit. Mark grinned, relishing the moment. Come on, Dad. I thought you were supposed to be the strongest. Nolan's frustration built, and he launched himself at Mark with all his strength. But Mark caught the punch midair, twisting his father's arm, and sending him sprawling with a single palm strike to the chest. Nolan hit the ground hard, staring up at his son in disbelief. Not bad, huh? Mark said, extending a hand to help him up. Nolan accepted the hand, pulling himself to his feet. His mind raced as he studied his son. He's not just stronger than me. He's far beyond anything I expected. This could complicate things, but I can't deny it. I'm proud of him. You've come a long way, Mark, Nolan said, brushing himself off. I'm proud of you. Mark smiled, though there was a glint of determination in his eyes. Thanks, Dad. But this is just the beginning. I'm going to keep getting stronger. Nolan nodded, though inwardly his thoughts churned. His strength might make things difficult, but he's still my son. When the time comes, I'll need to get him loyal to the Viltrum Empire. Mark strolled into school, his backpack slung lazily over one shoulder. The morning buzz of students filled the halls as he approached the lockers, where his best friend William stood waiting. Morning, Will, Mark greeted, his tone casual. Hey, man, William replied, closing his locker. Did you see the news last night? That new hero, Invincible? The dude's insane. He took on an alien invasion, flew into their portal, and came back with a beard. Mark chuckled, scratching his freshly shaved chin. Yeah, I heard about it. William leaned inconspiratorially. Can you imagine? 1 minute you're stopping a robbery, and the next, you're leading a revolt in some alien dimension. That guy's gotta be hardcore. Mark smirked. I'm alright, I guess. William blinked, his brow furrowing as he processed Mark's words. Wait, what? I'm invincible, Mark said with a nonchalant shrug. William froze, staring at Mark like he'd just announced he was an alien. You're joking. Mark shook his head, his smirk growing wider. Not joking. William grabbed Mark's shoulders, his eyes wide. Wait, you're serious? You're invincible? The guy who fought aliens, flew into their portal, and came back with a freaking beard. That's me, Mark replied, enjoying his friend's reaction. Though the beard's gone now, William's mouth opened and closed as he struggled to form words. You're a superhero. My best friend is a superhero, and you didn't think to mention this before. Mark shrugged. Secret identity and all that. Plus, I figured it'd be more fun to tell you this way. William groaned, rubbing his temples. I can't believe this. You're just casually dropping this bombshell on me like it's no big deal. Before Mark could respond, a voice interrupted them. Hey, Mark, Amber said, walking up with a confident smile. Mark turned to Amber, giving her a friendly nod. Hey, Amber. Amber leaned against the lockers beside him, her smile playful. So, I was wondering, got any plans this weekend? There's this art exhibit downtown I think you'd like. Mark hesitated for a moment, but before he could respond, he caught sight of a familiar face further down the hall, Adam Eve. Without thinking, he straightened up, his attention shifting. Sorry, Amber, Mark said, stepping away. I'll have to get back to you on that. Amber's smile faltered. Wait, what? Mark walked toward Eve, leaving Amber standing there in stunned silence. She turned to William, her arms crossed. Is he dating her or something? William, still reeling from the earlier revelation, shrugged. I don't know anything anymore. Amber huffed, crossing her arms. Unbelievable. She stormed off, muttering under her breath. Mark stopped in front of Eve, who was busy grabbing books from her locker. Hey, he said, his tone casual. We didn't get a chance to talk much yesterday. Eve glanced up, her brow furrowing. Do I know you? Mark smirked. Guess you don't recognize me without the beard. Eve's eyes widened as realization hit her. Wait, you're invincible. Guilty as charged. Name's Mark Grayson, Mark replied, shrugging. The clean-shaven look threw you off, huh? Eve laughed softly, closing her locker. Well, that's not something you hear every day. Name is Samantha Eve Wilkins. What are you doing here? School, Mark said simply. Gotta keep up appearances, right? Eve studied him for a moment. You don't seem like a rookie with the way you fought yesterday. Mark shrugged. I've trained a lot. My dad's been a hero for years, so I guess it runs in the family. Really? Eve asked, intrigued. Who's your dad? Mark hesitated, keeping his tone light. Just someone who's been around a while. Eve nodded, clearly curious, but not pressing further. Well, welcome to the world of superheroing, Invincible. You should come by the Team HQ sometime. I think the others would like to meet you. Mark grinned. Sounds like fun. After school. As they left the school grounds, Eve glanced at Mark with a mischievous glint in her eye. Team HQ isn't far from here. You ready to fly? Mark smirked. Always. Without warning, Eve shot into the air, a trail of pink energy shimmering behind her. Try to keep up, Invincible, she called over her shoulder. Mark grinned. His school clothes shifted into his invincible costume and launched himself into the sky, the wind whipping past his face as he quickly closed the distance between them. The city stretched out below, a blur of buildings and streets as the two heroes raced across the skyline. You're pretty fast, Eve called out, her voice teasing as Mark caught up beside her. But can you do this? With a flick of her hands, Eve created a glowing pink ramp in midair, using it to slingshot herself forward. The sudden burst of speed widened the gap between them. Mark laughed, his voice carrying through the wind. Not bad, but watch this. He leaned forward, pushing his speed to the limit. The air around him rippled as he broke through Eve's lead, the pressure building around him like a sonic boom. He glanced back with a cocky grin. Still keeping up? Eve smirked, unfazed. You're not the only one with tricks. She conjured a series of energy platforms, bouncing off each one with incredible agility. The pink light danced around her as she darted ahead of Mark, her movements fluid and precise. Mark couldn't help but admire her skill. She's good, he thought, but he wasn't about to let her win. He tilted his body, angling downward to use gravity to his advantage, then shot back up, intercepting her path just as they neared the industrial district where the HQ was located. Eve's eyes widened slightly as Mark pulled ahead, but she quickly recovered, grinning as they approached the team building. The two landed on the rooftop almost simultaneously, their laughter echoing in the quiet evening air. Not bad, Eve said, brushing her hair out of her face. For a rookie, Mark smirked, crossing his arms. Rookie? I just beat you. Barely, Eve shot back, her smile playful. Let's call it a tie. Mark chuckled. Deal. That was fun. Eve gestured toward the entrance. Come on, let's head inside. The others are probably wondering where we are. As they walked into the HQ, Mark couldn't shake the grin on his face. Flying's fun, but flying with her? Even better. The team headquarters was tucked away in an industrial area, its exterior unassuming, but hiding state-of-the-art technology inside. As they entered, Mark took in the futuristic design, his eyes darting between the advanced tech lining the walls and the familiar faces waiting for them. Rex Splode was the first to speak, his voice dripping with sarcasm. So, this is the guy who stole all the glory yesterday. Rex, Eve warned, shooting him a look. What? Rex said, throwing up his hands. I'm just saying. He looks like he's already got a big head. Mark smirked, unbothered. Nice to meet you too. Duplicate offered a polite smile. Ignore him. He's always like this. Robot approached, his mechanical form whirring softly. Your suit. It's remarkable. May I inquire about the material? Mark glanced at Eve, who nodded encouragingly. He extended his arm, and the suit rippled, forming a blade that glinted under the fluorescent lights. It's adaptable. Robot sensors focused on the transformation. Fascinating. Did you design it yourself? Mark nodded. Yeah, I made it while studying flaxen technology. Took a lot of trial and error, but it was worth it. Robot tilted his head slightly, his curiosity clearly piqued. I would like to study it further. The material could provide invaluable insights. Mark shook his head, his tone firm but polite. Sorry, not happening. It's one of a kind, and I'm keeping it that way. Robot's sensors whirred faintly, but he nodded in understanding. I respect your decision. Eve chuckled. Don't take it personally, Robot. Mark's just protective of his work. The rest of the visit was filled with casual conversation and playful banter. Mark quickly realized that Rex was just as much of a jerk as he'd seemed in the comics, but the rest of the team was welcoming. By the time he left, he felt comfortable with the team and left them his contact in case they needed his help. Underneath the dim light of the Guardians of the Globe's headquarters, Cecil Stedman stood amidst the aftermath of the massacre. The room was eerily silent, the metallic tang of blood still lingering in the air. The walls were splattered with crimson streaks, and the bodies of the Guardians had already been carefully removed, leaving only the brutal signs of their struggle behind. Cecil adjusted his coat and sighed. Whoever did this didn't just kill, they sent a message. A low growl of disapproval interrupted his thoughts. Blood speaks, came the raspy voice of Damien Darkblood as he emerged from the shadows, his glowing eyes scanning the room. Cecil didn't flinch. He had grown accustomed to the demon detective's unnerving presence. What do you see, Damien? He asked, his voice steady. Darkblood knelt near a darkened stain on the floor, his clawed fingers tracing the edge of a massive blood splatter. Violence. Precision. Rage, he muttered, his voice gravelly. This was not a battle, it was an execution. Cecil nodded grimly. That much is clear. The Guardians didn't stand a chance. Darkblood straightened, his trench coat swaying as he turned to face Cecil. The question isn't how, it's why, and by whom. Cecil sighed, rubbing his temples. It's a mess, and it's going to stay a mess unless we get control of this narrative. Darkblood turned to face Cecil, his raspy voice cutting through the quiet. Omni-Man, last one standing. Blood tells his story. Cecil took a step closer, his tone sharp. And what? You think accusing Earth's greatest hero of murdering its greatest team is going to help anyone? You don't have proof, Damien. Darkblood gestured to the bloodstains, the shattered armor, the destruction surrounding them. Proof is here, in blood, in carnage. You choose not to see. Cecil's voice rose, his frustration boiling over. I don't need you telling me what I see. What I see is a situation that could destroy this planet if handled wrong. If no one did this, and I'm not saying he did, we don't need you stirring the pot. Darkblood stepped closer, his glowing eyes blazing with intensity. Truth must come to light. Secrets will destroy you. Cecil's face darkened, his voice dropping to a dangerous tone. You think you're untouchable, huh? You're only here because I let you be here. You keep pushing this, and I'll send you straight back to hell. Darkblood held Cecil's gaze for a long moment before stepping back, his trench coat swaying as he turned toward the shadows. You fear the truth, but it's already here. Blood whispers, and it doesn't lie. Without another word, the demon detective disappeared into the darkness, leaving Cecil standing alone amidst the wreckage. He exhaled sharply, adjusting his glasses as he turned to face the scene. If it's him, we're not ready. Not yet, he thought, his mind already racing with contingency plans. Looking at the bloodstained walls one last time, Cecil muttered under his breath. Nolan, you better have a damn good explanation for this. The Grayson household was peaceful that morning. Debbie hummed softly as she flipped pancakes. Nolan sat at the table with his newspaper and coffee, and Mark leaned against the counter, still waking up. While his body didn't need to sleep with his Kryptonian physiology, his mind couldn't get rid of the habit from his human years. A sudden knock at the door broke the tranquility. Debbie frowned, setting the spatula down as she went to answer it. Standing at the door was Cecil Stedman, his signature calm but stern expression immediately putting the household on edge. Cecil? Debbie asked. What brings you here? Cecil stepped inside, nodding to Debbie before turning his attention to Nolan. We've got a situation. He's back. Mark tilted his head, intrigued. What's going on? Cecil ignored the question, focusing on Nolan. You've encountered him before. Nolan folded his newspaper with a deliberate slowness, his eyes narrowing. If it's who I think it is, it's not a big deal. Just some alien that shows up every now and then. I fight him for a while. He gives up, and I throw him back into space. Mark inwardly thought. Alan, Cecil continued. He just passed Mars and will be in our atmosphere within 15 minutes. Debbie glanced at Nolan, worried. What are you talking about? Nolan just got out of the hospital. Nolan sighed. This guy's not that tough, just super annoying. I'll handle it real quick. Mark stepped forward, his expression confident. I've got this. All eyes turned to him as his casual clothes shimmered and morphed into his invincible suit, the adaptable fabric responding instantly to his thoughts. Debbie raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. Do you always have that on? Mark smirked. Pretty much. Nolan studied him for a moment before giving a small nod. Just hold your breath. You don't need to breathe in space. Mark returned the nod, his grin widening. Got it. Cecil opened his mouth to say something, but Mark was already gone, launching himself into the sky with a sonic boom. Breaking through Earth's atmosphere, Mark slowed his ascent, letting the golden rays of the sun wash over him. His Kryptonian cells surged with energy, the warmth of the sunlight amplifying his already immense strength. This feels incredible, he thought, his senses sharpening as he basked in the sunlight. His supervision flickered, scanning the vast expanse of space. That's when he saw it, an orange blur moving at incredible speed, headed straight for him. Mark tilted slightly, floating out of the blur's path with ease. Mark shifted slightly, casually floating out of the blur's path. The figure zipped by, stopping and turning back. It was a muscular orange alien with only a single eye. The alien grinned, communicating with Mark's mind. You're good. Let's see what else you've got. Mark smirked. All right, let's dance. Alan unleashed a flurry of punches, each one faster than the last, but Mark met them with ease. Dodging, blocking, and countering. He found himself enjoying the spar. Not bad, Mark thought. But let's see how you handle this. Mark suddenly closed the distance, throwing a punch that connected squarely with Alan's chest. The impact sent Alan hurtling through space, tumbling uncontrollably until he collided with the surface of the moon. Mark winced. Oops, didn't mean to hit that hard. Alan floated back into view, coughing blood and clutching his abdomen. Okay, you got a hell of a punch. Mark approached cautiously, his concern evident. You all right? No. Alan telepathically communicated, his voice laced with pain. Pretty sure, I am dying. Mark placed a hand on Alan's wound, summoning the magical energy he had honed during his time in the Flaxen dimension. A soft golden light enveloped Alan's injury, quickly knitting the torn muscles and organs back together. Alan blinked, his expression shifting to surprise. What was that? Magic, Mark replied. Unbeknownst to either of them, Alan's body began to subtly change. Mark didn't know it, but his single casual punch put Alan in a near-death state, triggering Alan's innate ability to grow stronger after recovering from severe injury. The process was slow but already taking effect. Alan rubbed his abdomen. Well, you're officially the coolest guy I've fought. And trust me, I fought a lot. My name is Alan, by the way. Mark chuckled. Mark Grayson, what are you doing here? Alan shrugged. Coalition of planets sent me. Standard procedure. Gotta test Urath as champion, and make sure you can handle any big threats. You passed. Mark raised an eyebrow. Urath? He said, correcting him with a small smirk. This is Earth. Alan blinked, tilting his head in confusion. What? This is Earth, Mark repeated, his tone amused. Not Urath. Alan's eyes widened, his hand still clutching his healed wound. Wait, are you serious? Did I? Oh no, I'm at the wrong planet. This is so embarrassing. I need to. Hold on. Mark interrupted, raising a hand to stop Alan as the alien began to panic and turn to leave. You said you were sent to test Earth's, or Urath's, protector, right? What exactly are you protecting it from? Alan hesitated, his expression growing serious. Well, it's complicated. Mark floated closer, his expression calm, but his tone probing. I've got time. Alan sighed, the humor in his telepathic voice replaced by a weightier tone. There's this empire, the Viltrumite Empire. They're the worst kind of threat, a conquering race of superpowered beings who don't stop until every planet in their path bends to their will. The coalition of planets sent me to make sure Urath has someone strong enough to handle them if they ever decide to show up here. Mark kept his face neutral, though inwardly his heart raced. He's finally talking about it. After a moment, he spoke, his voice steady. I know about the Viltrumites. Alan's eyes narrowed, his wariness immediately returning. You know about them? How? Because I am one, Mark said, his tone calm and deliberate. Alan froze, his glowing eyes widening in disbelief. He instinctively floated back, his body tensing. You're Viltrumite. His telepathic voice carried a mixture of shock and alarm. You've got to be kidding me. I'm not, Mark said calmly, holding his hands up to calm the alien. But hear me out. I'm not like them. Alan didn't relax, his voice sharper. How can I believe that? Viltrumites don't protect planets. They conquer them. Mark floated closer, his tone measured. I'm half Viltrumite. My dad is one of them, but my mom is human. I was raised here on Earth, and I'm not interested in destroying this planet. I quite like it, he joked. Alan studied Mark for a long moment, his gaze searching. If your dad's here, it's not by accident. Viltrumites don't just settle down on random planets. He's here for a reason. I know, Mark admitted. That's why I want to understand more about the Viltrumites. What I'm up against. Alan's eyes softened slightly, though his caution remained. You're serious about this? You're not just saying it to get me off your back. Mark nodded, his gaze steady. Dead serious. If I wanted to conquer Earth, I wouldn't be standing here trying to convince you I'm on its side. Alan sighed, his tense posture relaxing slightly. Well, if you're telling the truth, you might just be the best hope Earth has. He reached into a small compartment on his belt, pulling out a sleek, circular device. Here, it's a coalition communicator. It's encrypted. Only I or the coalition leaders can send messages to it. I'll report this to the coalition. They'll want to know about you and give you a call. Mark took the device, gripping it tightly. Thanks. I'll be sure to answer. Alan hesitated for a moment before nodding. I hope you're as different as you say you are. Because if the Viltrumites find out you're not on their side, they'll come for you. And they won't stop until you're dead. Mark smirked faintly, the fire in his eyes undeniable. Let them come. I'm ready. Alan chuckled faintly, though the weight of his words lingered. You've got guts, kid. I'll give you that. He floated back. With that, Alan gave a mock salute and shot off into the void, leaving Mark floating in the golden sunlight, gripping the communicator in his hand. Mark smirked to himself. He intended to use Alan as a catalyst to hasten the Viltrum Empire's arrival. Knowing there were Viltrumite moles within the Coalition Council, he planned for Alan to report his presence back to the Coalition, setting his strategy into motion. Mark continued to float in space, enjoying the feeling of as soon as he grew stronger. He contemplated dipping into the sun, but he wasn't sure if his suit could survive the temperatures of the sun just yet. He'll have to test that out. For now, he just glided through space, drinking in the sun's rays. The real funeral for the Guardians of the Globe was somber and quiet, a heavy rain falling as mourners gathered around their graves. Mark sat beside Eve, dressed in a simple black suit, his mind racing as Nolan stood at the podium delivering a heartfelt eulogy. Nolan's voice was steady as he spoke about heroism and sacrifice, but Mark could see through the facade. While the world mourned their fallen heroes, Mark was thinking about his father, the man he loved but knew was torn between his family and his purpose. Despite everything, Mark had decided to change his father's mind or beat him up until he changed it. He may have already had a father in his past life, but the feeling he felt as he grew didn't change that he still cared about Nolan as his father. Mark's focus shifted momentarily to his ultimate plan, proving to the Viltrumite Empire that he and his father carried the bloodline of Argal, the last Viltrumite leader. If he could do that, they would be able to claim leadership of the Empire and reshape its brutal legacy. But to get there, Mark needed them to test his or Omniman's blood. Eve nudged him gently. You okay? Mark blinked, realizing he had been lost in thought. Yeah, just thinking. She gave him a small, understanding smile, and they turned their attention back to the ceremony. Later that evening, Mark sat in his room, still mulling over the funeral and his plans when his phone buzzed. The screen lit up with an unknown number, but when he answered, the voice on the other end was unmistakable. Hey Mark, it's Amber. William gave me your number. Hey, Mark replied, surprised. What's up? Amber's tone was casual but playful. I was thinking, maybe you want to hang out? Just the two of us. Mark hesitated. She's nice, but he thought about the vast difference in their lifespans, the inevitability of loss. Amber, I don't think. Oh, come on, she interrupted. You help me deal with Todd. The least I can do is say thank you. Mark sighed, eventually giving in. All right, where should I meet you? Amber gave him her address, and soon Mark was flying over the city. When he arrived at her house, he landed discreetly and waited a while before knocking on her door. Amber answered wearing a red silk robe, her confident smirk catching him off guard. Amber, what do you do? She cut him off, stepping closer. Mark Grayson, you've been playing hard to get. I just wanted to thank my hero, and I figured I'd do it properly. Despite his initial reluctance, Mark found himself swept up in the moment. Amber's forwardness was something he wasn't used to, but it was clear she wasn't going to take no for an answer. While he had started dating in his new life, he had not experienced losing his virginity in either lifetimes. Let me start. Amber wrapped her arms around Mark's head, giving him a few tentative kisses at first, but when Mark started to reciprocate, she began diving in with a passion. Mark's lust elevated, and he lifted Amber with ease, wrapping her legs around his waist. He began walking towards her room with her pointing the way out for him, but not letting their lips come apart. When Mark and Amber reached her room, Mark threw her on top of her bed with her letting out a cute giggle. Mark quickly took off his shirt and pants, leaving him in just his boxers, and laid next to her, continuing their makeout session. Panting, Amber says, I've never done this before. It's my first time. Mine too, claims Mark. Taking the first step, Mark starts off by grabbing Amber's breast over her lingerie while kissing her. He holds it in his hand and begins to move it around gently, giving it occasional squeezes. Amber lets out a quiet moan when Mark lightly pinches her nipple. Mark opens Amber's robe, then moves his hand further down until it touches Amber's outer edges. She was already bare under the robe, as if she had been preparing for this. He starts off with lightly caressing them, occasionally rubbing her nub. Amber clasped her hand over her mouth to prevent the loud moan that was about to leave her lips when Mark's fingers slowly started to enter her core. Mark continued to finger Amber, enjoying her reactions as she tried to hide the pleasure she was feeling until eventually, she gave in to the feelings of pleasure and with a yelp began orgasming over Mark's fingers. Huff huff, that felt amazing, said Amber, catching her breath. She flipped over, taking Mark's shaft in her hand while giving it a kiss. My turn. Amber took Mark's member in her hand, giving it a few gentle strokes. Wow, it's pretty big, she complimented before she tilted her head and stretched out her tongue, giving it a lick. Mark shuddered. He had used the Kryptonian art of Turquoise MVO to control the amount of power he output, lowering the extent of his bioelectric aura and invulnerability to increase the sensations of pleasure he was feeling and prevent himself from hurting Amber. After a few licks, Amber eventually took Mark's member into her mouth. She wasn't very good at first due to inexperience, but the longer it went on, the more she improved and got into the flow of it. She was trying not to gag as she tried to stuff the back of her throat with his cock. Amber continued to take charge, bobbing her head up and down, licking with her tongue, and pressing her face against his pelvis. She stayed like that for a moment before pulling away and coughing a little. Amber wiped a strand of saliva from her face. After grabbing a pack of condoms from her dresser, she put one on Mark's cock and laid back on the bed with Mark getting on top of her. Please, Mark, put it in me, Amber stated. Mark lined himself up with Amber's tight snatch and began to gently insert himself inside of her. Oh, Amber moaned in a mix of pain and pleasure as she felt Mark's big cock split her hymen. Hold on, it hurts a little. They stayed like that for a minute as they continued kissing with him still inside of her. Okay, you can move, Amber stated. Mark started off with soft and slow thrusts. Then, he started to speed up his movements, and Amber's pussy started to gush at the fast, intensive pace that Mark set. He continued pounding Amber in missionary, and wanting to increase her pleasure, he sat up and reached down to her clit. Using his super speed, he began vibrating his fingers and rubbed her clit. Amber immediately felt the effects as her eyes shot open, and she clutched the pillow above her head and let out a loud shriek, and she began violently squirting, spraying liquid all over Mark's chest and cock. Huff huff, Amber panted. That was better than me doing it myself. Mark just grabbed her by the hips and aligned himself with her. Who said we were done? He questioned. I haven't even came once yet. As Mark said that, he plunged his member inside of Amber's pussy. Amber let out a loud moan at this and continued moaning as Mark continued thrusting into her. For a while, all that could be heard in the house was the sounds of clapping cheeks and moaning. Mark was enjoying his first time having sex. The sensations were unlike anything he ever felt and could see himself getting addicted to it. Eventually, after a few strong thrusts, his cock swelled up inside her, shooting thick ropes of semen, which were captured by the condom. Amber felt stiff, feeling another climax envelop her as she felt Mark's hot and thick semen gushing inside of her. Amber pulls off the condom and proceeds to stick her tongue out and drink the semen inside of the condom. She never tasted semen and relished in the flavor of Mark's essence as she soon swallowed it. Lemon end. Mark and Amber both fell on the bed feeling exhausted and euphoric. They had just shared an intimate moment, but afterward, Mark felt compelled to tell her the truth. He didn't want to do so right after having sex, but he knew the sooner, the better she would be able to move on, even if that meant she hated him. Amber, he began after a couple of minutes. We can't be together. She frowned, wrapping herself in the robe. Why not? Mark sat up, his tone serious. I'm not like other guys. I'm an alien. I'll live for centuries. I don't want to hurt you by building something that can't last. Amber's eyes widened. Wait, what do you mean? Mark sighed. Do you know that new hero, Invincible? That's me. I don't really care about my secret identity. It's just there for privacy. But I want to tell you because I'm not only a hero, but a Viltrumite alien, so it can get dangerous for you, and I live a very long lifespan. Amber's eyes widened, but she took the revelation surprisingly well. Your kind lives for centuries? Mark nodded. Yeah, we do. While you would grow old after half a century, I will stay how I look now. Amber looked conflicted but eventually smiled sadly. I get it, but can we still be friends? Of course, Mark said, relieved. She leaned closer, brushing her lips against his. Even if I can't have forever with you, I want to enjoy moments like this. Mark sighed, conflicted, but kissed her again, giving in to the fleeting comfort. Mark stepped out of Amber's house, the midday sun shining brightly. His thoughts were still swirling from his conversation with Amber, her openness and acceptance lingering in his mind. He looked up, preparing to launch himself into the air when a sudden shimmer of energy materialized in front of him. Cecil Stedman stood there, arms crossed, his trademark composed yet authoritative demeanor in full effect. Mark, Cecil said, his tone brisk. I need your help. Mark raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. You always seem to have great timing, Cecil. Cecil didn't flinch. The new Guardians of the Globe aren't ready for action yet, and we've got a situation. I need you to step in. Mark sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, I'm not really interested in working under the government. Cecil cut him off, his gaze firm. This isn't about us. It's about the people you can save. Innocent civilians. You have the power to help them. Mark paused, considering Cecil's words. He didn't trust the GDA fully, but the thought of people getting hurt when he could prevent it weighed on him. Finally, he nodded. All right, what's the situation? Cecil handed him a small earbud. Dr. Seismic is attacking Mount Rushmore. Don't ask me why. He's unhinged, as usual. I've already dispatched Eve to meet you there. You'll work together to stop him. Mark took the earbud, slipping it in. Got it. Without another word, Mark leaped into the sky, his casual clothes morphing seamlessly into his invincible suit mid-flight. He adjusted his trajectory, flying toward Mount Rushmore with the wind rushing past him. Midway through the flight, Mark spotted a familiar pink streak in the sky. He matched its speed, catching up to Adam Eve, who looked unusually tense as she flew ahead of him. Hey, Eve, Mark called out, his voice light. Ready to save Mount Rushmore? Eve glanced at him, her face tight with frustration. Yeah, let's just get this over with. Mark frowned, noticing her mood. He had a pretty good idea of what was bothering her, but decided not to push. All right, but if you need to talk, I'm fine. Eve snapped, cutting him off. Her tone softened slightly when she added, "Thanks, though." Mark nodded, respecting her space as they continued toward the monument. When they arrived at Mount Rushmore, chaos greeted them. Civilians were screaming and scrambling to get away as massive boulders were hurled down the mountain. Dr. Seismic stood atop a ledge, wearing his signature sonic gauntlets, which vibrated with destructive energy. His loud, theatrical voice boomed across the area. "These faces on this mountain are a symbol of oppression," Seismic shouted, firing his gauntlets to dislodge another chunk of rock. "I'm here to bring them down and free the people from this facade of..." Mark rolled his eyes, tuning out the monologue. "Why do villains always have to give a speech?" he muttered. "Mark," Eve said, her tone sharp. "I'll handle the civilians. You focus on him." "Got it," Mark replied, already moving. Eve flew down toward the fleeing crowds, creating pink energy barriers to deflect falling debris and guiding people to safety. Meanwhile, Mark locked eyes on Seismic and shot forward, moving faster than the human eye could follow. In an instant, Mark was in front of Seismic. His suit morphed around Seismic's gauntlets, the advanced fabric breaking down the weapons and absorbing their materials into its arsenal. Seismic barely had time to register what was happening before Mark tapped the side of his neck, knocking him out cold. "He's all yours," Mark said, pressing his earbud. Mark caught Seismic's unconscious body before it hit the ground and flew down to where a portal shimmered into existence. GDA agents stepping through. The agents nodded, pulling the unconscious villain through the portal as it vanished. Mark turned back to Eve, who had finished evacuating the civilians and now hovered nearby. "That was fast," she said, a note of admiration in her voice. "You didn't even let him finish his speech." Mark smirked. Heroes with super speed really shouldn't have trouble dealing with monologuing villains. It's just common sense. Eve chuckled lightly but still looked distracted. Mark studied her for a moment before speaking. "Hey, you okay?" Eve hesitated, then shook her head. "I'm fine." "You're a terrible liar," Mark said gently. "Come on, let's go somewhere we can talk." Eve looked at him for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "All right." Mark led the way, flying back toward his house, the weight of Eve's unspoken sadness hanging between them. When they arrived at the Grayson home, Mark led Eve to his room through the window. She sat on his bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she stared at the floor. "Rex cheated on me," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "With Duplicate." Mark's heart sank, even though he'd known this was coming. "Eve, I'm sorry. That's awful." Eve wiped her eyes, trying to stay composed. "I thought he cared about me, but I guess I just didn't matter enough to him." Mark sat beside her, his voice gentle but firm. "What Rex did wasn't about you, Eve. It was about him. He made a choice, and it was the wrong one. You deserve so much better." Eve looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion and tears. "You really think so?" Mark nodded. "Absolutely. And maybe this is a chance for you to figure out what you want, without Rex holding you back." Eve's gaze softened, and for a moment, she leaned closer, her face inches from his. But before anything could happen, the door opened, and Debbie walked in. "Mark Grayson," she exclaimed, her voice full of maternal authority. Mark blurred into action, using his super speed to put some distance between himself and Eve, making it look like they'd just been sitting and talking. Debbie crossed her arms, giving Mark a pointed look. "You're too young to be bringing girls home unsupervised." Mark winced. "Mom, I was just consoling a friend. She's having a rough night. Plus, I'm practically an adult." Debbie's expression softened slightly, though she still gave Mark a suspicious look. "Fine. Eve, would you like to stay for dinner?" Eve started to decline, but Mark cut in. She'd love to. The Grayson family sat around the dinner table, the mood light. Debbie passed plates of food while Nolan and Mark engaged in small talk. Eve stayed quiet, her mind preoccupied until she turned to Mark. "So," she asked, "is your dad Omni-Man?" The question hung in the air, and Mark exchanged a glance with Nolan before nodding. "Yeah, that's him." Eve's eyes widened in awe. "Wow, that's a lot to live up to." Mark smirked faintly. "Tell me about it." The conversation continued, and for a moment, everything felt normal, just a family dinner with friends. But Mark knew that this fragile peace wouldn't last forever. The Viltrumite Empire loomed on the horizon, and it was going to experience massive change. Meanwhile, in space, Alan had just finished his report to the Coalition Council, informing them about a half-Viltrumite who not only pledged to aid their cause, but also possessed strength surpassing that of his Viltrumite father. The very same individual Alan had previously unknowingly been testing as Earth's champion. When Alan finished reporting, he was called to a private meeting room with Thetis, the Coalition leader. Thetis leaned back in his chair, his sharp gaze fixed on Alan. "Excellent work, Alan," he said, his deep voice carrying a note of approval. "Finding a Viltrumite willing to aid our cause is no small feat, let alone one with the strength to already rival his father." Alan grinned, scratching the back of his head. "Thank you, sir. Honestly, it felt like I just got lucky." Thetis chuckled softly, then leaned forward. "Luck or not, you've accomplished something significant. But tell me, have you noticed any changes in yourself recently?" Alan blinked, confused by the question. "Changes? What do you mean?" Thetis gestured toward him. "Your build, your musculature. You've grown stronger." Alan looked down at himself, taking in his slightly bulkier frame. His muscles were more defined, his body exuding a strength he hadn't noticed before. Flexing his arm experimentally, he marveled at the change. "Huh, I didn't even realize." Thetis's expression grew thoughtful. "When the Unopans genetically engineered you, they designed your body to adapt and grow stronger after recovering from near-death experiences. Have you had any such experiences recently?" Alan's brows furrowed as he thought back to his last encounter with Mark, Invincible. The memory of that single devastating punch came rushing back. "Actually, yeah, during my last visit to Earth, Invincible hit me with a punch that almost killed me." Thetis's eyes widened in shock. "A single punch?" Alan nodded, still a little awestruck at the memory. "Yeah, I've never felt anything like it. I thought I was done for." For a moment, Thetis was silent, his expression shifting from surprise to excitement. If that's the kind of power Invincible already wields, then he could be the key to turning the tide against the Viltrumites. He smiled, his voice filled with hope. "I'm glad you left him a communicator. We'll need to reach out to him soon." Alan nodded in agreement. He's definitely someone worth having on our side. Later that evening, Alan was seated across from his girlfriend, Telia, in a cozy restaurant on a Coalition station. The atmosphere was warm and lively, filled with the hum of quiet conversation and the clinking of utensils. Telia huffed at him, resting her chin on her hand. "You've been gone too long. Can't you at least try to visit more?" Alan laughed softly, leaning back in his chair. "I guess I've been working a lot. I could take the time to dash." Before Alan could finish, a deafening explosion ripped through the wall of the restaurant. Debris scattered as the airlock seals activated, shielding the station from depressurization. Screams erupted as patrons ducked for cover. Alan was dragged out of the space station by 3 Viltrumites who were hovering in space, looking menacingly at him. The leader, a tall, scarred male with an aura of cold authority, floated forward. His eyes locked onto Alan, unyielding. "Alan the Unopan," he said, his voice like ice. "We've heard rumors about a hybrid Viltrumite on Earth. Give us information about him." Alan's jaw tightened, his stance unwavering. "I don't know what you're talking about." The leader smirked, his expression turning predatory. "Don't play dumb. You've been to Earth. We know you've met him. Now talk, or we'll make you talk." Alan grinned despite the tension. "Why don't you try?" Inside the restaurant, Alan's girlfriend watched in horror as the restaurant repaired the breach, the shimmering energy field re-establishing the barrier. She pressed her hands against the glass, her eyes wide as she saw Alan struggling against the attackers. Without warning, one of the Viltrumites shot forward, punching Alan further into the vacuum of space. One came from above, throwing a devastating punch that Alan barely managed to block. The impact sent him hurtling backward, but he recovered quickly, propelling himself toward the attacker with newfound strength. "Let's see how tough you really are," Alan growled, landing a punch that sent his opponent flying. The leader, however, was ready. He intercepted Alan mid-charge, slamming a fist into his abdomen with enough force to crack one of Alan's ribs. Alan gritted his teeth, refusing to give the leader the satisfaction of seeing him falter. He countered with a swift uppercut, the force of the blow causing the leader to lose his grip on Alan briefly. Alan spun to face his remaining attackers, his muscles burning with exertion. Despite his newfound strength, the three Viltrumites worked together like a well-oiled machine. Their movements were precise, their strikes relentless. Alan managed to incapacitate one of them, grabbing the Viltrumite by the leg and hurling him into an asteroid with a bone-crunching impact. But the effort left him vulnerable, and the leader capitalized on the opening, delivering a crushing blow to Alan's back. The two remaining Viltrumites circled Alan like vultures, their confidence growing as they sensed his exhaustion. Alan swung at the leader, but his punch was slower now, easier to dodge. The leader caught his arm, twisting it painfully before slamming Alan into the station's hull. Inside the restaurant, Alan's girlfriend cried out, her fists pounding against the glass. She watched helplessly as the Viltrumites brutalized him, her heart breaking with every blow. The leader leaned in close to Alan, his voice cold and mocking. You're resilient, I'll give you that, but you're still just a bug to us. With one final, devastating punch, the leader sent Alan hurtling away from the station, his battered body spinning uncontrollably through space. The two Viltrumites hovered for a moment, their gazes following his trajectory. We've sent our message, the leader said, his tone dismissive. Let's go. The two Viltrumites turned, grabbed the incapacitated Viltrumite, and sped off into the void, leaving Alan drifting and broken. The city was alive with the hum of activity, from bustling streets to the distant rumble of construction. Amidst the urban chaos, a streak of yellow and blue darted through the sky, closely followed by a pink glow. Mark, in his invincible suit, glanced over his shoulder at Eve, who was flying beside him with her characteristic grace. Not bad for a morning, huh? Mark said with a smirk, pointing to the unconscious villain they'd just left tied up for the authorities below. 3 arrests and a robbery foiled, and it's not even noon. Eve replied, matching his smirk. We make a good team. Mark grinned. You know, we should make this official. A dynamic duo. What do you think? Eve raised an eyebrow. You're serious? Why not? Mark shrugged, dodging a flock of birds as they soared over a park. We work well together. Plus, I could use a cool partner. Eve laughed, her earlier irritation from personal issues momentarily forgotten. All right, Invincible. You've got yourself a deal. Official superhero duo. Nice, Mark said, punching the air triumphantly. Eve rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smile. You're such a dork. Despite his new partnership with Eve, Mark balanced his personal life with surprising ease. His Kryptonian speed and memory allowed him to breeze through schoolwork in record time, ensuring his grades stayed top-notch. Even with his growing responsibilities as a hero, he made time for Amber, though their interactions leaned more toward physical intimacy. Though, occasionally they would just hang out as friends, even including William at times. Between activities like bowling, boba runs, and their shared moments at her house, Mark felt like he was keeping everything together. It was lunchtime at school, and Mark sat across from William at their usual table. William was mid-rant about some new TV show when the conversation took an unexpected turn. Okay, but seriously, William said, eyeing Mark's sandwich. Do you ever get bored of normal food with all your super senses? Like, how does a PB&J even register? Mark smirked. I mean, I can taste every flavor in insane detail. So yeah, ordinary food tastes great, but I still have my preferences. William opened his mouth to ask more, but he was interrupted by Amber and Eve approaching their table. Hey, Mark, came a voice from behind. Mark turned to see Amber, her confident smile lighting up her face. Mind if I sit with you guys? Amber asked, her tone casual, but her eyes focused on Mark. Before he could reply, another voice chimed in. Hey, Mark, is it okay if I join you? Mark glanced to his other side, spotting Eve standing there, holding her tray. Her expression was calm, but there was an undercurrent of curiosity in her eyes as she noticed Amber standing there too. The two girls looked at each other, their polite smiles barely masking the questions swirling in their minds. Amber's gaze shifted to Eve's, assessing her, while Eve's eyes briefly flicked to Amber before settling back on Mark. Sure, both of you can sit, Mark said, gesturing to the empty seats at the table. Amber and Eve sat down, flanking Mark on either side. The tension between them was subtle, but noticeable. While Amber leaned in slightly toward Mark, her posture relaxed as if this was familiar territory. Eve's presence was more reserved yet attentive. Both seemed to radiate unspoken intent, their motivations clear to William, but apparently lost on Mark. Before either could speak, William cut in. Hey, Mark, wanna hang out later? Maybe hit the arcade. Mark shook his head. Can't. I have a meeting with the principal. I'm planning to take 2 weeks off for a trip. William frowned. 2 weeks? What kind of trip? Mark shrugged casually. Just something I need to handle. Amber frowned slightly, her curiosity piqued. You're being awfully vague. Eve nodded, her expression thoughtful. Yeah, 2 weeks is a long time. Standing up and grabbing his tray, Mark began walking away but looked back. Just flying to Mars, he said casually while leaving the cafeteria. The previous evening, Cecil had visited the Grayson household. Sitting at the dining table with Debbie, Nolan, and Mark, Cecil explained the mission. We have a team of astronauts launching tomorrow, Cecil said. They're headed to Mars, and we need someone to keep an eye on them. Quietly, Nolan leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. I have responsibilities here. I can't be off planet for that long. Cecil's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't push. Fair enough. Mark leaned forward. Sure, why not? Nolan gave him a skeptical look. It's Mars. Do you even know how far that is? Mark smirked, gazing upward as if looking through the ceiling. I could probably get there in 30 minutes. Debbie frowned. What are you looking at? The surface of Mars, Mark said nonchalantly. Debbie blinked. How? Magic eyes, Mark replied, grinning. X-ray vision for walls, supervision for distance, and heat vision for, well, heat. To demonstrate, he fired a small beam at Debbie's coffee mug, reheating it perfectly. Debbie stared, speechless and pleasantly surprised. Nolan's expression darkened, his thoughts clearly racing. Cecil raised an eyebrow, more thoughtful than surprised. Magic, Nolan muttered, narrowing his eyes. No Viltrumite has ever had magic. My son might become the most dangerous being in the history of Viltrumites. Cecil's mind was equally active. If Omni-Man really did kill the Guardians, Mark might be the only one capable of stopping him. But would he choose Earth over his father? Mark leaned back, smirking at their stunned faces. I'll handle Mars. Consider it done. The day of the astronauts' launch arrived. Mark watched from a distance as their rocket ascended into the atmosphere. Once it was out of sight, he leaped into the sky, donning his invincible suit mid-flight. His helmet crackled to life as Cecil's voice came through the comms. Remember, stay hidden. The astronauts can't know you're there. Got it, Mark replied. I'll do a preliminary sweep of the planet first. I want to make sure there's no trouble waiting for them. Cecil hesitated. Fine, just keep us updated. Mark blasted off, the Earth shrinking behind him as he pushed his speed. In less than 5 minutes, he reached Mars, far surpassing his earlier estimate. He touched down gently on the planet's surface, the red sand swirling around his boots. Using his X-ray vision, Mark located a hidden hatch leading to the Martian kingdom. He pried it open and dropped into the tunnel below, greeted by the stale, metallic air of the underground city. Mark descended into the dimly lit tunnels of the Martian underground, his footsteps echoing softly against the metallic floor. The air was thick and stale, tinged with a metallic scent that reminded him of rusted iron. His X-ray vision scanned the walls as he walked, and his heightened senses picked up faint skittering sounds, sequence. A group of the parasitic creatures emerged from the shadows, their slimy tendrils writhing as they lunged at him. Gross, Mark muttered. With a quick burst of heat vision, the sequids were vaporized, their remains sizzling into nothingness. Well, that's a good start. Moments later, Martian guards appeared, their tall, elongated forms clad in intricate armor that shimmered faintly under the dim red lights. They leveled their weapons at Mark. Raising his hands in a gesture of peace, Mark explained that he wanted an audience with their king. After a tense moment, they gestured for him to follow. The journey to the throne room was a winding path through expansive corridors and massive chambers filled with alien architecture. The deeper they went, the more Mark marveled at the advanced civilization hidden beneath the barren Martian surface. Finally, the throne room came into view. It was a grand chamber, its walls adorned with crystalline patterns that reflected the soft glow of red orbs suspended in the air. At the center of the room sat the Martian king on an obsidian throne. His imposing figure radiated authority, his piercing gaze fixed on Mark as he entered. "What business do you have here, Earthling?" the king demanded, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. Mark stepped forward, his tone steady. "In 2 weeks, humans will land on the surface of Mars. I'm here to make sure your people avoid them." The king's expression hardened. "That cannot be allowed. If the Sequids bond with the humans, they will form a hive mind capable of destroying Mars and other planets." Mark folded his arms, meeting the king's gaze. "Then let me deal with the Sequids. They can't attach to me due to my Viltrumite heritage, and I can wipe them out before the humans arrive." The king leaned back on his throne, his features unreadable as he considered Mark's proposal. Finally, he nodded reluctantly. "If you can eliminate the Sequids, the humans will have nothing to fear from us. But failure is not an option." Mark smirked. "Don't worry, I'm not planning on failing." Mark wasted no time. With his X-ray vision, he scanned the planet, locating clusters of Sequids hidden in underground layers and deep crevices. His super speed allowed him to traverse vast distances in mere moments, and his heat vision proved to be the perfect weapon against the parasitic creatures. In one cavern, a massive swarm of Sequids writhed and pulsed, their collective movements creating an almost deafening chittering sound. Mark hovered above them, his heat vision glowing red as he unleashed a controlled beam that swept through the swarm, reducing them to ash. "Okay, that's one nest down," he muttered, dusting off his hands. "Only a million more to go." He moved methodically, ensuring no Sequid escaped his notice. His precise control over his powers allowed him to clear nests without causing collateral damage to the Martian environment. In one particularly large nest, he used his super speed to create a vortex, drawing the Sequids into a concentrated area before incinerating them in a single burst of heat vision. By the time he returned to the throne room, a single day had passed, and every last Sequid on Mars had been eradicated. The Martian king rose from his throne, his expression one of genuine gratitude. "You have done Mars a great service, Invincible. The humans may come without fear, and our people will remain safe. We are in your debt." Mark gave a small bow, smirking. "Just doing my job. Glad I could help." Back on the Martian surface, Mark spoke to Cecil. "Mission complete. I'll keep an eye on the astronauts for when they arrive." "Good work," Cecil replied. "Stay sharp." Mark glanced upward, his gaze settling on the sun. He set aside his helmet and oxygen tank. He knew he never needed them as he could hold his breath for a very long time, use the yellow sun to fuel his cells instead of oxygen, and even use his magic to create a perpetual pocket of air around him. Mark then lifts off the planet and casts an invisibility spell that works by passing photons right through him unfazed, making him blind to satellites. Mark launched himself into space, his speed leaving a crimson streak behind. As he approached the sun, the intense heat and energy enveloped him, his cells absorbing every ounce of power. He hovered near the surface, feeling a euphoria unlike anything he'd experienced before. "This is incredible," he murmured, his voice a mix of awe and excitement. With cautious precision, he descended into the sun's outer layers, the searing energy coursing through him. He didn't want to overload his cells like All-Star Superman did in the movie. However, he looked at himself and saw his Kryptonian cells made up of his Viltrumite smart atoms adapting to the extreme conditions and enhancing his durability. His cells were now durable enough that they couldn't overload from taking in too much sunlight. Feeling that he would be fine, Mark dives deeper into the sun's core. "I can feel it, my strength growing," Mark thought, his body vibrating with newfound power. Using Turquoise Vo, he entered a meditative state. His mind hovered in a half-awake, half-asleep state, allowing him to monitor the astronauts' progress while simultaneously focusing on mastering his heightened abilities. After days in the sun's core, Mark sensed the astronauts nearing Mars. With a burst of speed, he left the sun, the distance from its core to Mars covered in less than a second, moving even faster than he had been when coming to Mars from Earth. He landed softly beside his helmet and oxygen tank, donning them once more as if nothing had happened. "The astronauts are safe," he reported to Cecil. "Mission accomplished." "Good work, Mark," Cecil replied. "Come home." As Mark began his return journey to Earth, he couldn't resist testing his newfound abilities. Flying at speeds faster than ever, he zipped through asteroid fields and performed high-speed maneuvers with ease. Each movement felt effortless, his body fully attuned to its enhanced capabilities. Meanwhile, aboard a Viltrumite warship speeding toward Earth, the 3 Viltrumites who had attacked Alan sat in tense discussion. Their leader leaned forward, his tone firm. "The Coalition's intel confirms it. The Viltrumite agent who was assigned to Earth procreated and has a son who isn't loyal to our empire. However, it's unclear if the agent is also a traitor. We'll crush him," one of his subordinates snarled, slamming a fist into the table. The leader smirked. "Just in case the agent is also a traitor, I've called for reinforcements." The ship's doors opened, revealing Anissa, a Viltrumite with a towering air of authority. She stepped forward, her piercing gaze locking onto the others. "You called for help?" she asked, her tone dripping with confidence. The Grayson household was quiet when Mark landed outside after his mission on Mars. Opening the front door, he called out, "I'm home," but immediately regretted it. The faint sound of rustling fabric and hurried movements came from the living room. His father, Nolan, was attempting to look casual, but failing miserably. His hair was disheveled, and his shirt was hastily buttoned. His mother, Debbie, had her face flushed and her shirt on backward. Mark stopped mid-step, his expression shifting to disgust. "Gross," he muttered, shaking his head and heading up to his room. Behind him, Debbie's eyes widened in horror as she whispered to Nolan, "Do you think he saw us with his X-ray vision?" From upstairs, Mark's voice came through loud and clear. "He's got your shirt on backward." Debbie groaned, covering her face with her hands as Nolan looked sheepish. "Well," Nolan said, "he's not wrong." The next morning, Mark stood in his room, focusing intently as he extended his hands outward. A faint shimmer of light appeared in the air before him, swirling and twisting until it formed a portal glowing with golden energy. Mark stepped through, entering the Flaxen dimension of solitude. The dimension, once the home of the Flaxens, was now his personal sanctuary. Advanced technology, both salvaged and modified, filled the space. A glowing control console stood at the center of the room, surrounded by various projects in progress. One of these was a restoration chamber, a sleek device Mark had designed to reverse the effects of aging. He'd been experimenting with Monster Girl's blood, samples taken in both her human and monster forms, and exposing them to the dimension's time dilation to better understand her curse. This should revert her to her proper age, Mark muttered as he adjusted the chamber's settings. It's not a permanent fix, but it'll buy her more time. Satisfied, he turned his attention to other projects. One was a device designed to halt aging altogether. Mark envisioned giving it to his human loved ones so they could stay together for millennia. Nearby, a prototype for a weaker version of his fluid fabric suit lay on another table. Mark planned to patent and sell it to the public, using the profits to establish his own business empire. Next to it was a transdimensional locator, which he was developing to detect interdimensional portals. He had one specific target in mind, Angstrom Levy. Mark's smirk widened as he imagined the possibilities of accessing Levy's knowledge of the multiverse. All coming together, he said to himself before stepping back through the portal. Back at home, Debbie sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her laptop. Damian Darkblood's accusations lingered in her mind, creating a storm of doubt. Did Nolan really kill the Guardians? She wondered, tapping her fingers on the table. Her thoughts were interrupted by Mark, who descended the stairs with his backpack slung over one shoulder. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, noticing her distracted expression. Debbie forced a smile, shaking her head. "I'm fine. Just thinking." Mark raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. His eyes drifted to the pile of papers on the table. "Is that mine?" he asked. Debbie nodded. 2 weeks worth of homework. I hope you didn't forget. Mark chuckled, setting his backpack down. I got it. In a blur of motion, he zipped through the worksheets, his pen flying across the pages. Within seconds, the stack was complete, and he stuffed it into his bag. Debbie blinked as Mark headed for the door. Sometimes I wish I had Viltrumite's speed, she muttered, turning back to her laptop. At his locker, Mark swapped out his books when 2 familiar voices called out at the same time. Hey, Mark. Amber's cheerful tone came from the right. Hey, Mark. Eve said from the left, her voice calm but curious. Mark turned to see both girls standing there. Amber's bright smile faltered slightly as she noticed Eve, and Eve's composed demeanor tightened when her gaze shifted to Amber. The two exchanged polite but wary nods before focusing on Mark. The 2 girls exchanged polite but wary nods before looking back at Mark. How was your trip? They asked in unison, then frowned at each other. Mark grinned. It was cool. Flying in space was exciting, a real out-of-world experience. Reaching into his backpack, he pulled out 2 small rocks, each wrapped in a clear pouch. I got these from Mars. One for each of you, and one for William. Amber and Eve stared at the rocks in stunned silence as Mark closed his locker. See you in class, he said, walking off with a small smirk. As he left, he heard their voices behind him. You knew. They exclaimed simultaneously, pointing at each other. Mark suppressed a laugh, mentally noting, I love dropping bombs on people. After school, Mark arrived at the Guardian's base. Monster Girl, Amanda, was waiting for him in one of the lounges. After talking to each other about how Mark would help her with her curse, they had decided to share their identities. She glanced up as he entered, a mix of curiosity and hope in her expression. Hey Mark, she said. You said you had something to show me? Mark nodded, gesturing for her to follow. Yeah, I've been working on a way to help with your situation. I can't fix it completely yet, but I can at least revert you to your original age. Amanda's eyes widened. Seriously? You can do that? Mark grinned. Seriously. Mark gestured for her to follow. He didn't want to display his portal magic around Robot or in the Guardian's base, so he scooped her up in his arms and took off into the sky. Amanda yelped in surprise but quickly adjusted, clutching his shoulders as he flew. Mark soared over the ocean, his bioelectric aura shielding Amanda from the intense wind resistance. After a few moments, he opened a portal midair, slowing down into his lab in the Flaxen dimension. Amanda looked around, her jaw dropping. Where are we? My private lair, Mark said with a grin. Magic helped me make it. He led her to the restoration chamber, a sleek device glowing faintly with green energy. Amanda hesitated as she stepped inside, her expression nervous. This isn't going to, melt me, is it? Mark smirked. Relax. It'll hurt a little, but I've made it as painless as possible. The chamber will pump a nutrient-rich solution into your system to ensure your body grows without being deficient in the nutrients your body needed. Also, it will blast you with rays of temporal energy, reverting you back to your proper age. Amanda nodded, steeling herself as Mark closed the chamber's door. The machine hummed to life, bathing the interior in green light. Amanda's screams echoed briefly as her body rapidly aged back to its original state. When the chamber powered down, smoke hissed from its seams. Mark opened the door, his eyes widening as Amanda stepped out. She was now a fully grown 24-year-old, her once childish clothes straining against her Kavya, adult frame. Amanda glanced down at herself, a mix of immense joy and embarrassment crossing her face. I feel taller. Before either of them could say anything else, her shirt gave out, ripping down the middle. Mark blinked, his mouth slightly agape. Damn. Mark's eyes lingered on Amanda's exposed chest longer than he intended. She quickly crossed her arms over herself, cheeks flushed, but her lips curled into a flirtatious smirk. Well, did you like the show? Amanda teased, her tone both embarrassed and daring. Mark chuckled awkwardly, turning his gaze away. I should have thought about your clothes. My bad. Amanda took a step closer, her playful smile softening into something more vulnerable. It's okay, she murmured. I haven't been in my adult body for so long. I almost forgot what it's like to feel like this. Her voice cracked, and before Mark could react, Amanda leaned forward, pressing her lips to his. The kiss caught him off guard, but he didn't pull away. When she stepped back, her eyes glistened with unshed tears. What was that for? Mark asked gently. Amanda wiped at her face, sniffling. I've missed this, being able to feel close to someone, being intimate. I don't want to waste this chance, and you helped me, so I want the first person to be you. Let me start. Without waiting for a reply, she let her remaining clothes fall to the floor, leaving herself bare. Mark, momentarily stunned, blinked as he processed her forwardness. She was beautiful, confident yet vulnerable. Despite his initial confusion, Mark found himself drawn to her honesty and allure. Amanda, finding Mark's intensive gaze flattering, leaned in again and kissed him with a hunger that he reciprocated. His hands landed on her plump, but gripping them firmly while sticking his tongue in her mouth, momentarily overwhelming her. Amanda stopped the strong kiss, letting herself catch a moment of air, but she gave a quick yelp when Mark scooped her up into his arms. He started carrying her to a room near his lab that he built as his personal bedroom when he is in the Flaxen dimension and wants to let his mind rest or be intimate with someone. Kicking open the door, the room was very big with its own adjacent bathroom, a balcony, a king-sized bed, and even a hot tub. Mark plopped Amanda onto the bed and after taking off his clothes climbed on top of her. Amanda took a good look at Mark while he was undressing and on top of her. I like what I see, she said as she dragged her fingers across Mark's abs. Mark started trailing, kissing down Amanda's body, from her neck to her breasts, until he reached her inner thighs. He gave them a quick kiss before giving a quick like on the outer edges of her pussy. MMF, moaned Amanda as she clutched the back of Mark's head. Please, hurry up. Mark then dug in with a hunger. He moved his tongue all around Amanda's insides, leaving her squirming. She continued to alternate between grabbing Mark's head and trying to bring it deeper or gripping the bed sheets. The pleasure was completely different from what she had expected due to a combination of having someone go down on her for the first time in years and Mark speeding up his tongue's movements like a vibrator. After a few minutes of this, Amanda started coming violently. Oh my god, screamed Amanda, as her hips lifted into the air and she started squirting like a fountain. That was amazing, she panted. We aren't done yet, stated Mark, planning to continue their sexual escapades. But before they continued, Mark had realized one thing. Shit, we have no condoms. After realizing they didn't have any condoms, he had planned on them just using their mouths and hands to prevent the risk of pregnancy. However, before he could even bring up the idea, Amanda had mounted him with a wild look in her eyes. She had already grabbed Mark's member and was lining it up to her entrance. I don't even care about a condom. Right now, all I need is the stick inside me, Amanda said as she lowered her hips with Mark penetrating her pussy. In. She moaned as she sat with Mark halfway into her pussy. It had been a long time since Amanda had sex, and even though she was extremely wet and wanted it, she wasn't mentally prepared for the reemerged feelings of having a dick in her pussy. This is so much better than I remember, moaned Amanda as her full, thick ass was bouncing up and down Mark's cock. This is incredible, thought Mark. The way Amanda bounces is more aggressive compared to the usual sex I have with Amber. Not wanting her to do all the work, Mark moved to match Amanda's thrust with his own. Your delicious pussy is going to make me come soon, stated Mark. Please Mark, come inside. I want to feel our hot jizz inside me, shouted Amanda. They then began ferociously kissing each other, tongues out wrapping around the others. I'm coming, exclaimed Mark, who wasn't thinking at the moment and focused on releasing his cum into Amanda's pussy. Yes, I'm coming again, exclaimed Amanda, tongue sticking out as she felt the warmth enter her core and lay sprawled out on Mark's chest. Afterward, Amanda lay beside Mark, a satisfied smile on her face. I could get used to this, she said with a playful wink. What do you think? Mark smirked, sitting up and pulling a small case from his desk. If we're doing this, you're going to need something better to wear. Here. Inside the case was a sleek, custom-fitted version of his weakened fluid fabric, tailored for her needs. This suit is designed to adapt to your transformations, Mark explained. It'll change shape and design based on what you need, and it's practically indestructible. Amanda sat up, taking the suit in her hands. You made this for me, she asked, her voice soft. I had the idea in mind for someone with your abilities, Mark admitted. But yeah, I thought you'd like it. Amanda leaned forward, pressing a lingering kiss to his lips. Thank you, Mark, she whispered, her tone flirtatious again. You keep this up, and I might never let you go. Mark laughed, shaking his head. Come on, let's get back before the rest of the Guardians start getting suspicious and looking at me like I'm Diddy. Mark created a portal above the ocean, flying through it with Amanda in his arms. When they arrived at the Guardians HQ, the team turned to greet them but froze upon seeing Amanda. Her now adult body, combined with her confident demeanor, left them stunned. Rex whistled, his eyes wide. Monster girl? More like monster babe. Robot, however, analyzed the situation silently. His sensors picked up on the subtle changes in Amanda's posture, the faint marks on her skin, and the way she leaned slightly on Mark for support. He quickly deduced the truth. They had been intimate. Inwardly, Robot's human consciousness bristled. He had developed feelings for Amanda and had planned to use the Mauler twins to create a new body to win her affection. Mark's intervention had disrupted his plans and sparked a simmering resentment. Robot didn't say anything, but his mind raced. I'll continue my plan for a new body, but I'll also prepare for contingencies, including Mark. What Robot didn't notice was that Mark was aware of his gaze on him. He inwardly thought, seems like I'll have to deal with him soon. Mark then shifted his focus back to the rest of the Guardians who were asking him questions, and Monster Girl, who kept shifting his arm between her big boobs. A few days later, Mark flew over the city as Invincible, his mind preoccupied. With the patent for his fluid fabric finalized, he was strategizing ways to fund his business when something caught his attention, a message painted on a rooftop, Invincible. Standing next to it was Titan. Mark floated down to the rooftop where Titan waited, his incomplete name painted in large, bold letters across the surface. The sight stirred a faint memory from his past life, Titan's betrayal from the comics. As Mark landed, he took a moment to assess the situation. Titan stood with his arms crossed, looking determined. You went through a lot of trouble to get my attention, Mark said, his arms folded as he hovered a few inches off the ground. Aren't you that criminal I took down a while ago? What do you want? Titan took a step forward, his voice firm but edged with frustration. I need your help. Machine Head's ruining my neighborhood. Our neighborhood. He's squeezing the life out of it, driving people into the ground just to line his pockets. Mark questioned, keeping his tone neutral. You need my help to take him down? Titan exhaled heavily. Yeah, Machine Head's untouchable. He's got money, connections, and goons will do anything for him. People are suffering, and I can't do this alone. All right, Mark said. Let's take him down. Lead the way. Titan looked surprised momentarily, expecting Mark to be one of those snobbish superheroes who focused on the big picture before nodding. Thanks, Invincible. You won't regret this. Oh, I know, Mark said cryptically. Mark then grabbed Titan under his arms and had him lead him to Machine Head's building. The pair arrived at Machine Head's opulent skyscraper, its reflective glass shimmering under the city's lights. Titan led Mark to the top floor, the elevator ride filled with a tense silence. Mark could feel the weight of Titan's gaze on him, but he kept his thoughts to himself. When the elevator door slid open, they were met with a room of sleek furniture, gold accents, and Machine Head's mechanical voice cutting through the air. Well, look who's come to visit, Machine Head drawled, his voice dripping with smugness. He sat behind an extravagant desk, flanked by a lineup of his best enforcers, Tether Tyrant, Furnace, Magmaniac, and Kursk. You must be invincible, Machine Head said, his glowing eyes narrowing. Big fan of your work. Too bad you won't be around long enough to enjoy the perks of hero life. Mark rolled his eyes. Let me guess, you're going to send these guys at me while you sit back and watch. Machine Head's grin widened. You catch on quick. Tether Tyrant's tentacle-like weapon shot out first, aiming to ensnare Mark. Mark caught them midair, his grip unyielding. With a flick of his wrist, he yanked Tether Tyrant forward, slamming him into Furnace, who was charging up a blast of molten energy. Before Furnace could recover, Mark unleashed his freeze breath, a beam of searing cold that started freezing Furnace's suit and Furnace leaving a frozen block of rock. Magmaniac and Kursk moved in next, attacking in tandem. Magmaniac hurled molten projectiles while Kursk fired bolts of electricity. Mark dodged effortlessly, his speed allowing him to weave through the attacks with minimal effort. You're going to have to try harder than that, Mark said, smirking. He moved in a blur, appearing behind Kursk and knocking him unconscious with a single strike. Before Magmaniac could react, Mark's freeze breath blasted him with a freezing gust, encasing his molten form in solid rock, just like Furnace. Tether Tyrant tried to regroup, his tentacles flailing wildly, but Mark's tactile telekinesis took hold. The tentacles froze in midair and began wrapping around each other until they were in a jumbled knot. Done already? Mark asked, tossing the crumpled tentacles aside and knocking Tyrant out with a flick to the forehead. Pathetic. Machine Head's smug demeanor faltered as Mark stepped forward, but a deep, guttural growl filled the room before Mark could reach him. From the shadows emerged Battle Beast, his towering frame exuding menace and confidence. The warrior's golden eyes locked onto Mark, and a grin spread across his face. You, Battle Beast growled, pointing his massive clawed finger at Mark. I can feel your strength. You might be the challenge I've been seeking. Mark tilted his head, unimpressed. You've got a funny way of asking for a fight. Battle Beast didn't respond with words. Instead, he lunged forward, his mace swinging with the force of a wrecking ball. Mark sidestepped the attack with ease, the heavy weapon smashing into the ground and sending debris flying. That's some swing you've got there, Mark quipped, watching Battle Beast recover. But you're going to have to do better than that. Battle Beast roared, charging at Mark with a relentless series of attacks. His mace struck out in wide arcs, each blow powerful enough to obliterate walls, but Mark's speed allowed him to evade with almost casual ease. The room shook from the force of Battle Beast's strikes, cracks spreading across the walls and floor. Stop dodging. Battle Beast bellowed, his frustration mounting. Fight me seriously, or are you just a coward? Mark's smirk faded, his eyes narrowing. You want me to take this seriously? Fine. With a burst of speed, Mark closed the distance between them. Battle Beast's instincts kicked in, and he crossed his massive arms over his chest in an attempt to block Mark's incoming punch. Mark's fist collided with Battle Beast's defense in a thunderous impact. The force of the blow shattered both of the warrior's forearms, the bones snapping audibly as he was sent hurtling across the room. He crashed into the far wall, leaving a crater in the metal surface before crumpling to the ground. Battle Beast gritted his teeth, his breathing ragged from having his ribs piercing his lungs. His arms hung limply at his sides, mangled from the devastating strike. Despite his injuries, his eyes still burned with defiance as he pushed himself to his knees. Kill me, he rasped, blood dripping from his mouth. Let me die in battle, as a warrior should. Mark approached, his expression calm but resolute. Why die now when there are bigger battles ahead? There are beings, maybe not in this universe, but others, that could provide you with a better, more enjoyable fight than even I could. Battle Beast's ears twitched, his pain momentarily forgotten as curiosity replaced his battle lust. Others? What do you mean? I'm building something bigger than this world, Mark explained. An empire that spans dimensions. You could be part of it. Fight the strongest warriors across the multiverse, push yourself to your limits, and achieve true glory. Battle Beast studied Mark carefully, his breathing heavy but his spirit unbroken. You're either a fool or a visionary, Invincible. Either way, I'm intrigued. Mark crouched down, his hands glowing faintly with magic. Good, but first, let me fix those injuries. Battle Beast growled in protest as Mark used his magic to accelerate the warrior's healing. Within moments, his body was restored, the pain replaced by an unfamiliar warmth. Battle Beast started flexing his newly healed arms. Perhaps following you will lead me to the challenges I crave. He reached into a compartment on his belt and pulled out a small device. This opens a portal to me. Call when you're ready. Mark took the device, smirking. You won't regret this. Battle Beast chuckled darkly. We'll see about that. With that, he activated the portal and stepped through, disappearing into the unknown. Mark turned his attention to Machine Head and Isotope, who were frozen in shock. Before he could react, Mark moved with blinding speed, delivering a precise chop to the side of Isotope's neck. The teleporter collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Machine Head's voice stuttered as he backed away. Wait. We can talk about this, right? No need to get violent. Mark ignored him, stepping forward with purpose, placing a firm hand on Machine Head's metallic skull. In his past life, he had read on forums that Superboy could use his tactile telekinesis in a way that would grant him control of electrical signals, computers, and different forms of tech. He didn't think the Codex would be able to grant him such power since it was just an application of his tactile telekinesis instead of an ability that Superboy naturally possessed. With his hand on Machine Head's skull, Mark activated a combination of his tactile telekinesis, Kryptonian intellect, and lightning magic. Using this combination of abilities, Mark essentially gave himself a new ability, tactile technopathy. In moments, he hacked into Machine Head's systems connecting him to the internet, rerouting control of his entire criminal network to himself. His brain was capable of reading, memorizing, and sorting out all of the data he collected from Machine Head to his bank accounts, different passwords, etc. Mark pulled his hand back and tapped the side of Machine Head's temple, ejecting a computer chip that had his programming. He still had use for Machine Head, and even planned on studying how he was this sophisticated. Titan, standing off to the side, clenched his fists in anger. What the hell are you doing? This wasn't the plan. You were just supposed to beat him and turn him in. Mark turned to him, his tone calm but firm. You wanted Machine Head out of the picture. I'm taking care of it, personally. Titan stepped forward, his frustration evident. This isn't justice. You're just replacing him with yourself. Mark's eyes glowed red faintly, his voice sharp. And what was your plan, Titan? To take over yourself? Don't act like you're better than this. I could tell your true intentions, and I don't agree with them. Go home to your family. Don't worry. I will make sure that things for the neighborhood will change, for the better. Titan hesitated, his fists trembling before he finally turned and stormed out. Over the past week, Mark Grayson had started solidifying his influence in the city. Taking over Machine Head's business wasn't just about money or power. It was about building something better, something sustainable for the people who live there. He used Machine Head's resources strategically, funding his fluid fabric clothing business while also making changes to the city itself. Mark didn't waste time. He began by dismantling the most harmful aspects of Machine Head's operations, starting with drug trafficking and illegal arms dealing. Flying over the city with crates of confiscated weapons, he dumped them in a deserted area before unleashing his heat vision, reducing them to nothing more than molten slag. The drugs, he handled differently. With a flick of his wrist and a spark of magic, he transmuted the dangerous substances into harmless plants, ensuring they could never harm anyone again. The newfound funds from Machine Head's empire didn't sit idle. Mark poured money into local food kitchens, orphanages, and even Amber's community center, which he had told him about. He knew that real change required uplifting communities, not just tearing down the bad. While he had no official clientele for his business yet, he had plans. His fluid fabric was a revolutionary product, customizable clothing with properties like minor regeneration, resistance to temperature changes, bulletproofing, and shock negation from high impacts. Before moving on to the public, his company would sell these to law enforcement, firefighters, doctors, and private security firms. Also, he wouldn't just sell this to the USA, but worldwide, so as not to give one country too much power. Mark wasn't worried about anyone reverse engineering the technology. The fabric's creation was a blend of flaxen technology and Kryptonian intellect, far beyond anything Earth could replicate. He also had plenty of hidden failsafes that would always integrate into all his fluid fabric creations. To ensure quality control, he built specialized machines that would process raw fluid fabric into custom designs as per client specifications. He didn't want people around the raw fluid fabric in case of corporate spies or villains taking some and using it for potential evil, so he left all the work to robots and machines he built himself in his dimension of solitude. Though the GDA was an obvious potential customer, Mark decided to shelve the idea for now. Let them keep spying on me, he thought. They're not getting my tech unless I decide they're ready for it. Despite his growing responsibilities, Mark made time for his personal life. He fought crime with Eve, their teamwork improving with each outing. Their playful banter on patrols often ended with them laughing as they cleaned up after yet another supervillain. He hung out with his friends, William and Amber, too. With Amber, their time together was mostly intimate, punctuated by casual outings. Though Mark enjoyed her company, he couldn't shake the looming thought that he will eventually need to discuss their relationship. But, honestly, he was scared not to mention the fact that he also needed to talk to Eve about the growing sexual tension between them. Mark had noticed that oftentimes he would find Eve and Amber talking together as if they had become best friends. At times, he would walk up to them, and their conversation would die down in front of him with Eve often taking quick glances at him. He knew he could eavesdrop with his super hearing, but he wanted to give people their privacy, so he often turned down his super hearing. Even on their patrols, Eve would make explicit comments or find reasons to get close or touch him, all of which he didn't mind. One evening, Mark decided to visit Amanda, aka Monster Girl, at her home. She had been celebrating her return to adulthood and invited Mark over for drinks. Though he technically wasn't old enough to drink by Earth standards, he was by Flaxen standards, but Mark shrugged it off. Alcohol doesn't affect me anyway, he told her with a small smile, his physiology immune to poisons and toxins. Amanda noticed his somber tone. I guess being an alien means you can't drink, huh? Mark nodded slightly. This was one of the things he imagined while stuck in the hospital during his past life. Going out with friends, having a good time while drinking. Before he could respond, Amanda climbed onto his lap, her face inches from his. Well, if you can't enjoy a drink, maybe you can enjoy something else. She kissed him, and one thing led to another. After spending time with Amanda, Mark returned home. Debbie and Nolan were lounging on the couch in the living room. Using his X-ray vision, Mark noted the GDA agents stationed in the house across the street. Their surveillance annoyed him, but he let it slide as long as they didn't bug his room. How was your day, sweetie? Debbie asked as Mark grabbed food from the fridge. It's been fine, he replied casually. Just dealing with my new multi-million-dollar company. The silence that followed was palpable. Nolan and Debbie exchanged shocked glances before turning back to Mark. What do you mean multi-million-dollar company? Debbie asked, her voice laced with confusion. Mark chuckled, pulling out a plate of leftovers. Oh yeah? So, there was this villain I arrested a while ago who wanted my help to take down his boss. The guy was rich and running illegal operations, so after I stopped him, I took control of his assets and handed him off to the GDA. I've been using the money to fund a textile business and improve the city. Debbie blinked, trying to process what she'd just heard. Eventually, she walked over and kissed Mark on the cheek. Good job, honey, but you better not be full of empty promises like other rich business owners. And you still have to finish high school and college. Mark scratched the back of his head. Do I really need college though? I mean, I've got a long-term job now, he thought. Debbie crossed her arms and squinted her eyes at him. College isn't just about the degree. It's about the experiences you'll miss if you don't go, she said as if she had read his thoughts. Mark looked as if he was caught red-handed. Sure, Mom, he sheepishly replied. Nolan, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. While it's good that you're thinking about the future, you shouldn't lose sight of your responsibilities. Running a company takes time. Time you should be using to protect Earth. Mark leaned against the counter, his tone steady. It won't take much time, Dad. I've got super speed and machines doing most of the work. Before Nolan could argue, Debbie stepped in. Mark's been doing fine so far. His grades haven't slipped, and he's managing everything. But, she added, narrowing her eyes at Mark, if you fall behind in school or struggle to balance everything, the company goes. Fair enough, Mark replied, grabbing his plate. Nolan, however, wasn't done. Do you even know how to run a business? While Viltrumites can read fast, it doesn't necessarily mean we can understand everything we are reading. Mark considered his options. He didn't want to keep lying about his Kryptonian powers, but he also didn't want to reveal reincarnation and his past life. Taking a breath, he waved his hand, casting a spell that sealed the room. The GDA agents across the street scrambled to recover the visual and audio feed. But Cecil, who had just teleported in to check on the situation, quickly deduced it was Mark's magic. Let's wait it out, he told the agents. Rushing in now would be a mistake. Inside the sealed room, Mark turned to his parents. I didn't want to say this in front of Cecil before, but I actually picked up more than magic in the Flaxen dimension. Debbie and Nolan exchanged worried glances. Mark continued. I found a device there called the Codex, something that changed me. My body started absorbing solar radiation, giving me powers beyond my Viltrumite abilities, boosting my strength and speed, enhanced intelligence, heat vision, and X-ray vision. I didn't know what it was while there since it turns out I can't absorb red sunlight. But when I came back, and especially when I went to space, I could feel myself stronger and the powers coming in. Are you even still a Viltrumite? Nolan snapped, his voice low but brimming with tension. His eyes bored into Mark like he was trying to decipher what his son had become. Do you even understand what this means? What you're saying? Mark didn't flinch under his father's glare. He knew this reaction was coming. Yes, I'm still a Viltrumite, Mark replied evenly. That hasn't changed. My biology hasn't been replaced, just enhanced. Solar radiation supercharges my cells. I'm still me. I just have a few extra abilities now. Nolan's jaw clenched, and for a moment, his fists tightened at his sides. His mind raced. Viltrumites didn't need enhancements. They were already the strongest species in the universe. Yet here was his son, casually claiming he'd become something more. Can I make Mark loyal to the cause? Nolan wondered. Or has this enhancement pulled him further away from ever being a proper Viltrumite? Debbie, still processing, glanced nervously between the two of them. Should I schedule a doctor's appointment? Or, I don't know, a lab test or something? Mark chuckled, breaking the tension slightly. No, Mom. I'm fine. There are no side effects. Honestly, I'm probably the healthiest I've ever been. Debbie narrowed her eyes at him, skeptical. You're sure? Mark nodded. Positive. If anything, I feel stronger every day. And trust me, I've had plenty of time to check myself out. Besides, this makes me stronger. And you of all people should know strength is what matters, he said looking at his dad. The words hit Nolan hard, and for a moment, his composure cracked. He quickly masked it with a neutral expression, but internally, he was wrestling with a storm of conflicting, potentially treasonous thoughts. His son was already powerful, but now, with these enhancements, he didn't know whether to be proud or terrified. Could Mark be strong enough to face Thrag one day? What if he refuses to help the Empire? Would anyone be able to beat him? Debbie's voice broke through the silence, soft and full of concern. Well, as long as you're okay, Mark, that's what matters. But please, if anything changes, you let me know, all right? Mark smiled at her. Of course, Mom. I promise. He grabbed his plate and started heading upstairs after taking down his barrier, leaving Debbie and Nolan alone in the living room. Nolan remained seated, his thoughts racing as he stared at the spot where Mark had been standing. Debbie glanced at him, her concern shifting from their son to her husband. You're quiet, she noted cautiously. Nolan didn't respond immediately. When he finally did, his voice was low, just thinking how much our boy has grown. Debbie hugged him. Yeah, eventually he's going to be leaving the nest and starting his own family. Nolan just hugged her back, taking in her warmth, and for the first time in a while he stopped thinking about the mission and just focused on her presence. The sun hung low in the sky, casting warm hues across the city as Mark Grayson sat on his bed, scrolling through a web novel on his phone. After weeks of non-stop activity, building his company, fighting crime, and dealing with everything in between, he relished these moments of peace. For a few minutes, at least, he could pretend he wasn't burdened with the weight of superpowers, interdimensional threats, and a father who was hiding a dangerous secret. As he flipped the page of the story, a faint beep broke through the quiet. Mark's plain wristwatch, seemingly ordinary, began glowing red and vibrating. In an instant, it transformed into a sleek, high-tech device. The watch was linked to a microscopic drone he had discreetly placed on Robot during his visit to the Guardians HQ with Amanda. Cloaked with magic to evade detection, the drone had been lying dormant, waiting for any sign of contact with the Mahler twins. And now, the wait was over. Mark grinned to himself, watching the live feed as Robot showed the twins a vial of blood inside a dimly lit warehouse. Finally, he thought, time to deal with this before it becomes a bigger issue. With a simple thought, Mark's casual clothes morphed into his invincible suit. Activating a cloaking spell, he leapt out of his bedroom window, flying quickly through the evening sky toward the Mahler twins' location. Hovering high above the warehouse, Mark used his X-ray vision to observe the scene inside. Robot stood with the Mahler twins near a large regeneration chamber and memory transfer table, a blueprint for his plans for his new body spread out on a nearby table. The twins bickered, as always, about who was the clone, while Robot attempted to maintain order. Mark smirked. If I'm being honest, I would have taken out the Mahler twins weeks ago so that Robot wouldn't have even gotten the idea to create a new body, he thought. But I need them alive for Angstrom Levy to show up. His eyes landed on the chamber, a critical piece of equipment the twins would need to create new bodies to transfer their memories into. I can't mess with the transfer device since Angstrom might need it, but I can sabotage the chamber. Using his heat vision, Mark targeted a pipe connected to the chamber. With precision, he fired, causing a controlled explosion that shook the warehouse. The blast knocked the Mahler twins and Robot off their feet, sending the vial of blood crashing to the floor. What the hell? One twin yelled, scrambling to his feet. This is your fault, clone, the other snapped. You're too incompetent to follow basic safety protocols. Enough. Robot's mechanical voice cut through their argument as he stood. His sensors scanned the area, but Mark's cloaking spell rendered him invisible. I'll return with another sample. Continue working on the device and do not fail me. If you do, I'll build a prison under the sea and lock you both inside. With that, Robot turned and left the warehouse, completely unaware of Mark's presence. Mark remained in the sky, watching Robot leave. That should buy me some time, he thought. But eventually, I'll still have to deal with Robot hopefully, after Levy comes. And while I'm at it, I should dig up the Immortal's body before the twins get any ideas. I can use his DNA for my own research into immortality and see if I can grant it. Returning home, Mark could feel the tension in the air. Debbie sat in the living room, flipping through a magazine with feigned nonchalance. Nolan was in his study, the faint sound of typing echoing down the hallway. Mark had noticed Debbie's growing suspicion of his father. She hid it well, but the subtle changes in her demeanor didn't escape his notice. Mark made his way to Nolan's study, his expression calm. Knocking lightly, he stepped inside, finding his father seated at his desk, typing on his laptop. The sight was quite domestic. What's wrong? Nolan asked, looking up from his screen. Mark stared at him for a moment before responding. I know the truth. We need to talk. Nolan's eyes narrowed. What truth? Mark's voice was steady, unwavering. Suit up. Arctic. 1 minute. Without waiting for a response, he flew out of the window, the cold wind whipping against his face as he ascended. Behind him, he could hear the familiar rush of Nolan's flight as his father followed. The Arctic wasteland was silent. The only sounds were the faint whistle of wind and the crunch of snow beneath their boots. Mark floated in place, arms crossed, as Nolan landed a few feet away. You said you know the truth, Nolan began, his tone guarded. So let's hear it. Mark didn't mince words. I know about the Viltrum Empire. The coalition of planets told me everything. Nolan's expression darkened. The coalition? They're nothing but roadblocks, pests that hinder the progress Viltrum brings to the universe. They don't understand what we're doing. And what are you doing exactly? Mark asked, his voice laced with skepticism. Nolan straightened, his tone shifting to one of conviction. We conquer planets, yes, but we bring order, stability. We help weaker civilizations reach their full potential. That's what Viltrum is about, progress. Mark nodded slowly. If that's true, then yeah, the coalition is a roadblock. I get it. Nolan's eyes widened slightly in surprise. You agree? For the most part. Mark continued, his tone neutral. But your methods are flawed. Brutality and subjugation don't inspire progress. They create enemies. Enemies who will stop at nothing to destroy us. The brief glimmer of hope in Nolan's eyes faded, replaced by a simmering anger. So you're against me, he said, his voice low. I'm not against you, Dad, Mark said. I'm against the way the Empire operates. We don't need to conquer Earth or any other planet. We should be forming alliances, sharing technology, and working together to build a better future. That's how we ensure Viltrum's survival. Nolan's fist clenched. You're naive. You don't understand what's at stake. Then make me understand, Mark challenged. Nolan's response was a powerful blow aimed at Mark's jaw. Mark blocked it effortlessly, his expression unchanging. I was hoping we could just talk this out without the fighting, but if this is how you want to do it, Floating in the Arctic's freezing air, Mark exhaled slowly, the condensation barely forming before the harsh winds carried it away. His father was still kneeling in the crater below, panting, blood dripping from the corners of his mouth. The snow beneath them had long since been stained red, the battle so far one-sided. But still, Nolan's glare remained defiant. Mark wasn't thinking about his father in that moment, though. The Flaxlands. For the longest time, he had ignored the weight pressing down on his chest whenever he thought about what he had done. The genocide. The absolute decimation of an entire species. No, an entire civilization. At the time, he had justified it. It had been necessary. The Flaxlands were a threat to Earth. If he had let them escape, they would have kept coming back, stronger each time, until they eventually overwhelmed the planet. Eliminating them at the source had been the simplest solution. But simplest didn't mean right. Now, standing over his beaten father, the weight of that choice bore down on him like never before. If he had been as strong as he was now, maybe he could have handled it differently. Maybe he could have led them to an uninhabited world, given them an ultimatum, negotiated a peace treaty. If he had spent even half the effort he was spending now trying to change the Viltrum Empire, he could have found another way. But I didn't. He had chosen the easier path, the violent path, and it worked. That was the worst part. Destroying their entire civilization had been the most efficient way to solve the problem. The thought of that made his stomach churn, because deep down, he knew that in his weakest moments, when he was cornered with no other options, he might do it again. The Mark from Invincible, the one he had read about in comics in his past life, had taken the Viltrum Empire and transformed it into something better. He had turned conquerors into allies. He had led them into a new era. Could he do the same? Could he lead his empire down a better path? Or was he destined to take the easiest road, even when it was paved in blood? He shook the thoughts away. He didn't have time to linger on the past. Right now, he had to deal with the present. He had to deal with his father. Nolan wiped the blood from his lips, his healing already working overtime. He took slow, measured breaths, gauging Mark carefully now. The arrogance he once had, the belief that he was unrivaled on this planet, was gone. In its place was something he hadn't felt in a while. Caution, wariness, fear. For the first time in a while, Nolan knew he had lost. But there was something deeper than pain in Nolan's expression. Confusion, conflict, doubt. Mark had to press that doubt before Nolan convinced himself otherwise. Nolan's nostrils flared. He shot forward, moving in less than a blink, his fist swinging like a meteor toward Mark's face. Mark caught his father's entire forearm with one hand. Nolan's eyes widened in shock. Mark didn't hesitate. He drove his knee straight into his father's ribs. A sickening crack echoed through the air as Nolan's bones snapped. He staggered back, choking on his own blood, his breath coming in short, gasping pants. Mark didn't let up. Before Nolan could recover, Mark slammed a hammer fist into his chest, sending him cratering into the frozen ground. But Nolan flew back to Mark, continuing to throw punches. It was not a contest. You think you're better than thousands of years of Viltrumite history? Nolan growled, his voice filled with frustration. No, Mark replied. But I think the future of Viltrumites could be better. As they fought, Mark continued to make his case. Every planet Viltrum conquers is another potential enemy. Do you really think the Viltrumites as a species can survive if we keep making the universe hate us? Nolan's strikes grew more desperate, his anger boiling over. That's why we need Earth. They're the most compatible species for Viltrumite DNA. We can rebuild our numbers here. Mark sidestepped Nolan's punch, delivering a fist to his face and breaking Nolan's nose. And we don't have to conquer them to do that, Mark said, his voice steady. We can cooperate, share resources, build relationships. We don't have to repeat the mistakes of the past. Nolan fell to his knees, gasping for air. Mark floated down, standing over him. I know you love Mom, Mark said quietly, and I know you love me. So why are you so willing to throw it all away for a broken empire? Nolan looked up at him, his eyes filled with a mix of rage and sorrow. You don't understand. I do, Mark interrupted. Then Mark pulled something out of his suit, a wrist device. This, Mark said, holding it up, is a prototype I've been working on. A device that halts aging. Nolan's eyes widened. You're lying, he whispered. Mark smirked. You always said humans are insignificant because they die too quickly. What if they didn't? What if Mom could live as long as we do? That hit its mark. Nolan staggered, the weight of the revelation crashing into him like a meteor. For decades, he had forced himself to see humans as temporary, a fleeting moment in the vast timeline of his life. But now, for the first time, there was a possibility that he wouldn't have to leave Debbie behind, that she could be with him forever. Mark saw the hesitation in his father's eyes. This is just the beginning, Mark said. If we work together, we don't have to conquer Earth. We can evolve Viltrum into something better. Nolan's hands trembled as he took the device. For the first time in his life, he felt something dangerous. Hope. And I have a plan. But you're not going to like it, Mark said. Nolan's eyes narrowed. What plan? Mark's smirk was faint but resolute. A coup d'etat. Arctic tundra, the aftermath of the battle. Nolan coughed, the coppery taste of blood filling his mouth as he knelt in the icy crater. The fight had been over before it had even truly begun. He had thrown every ounce of his strength into attacking Mark, but his son had countered him with calculated precision, never once breaking a sweat. Mark hovered above, arms crossed, his blue eyes glowing faintly against the white expanse of ice. The silence between them stretched, only the howling winds of the Arctic breaking it. Mark finally exhaled, shaking his head. I told you, Dad, you can't beat me. Nolan's pride bristled, but he wasn't a fool. He had spent centuries fighting, conquering, and ruling, but never had he faced an opponent who had so thoroughly outmatched him. And that opponent was his son. Still, he couldn't just accept this so easily. You're serious about this coup? Nolan rasped, wincing as he slowly stood. He pressed a hand against his ribs, definitely broken. His Viltrumite healing would fix it in time, but for now, the pain was a bitter reminder of his defeat. Mark nodded, his voice firm. Yeah, it's the only way forward. Nolan let out a humorless chuckle, shaking his head. You realize the Empire follows the rule of the strongest, don't you? Even if we challenge Thrag, we don't know how strong he is. He's been the leader of the Viltrumites for thousands of years, and unlike me, he's never grown soft. Mark smirked. I think I'm strong enough already. I haven't even gone all out against you, and you're one of the strongest Viltrumites. That made Nolan pause. Even now, in his beaten state, he could tell Mark had been holding back. His attacks had been precise, but not ruthless. He had controlled the fight from beginning to end without exerting himself. It was terrifying to consider how much stronger Mark could still become. How do you plan to do it? Nolan finally asked, crossing his arms despite the pain. Mark landed in front of him, his expression calm. I'm expecting a call from the coalition of planets soon. When they reach out, we'll use their support to issue a direct challenge to Thrag. He won't be able to refuse. Nolan raised a brow. You want to go through the coalition? You really think they'll back two Viltrumites? They'd rather see us dead. Mark shrugged. Not if I present myself as their best chance at ending the Viltrumite threat for good. A slow grin tugged at the corners of Nolan's lips. Clever. Mark gave him a knowing look. You raised me to be smart. Nolan exhaled heavily, rubbing his face. He still wasn't entirely sure how to feel about all of this. The idea of overthrowing Thrag had never even crossed his mind. He had been so focused on fulfilling his mission that he had never considered another way. Mark extended his hand toward his father, a soft golden glow emanating from his palm. Here, let me fix you up. Nolan tensed at first, but then allowed Mark's magic to flow over him, rapidly knitting his wounds back together. The pain faded, and he could breathe easily again. He looked at his son, now truly realizing just how different he was. They talked for over an hour after that, discussing how Mark would change the Empire. He spoke of diplomacy, of uniting worlds under a banner of cooperation rather than fear. Nolan listened, quietly impressed by his son's vision, though part of him still held doubts. After a while, Nolan frowned thoughtfully. You know what you're proposing isn't really a coup. Mark blinked. What? Nolan smirked. It's more like a legitimate challenge for the throne. A real Viltrumite trial of leadership. Mark scratched the back of his head, a little embarrassed. Yeah well, coup d'etat sounded cooler in the moment. Nolan burst out laughing, the tension between them finally easing. But then his laughter faded, and he looked down at his hands. A deep sadness settled over his features. I wish I knew this was an option before I did what I did, he muttered. Mark felt a pang in his chest. Dad. Nolan sighed and met Mark's gaze. I killed the Guardians of the Globe, Mark. I wanted to weaken Earth's defenses before the Empire came. And normally, I wouldn't regret it. I've had blood on my hands for thousands of years. But now it feels wasteful. Mark clenched his fists. He had already known, deep down, but hearing his father confirm it still stung. The Guardians didn't have to die. You still have to answer for that, Mark said quietly. Nolan nodded. I know. And Mom. I'll tell her everything. Mark studied his father's face. For the first time, Nolan truly looked remorseful. Without another word, they both took off into the sky, heading home. When they walked through the front door, they found Debbie sitting at the dining table, clutching Omni-Man's bloodied suit in her hands. Her eyes were red, a mix of anger and heartbreak swirling in them. Nolan's stomach dropped. She had found the suit. Why? She whispered. Nolan swallowed hard. Debbie. She stood abruptly, slamming the suit onto the table. Why, Nolan? Mark stayed quiet, letting his father face this himself. Nolan took a deep breath. I need to tell you the truth. And so he did. He told her everything. About the Viltrum Empire, about his mission, about why he had killed the Guardians. Debbie trembled as she listened, looking between her husband and her son. Her gaze settled on Mark. Did you know? Mark's jaw tightened. He told me the truth when we went out. And then I beat him down. She glanced at Nolan's torn uniform and dried blood. Her rage dimmed slightly, replaced by confusion. What happened? Mark and Nolan explained everything. The fight, their discussion, their plan to challenge Thrag. Nolan met Debbie's gaze, his voice softer than before. I'm going to atone for what I did to the Guardians. Before Debbie could respond, dozens of GDA agents suddenly uncloaked, weapons drawn. Cecil teleported in, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Debbie turned in remembrance. I called them when I found the suit. Cecil stepped forward, eyes locked onto Nolan. We knew it was you. We just didn't want to act unless you dropped your hero cover and went full-blown conqueror and whatnot. Nolan met Cecil's gaze. I'm not resisting. Do what you have to. Cecil narrowed his eyes. You're too strong to lock up. But if the Viltrumite Empire is coming, then your punishment is simple. You fight for us. You take orders. You protect Earth. Debbie flinched. You're not arresting him? No, Cecil said. But he'll be confined to his home when he's not on missions. And he'll be tracked at all times. A GDA agent approached, placing a diamond-shaped tracking device onto Nolan's shoulder that stuck to his skin. Nolan accepted the punishment without protest. Cecil turned to Mark. Make sure your father behaves. We'll be watching the skies. Mark nodded. Don't worry. This whole problem will be solved soon. Cecil smirked slightly before teleporting away with his men. As the awkward tension in the house settled, Mark took one look at his parents and muttered, well, I'll let you guys talk amongst yourselves. And then he zipped up to his room at super speed. Debbie stared at Nolan, eyes still watery. Was our life together a lie? Nolan stepped forward, gently taking her hands. No. When we first met I was lying to myself, trying not to get attached. But you changed me, Debbie. You made me fall in love with you. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving it. A fresh wave of tears spilled down Debbie's cheeks. Then, without hesitation, she pulled Nolan into a deep kiss. Upstairs, Mark turned off his super hearing and gagged. Yuck. This is why super hearing sucks, he said with a green face. Mark walked out of Reginald Vell Johnson High, stretching slightly as he exhaled. His thoughts were still processing everything that had gone down with his dad, but at least things had settled for now. The GDA's constant surveillance was annoying, but at least they weren't actively interfering yet. His company was growing steadily. He had plans in motion for the Viltrumite Empire, and his mother and father were finally talking things through. For once, things felt manageable. That was until he spotted Eve walking ahead, her shoulders tense, her footsteps hurried. Mark frowned, quickening his pace to catch up. Eve, he called. She slowed slightly, but didn't turn around immediately. When Mark finally reached her side, she sighed. Oh hey Mark. Her voice lacked its usual energy, and her normally confident posture seemed off, like she was weighed down by something. You okay? Mark asked, genuinely concerned. Eve hesitated. It's my parents. Mark already had an idea of what she meant. He remembered how her father had belittled her in the show, treating her like she was incapable of making her own choices. Still, Mark didn't push. Instead, he simply said, want to talk about it? Eve glanced at him, a little surprised by how casual yet sincere he sounded. She hesitated for a moment, but then sighed. Yeah, but not here. Mark nodded. Come on, let's go to my place. Eve sat on Mark's bed, hugging a pillow to her chest as she vented. My dad's being an ass. Again, she scoffed, shaking her head. He keeps acting like I'm some helpless little girl, like I can't take care of myself. Mark leaned against his desk, arms crossed as he listened. He told me I should get back together with Rex, just because he thinks I need protection. Her hands clenched the pillow. Can you believe that? He actually thinks I need Rex of all people to protect me. Mark raised a brow. Did you tell him that we're a team? Eve scoffed. Of course I did. Didn't change anything. If anything, he started on a rant about how I should be partners with an actually human, not alien. Mark rolled his eyes. Wow, that's xenophobic. Right? It's like he refuses to accept that I broke up with Rex for a reason. He just wants me to have some macho guy to keep me in check. Mark exhaled through his nose. So, basically, he wants you to be some perfect little housewife. Exactly. Eve threw up her hands. It's infuriating. Mark's gaze softened. I'm sorry, Eve. That sounds like absolute bullshit. She sighed, hugging the pillow tighter. Yeah, but it's nothing new. They sat in silence for a moment before she continued. Honestly, I don't even know if I want to keep being a hero. Mark blinked in surprise. Wait, what? Eve hesitated, chewing her lip. I feel like I could be doing more. We save people, yeah, but we're always just putting out fires instead of stopping the problems at the root. She looked up at him, expression conflicted. What if I could actually fix things? The environment, poverty, food shortages. I could literally reshape the world if I put my mind to it. Mark nodded slowly. So why not do both? Eve raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Mark smirked. You already have the power to change the world. You could help run my company with me. We've already been working together as a superhero duo. Why not do something just as important outside of fighting crime? Eve's eyes lit up a little. You're actually kind of smart sometimes, you know that? Mark stared at her and deadpanned. Don't sound so surprised. Eve chuckled, shaking her head. But then, her gaze lingered on him. She had spent so much time with Mark recently, fighting crime, talking about life, supporting each other. He always made her feel heard. Before she even realized it, she leaned in. Mark's breath hitched slightly as Eve's lips met his. It was soft, hesitant at first. But then, he melted into it, responding just as eagerly. Her hands found their way to his shoulders, while Mark's rested gently on her waist. The kiss deepened. Oh wow. They jerked apart like two guilty teenagers getting caught by their parents. Because, well they were. Standing in the doorway was Debbie Grayson, arms crossed, an exasperated look on her face. I swear, I guess I can't keep you two lovebirds away from each other. Eve turned bright red, burying her face in her hands. Just kill me now. Mark groaned. Mom. Debbie shook her head, fighting a smirk. Dinner's almost ready. When you're done, whatever this is, come downstairs. She turned to leave, but Mark, never missing an opportunity, grinned. Hope you and Dad are done too, he teased. Debbie froze mid-step, remembering last night. Her face immediately turned beet red. Mark smirked. She turned back, grabbing a slipper from the hallway, and even though Mark could react, she chucked it at his head. It bounced off him harmlessly. Mark laughed. Eve, still covering her burning face, peeked between her fingers, then burst into giggles at the ridiculous sight. Debbie huffed. Brat. Then she stormed off. Eve tried to compose herself, but the mental image of a slipper bouncing off Mark's unfazed head was too much. She snorted, then giggled, then full-on laughed. Mark grinned at her. Glad I could entertain. Eve shook her head, still laughing as she stood up. Come on, dork. Let's eat before your mom kills you. Mark chuckled and followed after her. The table was set. Plates were filled. The three Graysons sat together, plus one extra. Eve had joined them before, but this time, it felt different. As they ate, Nolan casually glanced at Eve before looking at Mark. I guess we'll be seeing you at dinner more often. Eve choked on her drink. Mark sheepishly scratched his head. Debbie smirked, nudging Eve playfully. Hope you like home-cooked meals. Eve, still flustered, nodded quickly. Why yeah, I mean, I'd love to, if it's not too much trouble. Mark snickered. Breathe, Eve. She kicked him under the table, hurting her foot in the process. Debbie and Nolan shared a knowing look, both amused at the red-faced girl sitting across from them. Mark hummed a tune as he folded his clothes, tossing them into his duffel bag without much thought. Upstate University wasn't exactly the most exciting trip, but he had promised Amber, William, and Eve that he'd check it out with them. A break from superheroing sounded nice, even though he knew he'd be busy today. Canon-wise, this would be the time he would have to deal with Sinclair and fight his dad. But now he'll have to deal with the Immortal's body, the Mauler twins, and Sinclair. At least, he bought himself time to deal with the Rudy issue. That was just life now. Between running a company, fighting crime, developing new technology, planning for the future, and juggling his relationships, there was always something to do. Just as he reached for his phone, a sharp beeping noise filled the room. His coalition communicator, the one Alan the alien had given him before leaving, was going off. Mark's brows furrowed as he snatched it up. The holographic screen flickered, and Alan's wide, orange face appeared, but something was different. Mark's eyes widened. Dude, you're yoked. Alan smirked, flexing an arm that looked 3 times as thick as before. Yeah, that's what getting your ass handed to you by 3 Viltrumites and healing from near death does to ya. Mark chuckled. Didn't think it worked like a gym membership. Alan laughed, but quickly became serious. Listen, I called because you've got a problem. Mark sighed, already expecting this. The Viltrumites. Alan nodded grimly. Yeah, they're already near the edge of your solar system. They'll be on Earth soon. Mark exhaled through his nose. Figures it's today of all days. Me and my dad will take care of it. Alan hesitated. Are you sure about Nolan? He's really on your side now. Mark rolled his eyes, leaning back against his desk. Yeah, I had to beat him down first, but he's with me now. Alan still looked skeptical. Well, if you say so. Mark leaned forward, his eyes locked onto Alan's through the screen. By the way, after we're going to need a ride to the coalition. Alan's brows raised. Why? Because, Mark said, his voice calm but firm. We're going to Viltrum next. Alan blinked in shock. What? Are you serious? You actually think you can just fly right up to the entire empire? Mark crossed his arms. That's the plan. Alan's expression twisted in disbelief. Mark, you do realize there's an entire planet of Viltrumites, right? Even if you're strong, that's suicide. Mark shook his head. That's what they want you to believe. But the truth is, there aren't that many left. Less than 50, actually. Alan froze. What? The Viltrum Empire was almost wiped out, Mark explained. A virus killed most of their population centuries ago. The only ones left are the strongest survivors. Alan was still processing this when another figure stepped into the frame behind him. He's telling the truth. Mark immediately recognized Thetis, the leader of the coalition of planets. Alan turned toward him. Wait, you knew about this? Thetis sighed, reaching up to his face. Then, in a single motion, he ripped away his long white beard, revealing a familiar Viltrumite mustache underneath. Alan jumped back, eyes wide. You're a Viltrumite, Thetis confirmed. The very same one who killed his leader, Argal, and helped develop the Scourge virus. Mark remained silent, already knowing this from the comics. Thetis stepped forward, addressing him directly. You're proposing a duel of leadership against Thrag, the strongest Viltrumite in history? Mark nodded. That's right. Thetis studied him for a long moment, noticing Mark's absolute confidence before nodding slowly. Then the fate of countless planets is on your shoulders. Thetis nodded, then turned to Alan. Prepare a ship. If Mark succeeds against the Viltrumites on Earth, we'll bring him here to plan the next step. Alan sighed, shaking his head. All right, man. Guess I'll be seeing you soon. The transmission cut off, leaving Mark alone with his thoughts. He exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Busy day. All right. Another thing on today's to-do list. Beat the hell out of some Viltrumites. Mark descended the stairs as his clothes morphed into his suit, his mind already shifting gears. He had a few stops to make before heading off to space. As he entered the living room, he spotted Nolan suiting up, fastening his red cape around his shoulders. His expression was set, eyes sharp. He was ready for battle. Before Mark could speak, Nolan spoke up first. Cecil stopped by saying there was an alien ship at the edge of the solar system approaching Earth, probably the Viltrumites we were expecting. Mark smirked. Coalition just called about that. Then, there was a knock at the front door. Mark sighed, already knowing who it was. When he opened the door, William, Amber, and Eve stood there, all looking confused. Dude, what the hell? William asked, eyebrows raised. Why are you wearing your Invincible suit? We're supposed to be driving to upstate you. Mark rubbed the back of his neck, offering them an apologetic smile. Yeah, about that. Change of plans. Amber frowned. Don't tell me. Aliens, Mark confirmed. The kind that want to kill me. Gotta take care of it. Amber sighed, clearly annoyed but not surprised. Great. Eve, however, looked concerned. You're going alone? No, Mark said. My dad's coming too. We'll take them off planet to make sure no one here gets hurt. Amber crossed her arms. And when were you planning to tell us? Right now, Mark smirked, pulling 3 small wristwatches from his pocket. Which brings me to this. He handed one to each of them. William raised a brow. What? Did you finally figure out that punctuality is a thing? Mark rolled his eyes. No. Emergency watches. Press the button on the side, and it'll emit a frequency only I can hear while on Earth and alert my suit while in space. If you're ever in trouble, I'll know and be there immediately. Amber's irritation faded slightly as she examined the watch. That's actually kind of sweet. Mark shrugged. Just making sure you guys stay safe while I'm gone. Eve studied the watch on her wrist before looking up at him. How long do you think this fight will take? Hopefully not long. Amber sighed, stepping forward and giving him a tight hug. Just come back, okay? I always do, Mark murmured. When Eve pulled him into a hug too, she held on a little longer than expected before pulling back. We'll be waiting. Mark nodded, stepping back as William smirked. Damn, I feel left out. Where's my kiss? Mark laughed, shaking his head. Maybe next time. With that, William, Amber, and Eve climbed into William's car, driving off toward upstate U. Nolan, who had been silently watching from the doorway, finally spoke in a teasing tone. You've got 2 girls fighting over you. Mark groaned. Dad, seriously? Nolan smirked. It's a valid observation. Mark ignored him. I've got one more thing to do. Be right back. Before Nolan could respond, Mark vanished in a burst of speed, heading toward the Mauler twins' hideout. As Mark approached the warehouse, he activated his X-ray vision, scanning the interior. He spotted them, the Mauler twins, standing over the Immortal's body. His severed head lay on a metal table, wires connected to his temples. They were talking, discussing how they would reanimate the Immortal and use him as a weapon. Mark didn't give them a chance. He opened a portal beneath the Immortal's body and head, sending them directly to his private lab in the Flaxen dimension. As the body parts vanished, one of the twins turned. Wait, where the hell did he go? His clone looked around frantically. You don't think? Did he just revive himself? Mark smirked from above, then blasted off back toward his father, leaving the twins panicking below. Mark flew beside Nolan, who was already hovering above the house, arms crossed. Handled your business? Nolan asked. Mark smirked. Yep. Nolan nodded. Good. Now let's go make sure Earth stays ours. With that, father and son shot into space, heading for Neptune's orbit, where the Viltrumites awaited. Guardians HQ. Rex and Black Samson were sparring surrounded by the rest of the Guardians who were supposed to be watching. Monster Girl sat on the bench, stretching her arms with a sigh as she listened to Duplicate and Shrinking Ray talk about mundane things. She had been content to just listen until Ray, ever the curious one, turned the conversation in her direction. So, Amanda, Ray said, shifting on the bench to face her. You've been sighing a lot. That a new thing? Or is there a certain someone on your mind? Amanda scoffed, crossing her arms. It's not like that. Just schedules not lining up, I guess. Kate raised a brow, leaning in with a smirk. So there is someone. That's new. You've never really mentioned dating since you turned back. Amanda hesitated for a moment before sighing again. It's not dating, really. We just don't get a lot of time together. He's busy, I'm busy. It's complicated. Ray nudged her playfully. You should just tell him you want to hang out more. If you're into him, make it happen. Kate grinned. Yeah, I mean, it's Invincible, right? Amanda's eyes widened slightly before she quickly masked her expression. What? Where'd you get that idea? Kate rolled her eyes. Oh please, you're not exactly subtle. You've been spending a lot of time with him since you know. Amanda blushed, but didn't deny it. Since he cured her, Robot stood across the room, his mechanical body perfectly still, yet his mind was anything but. He had been monitoring their conversation, analyzing every detail, every tone shift, every glance. And now, hearing Amanda talk about Mark this way, it took everything in him not to crush the tablet in his hands. Something had changed. Amanda had always been someone he could relate to. They were both trapped in bodies that didn't reflect their true selves. She, cursed with an affliction that reversed her age every time she transformed. He, a man whose real body was too weak, too fragile to ever truly live in the world the way he wanted. When he designed his plans to create a new body, he had imagined a future where he and Amanda understood each other, where she could see his struggles, and they could bond over their mutual afflictions. But Invincible had ruined that. Invincible had done what he couldn't. He had cured Amanda's affliction, reversing her to her true age. Even if it wasn't permanent, it was only a matter of time. Robot had spent months researching a solution, testing theories, searching for a way to help her, and yet Invincible had solved it before him. And now Amanda laughed when she spoke about Invincible. Now she blushed when he was mentioned. Now her thoughts lingered on him, not on the person who had spent so much time ensuring her safety, watching out for her. That should have been me. Robot's fingers twitched as he processed the bitter realization. He had planned to get another sample of Rex's DNA, but now he realized he needs the blood of something better. Something. Title card. Mark soared through the vast expanse of space, his body weightless, yet completely in control of every movement. He had dreamed of what it would feel like to fly through space with his own body in his past life. And now, as he followed closely behind his father, the reality was even more surreal than he had imagined. There was no friction, no resistance, just an endless void stretching infinitely in all directions. He didn't feel anything surrounding him, didn't hear anything besides his own thoughts and his father's presence beside him. Space should have been cold, suffocating, but his bioelectric aura shielded him from all of it, keeping him insulated from the harshness of the vacuum. Though, he knew his body could withstand the harshness on its own. Yet, something about how he was flying made him pause. He wasn't even actively using his bioelectric aura to propel himself forward. His natural Viltrumite flight was creating leverage that carried him effortlessly, allowing him to maneuver at speeds unimaginable to humans. But how exactly was that possible? He pondered over it. Just how did Viltrumites fly? Unlike Kryptonians, who manipulated the solar energy within their bodies to create a pseudo-telekinetic aura around themselves, Viltrumites didn't need sunlight or any external force. They simply moved, as if gravity and inertia bent to their will. He focused inward, analyzing the sensation of flight while still keeping pace with his father. His theory? It probably came down to Viltrumite smart atoms. Maybe they subconsciously manipulated their personal gravitational and magnetic fields at all times, allowing them to move effortlessly through space. Perhaps they even altered their density on a whim, increasing their weight when needed to add more force to their attacks or gain more momentum. This could explain how they could shift directions midair without an external force, or how they applied pressure to thin air, as if creating invisible surfaces to push off from. It was just a theory, but it made sense. Something to think about later. Right now, he had a beating to dish out to a couple of Viltrumites. He refocused his senses. They were approaching the Viltrumite ship, an ominous behemoth stationed near one of Neptune's moons. He saw 4 figures exit the ship, all clad in traditional Viltrumite uniforms, white with the men having their signature mustaches standing proudly over their hardened expressions. Mark recognized them. General Craig, Thula, Lucan, and Anissa. He silently assessed them. His father could definitely handle both Thula and Lucan on his own, but if Anissa or Craig assisted as well, it would tip the battle in their favor. As for himself, he would have no trouble dealing with practically all 4 of them on his own. Before reaching the ship, Mark casually lifted his hand and snapped his fingers, casting a two-way telepathic link between him and his father. Dad, this link should help us communicate since we don't have the coalition communication implants. Omni-Man tilted his head slightly, feeling the connection before nodding. Impressive. That's magic, isn't it? Yep. Useful, huh? It is. Nolan's gaze hardened as he studied the approaching Viltrumites. How do you want to handle this? We talk first, Mark replied. But if they don't listen, we beat the crap out of them. Like how I did to you. Nolan grunted. Normally, I tell you to fight to kill, but in this case, you're probably right. They won't go down easy, but you're much stronger than me. Just make sure you put them down hard. Viltrumites can heal from wounds that would incapacitate or kill a normal human. Got it. The 2 of them came to a stop in front of the 4 Viltrumites, both sides floating in the void of space. Craig was at the forefront, his arms crossed over his broad chest as he regarded Nolan with an unreadable expression. I have heard many tales of the great Nolan Grayson. Craig spoke through his telepathic transmission implant, his voice laced with disappointment. Centuries of battle, planets conquered, and yet, this is how you want your legacy ends? As a traitor? Mark narrowed his eyes, but he let his father speak first. Nolan met Craig's gaze unflinchingly. Yes, I defected, and there are many reasons why. Craig glanced at Mark. Because of him, Nolan didn't hesitate. Yes, and because I learned to appreciate Earth's way of life in a way I never did on other planets. I fell in love. I had a son, and I couldn't bring myself to destroy the world where I found those things. Lucan let out a snarl, his muscles tensing. Traitor, he spat, preparing to lunge. Craig snapped out his arm, gripping Lucan's shoulder with a silent warning glare. The younger Viltrumite stiffened but obeyed. Craig turned back to Nolan, his tone almost understanding. Return to your duties, and you will be spared. Given your wife's ability to produce what is essentially a pure-blooded Viltrumite, we may even allow you to keep her. Nolan's eyes darkened. That won't happen. Earth is her home. She would be sad if it were conquered, and I refuse to let you take it. Craig shifted his focus to Mark. If Earth's people are truly compatible with Viltrumite DNA, then they are a necessary asset to the Empire's survival. The planet must fall under our control. Mark's patience was wearing thin. You don't have to conquer it. Anissa, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. According to the data you sent us, Nolan, this planet is riddled with wars, disease, corruption, and stagnation. Under Viltrumite rule, it would thrive. It would become something greater. Mark scoffed. And in return, you'd strip them of their free will. You'd enslave them and prevent their progress. He stared at Anissa directly, his tone sharpening. You ever wonder why the Viltrumites are weak right now? Why the Empire fears outsiders knowing how low our population is? Because eventually, you'll meet a threat you can't beat. You guys are stuck in the past, but humans? They evolve. They adapt. And given time, they could become even better than the Empire. Case in point, Robot in the comics who secretly ruled Earth making it better, and Dinosaurus who had many good ideas even if he went about them wrong. Anissa narrowed her eyes. Mark continued, pushing his advantage. The Empire is vulnerable. You barely have 50 of you left, and the coalition of planets is growing stronger. Sooner or later, you'll face a threat you can't defeat. He let his words sink in before delivering the final blow. That's why I plan to take over as the new leader of the Viltrumite Empire. The silence was palpable. Then, Lucan snapped. You think you can take over the Empire? That's treason. He shouted. Mark shrugged. I mean, yeah. Lucan lunged towards Mark, but Nolan moved. In a blur, he intercepted Lucan, driving a fist into his throat. Lucan choked, eyes widening, before a backhand sent him flying. Thula shot forward, weaving around Lucan's flying body with grace. Her fist became a blur as she threw a barrage of precise, rapid punches aimed at his face, throat, and ribs. Thula was fast. She struck hard, her hits sending sharp jolts of pain through Nolan's muscles. He blocked most of them with his forearms, but a few managed to land, one in particular striking his ribcage with enough force to crack the bone. Nolan grunted, feeling the pain flare, but he didn't slow down. Thula made her mistake when she pulled back for a big strike, her body winding up for a devastating hook to his temple. Too slow. Nolan caught her wrist mid-strike, twisting it sharply. Thula's eyes widened in pain, but before she could react, he yanked her toward him. Their foreheads collided in a brutal headbutt, sending her flying towards Neptune's moon. Nolan chased after her. Nolan's fight. Lucan was fast, aggressive, and brash, relying on brute strength and overwhelming force. He favored wild haymakers, wide swings meant to crush bones and pulp flesh. But he wasn't as disciplined as he thought he was. He fought like a berserker, predictable in his recklessness. Thula, on the other hand, was precise. Calculated. She didn't rush in. She observed, striking when it was most effective, using her blade-like braid as a weapon. She could slip through openings in a fight, capitalizing on even the slightest moment of distraction. She was far more dangerous than Lucan in that regard. Thula looked up from the crater she landed in, blood streaming from her nose as she straightened herself. She snarled, looking at the incoming Nolan, and as he closed in on her, she whipped her braid toward Nolan's neck. The blade at the tip of her hair gleamed, aiming to slit his throat. Nolan's hand snapped up, catching the braid mid-swing. He pulled, hard. Thula yelled as she was yanked forward uncontrollably. Nolan twisted, his knee rising to meet her midsection in a devastating strike. She gasped as the wind was knocked out of her, her body curling inward from the impact. Before she could recover, Nolan kicked her away, sending her flying into the rocky terrain. One down. Lucan had recovered by now, his jaw clenched in rage. He roared, shooting back toward Nolan with reckless fury. Nolan narrowed his eyes. He's predictable. Lucan's approach was telegraphed, his fists cocked back, ready to swing. Nolan didn't even bother dodging this time. Instead, he let Lucan close the distance. Then, at the last possible second, Nolan ducked. Lucan's fist whiffed over his head. Nolan immediately countered with an uppercut to Lucan's ribs, his knuckles driving into the soft tissue between the bones. He felt the ribs break beneath his fist, the crunch vibrating through his knuckles. Lucan howled in pain, spitting out blood. Nolan followed up with a rapid sequence of strikes, an elbow to the sternum, a quick knee to the solar plexus, and then a brutal hammer fist down onto Lucan's collarbone. Crack. Lucan's body seized, pain paralyzing him for a split second. But that was all Nolan needed. With a roar, he drove his fist into Lucan's jaw, sending the man careening backward at blinding speeds. The impact sent him tumbling through space, his body completely limp. Two down. A sudden feeling sprouts up from behind Nolan. Shit. Thula had recovered, her body spinning as she used her braid like a whip, the knife at the end aiming straight for his skull. Nolan tilted his head at the last second. The blade grazed his cheek, drawing blood, but it missed its mark. That was her mistake. Nolan grabbed her by the braid again and yanked her downward, hard. She screamed as her body was slammed into the ground below. The impact sent up a cloud of debris, and before she could recover, Nolan descended upon her, both feet crashing down onto her back. There was a sickening snap. Thula's spine broke. Her scream was muffled in the moon's surface, luckily preventing her from opening her mouth to lose all her air, her body twitching violently before going limp. She wasn't dead, but she wasn't getting up anytime soon. Nolan would huff if he wasn't in space, rolling his shoulders. He had held back enough to ensure they weren't dead. A few seconds later, Lucan's body floated nearby, completely unconscious. Nolan grabbed him by the arm, dragging him toward Mark, who just finished up his battle. Mark's fight. General Craig scrutinized Mark. Maybe with the loss of his child, Nolan will see how foolish he is being and return to his duties. With a speed that would have overwhelmed any lesser fighter, the Viltrumite general charged, a blur of white armor and raw power. His fist shot forward like a missile, the sheer force behind it capable of leveling city blocks. Mark reacted instantly, shifting slightly to the side. Craig's fist passed harmlessly by his cheek, and before he could retract, Mark delivered a devastating punch to his gut. The force sent Craig rocketing into the distance, spitting out large amounts of blood, disappearing into the void. Unlike Craig, who had relied on overwhelming force, Anissa moved strategically. She feinted left before shifting mid-flight, aiming a precise strike at Mark's face. The blow connected, her knuckles slamming against his cheekbone with enough force to break mountains. Mark didn't even budge, letting her hit him. Huh, I felt that, not that it hurt or anything. Anissa's eyes flickered with something, shock, frustration, intrigue. What the? Mark smirked. Got it. Anissa snarled and attacked again. This time, she aimed a rapid succession of strikes, elbows, knees, hooks, and kicks. Each blow was meant to break bones, to crush organs. He ducked under one of her swings, planting his fist into her stomach with a brutal punch. Anissa's breath left her in an instant as her body folded around his fist. She was launched backward, her body flipping uncontrollably through space. But before she could recover, Mark was already on her. Using his superior speed, he appeared above her, grabbed her by the ankle, and swung her like a ragdoll, hurling her into a passing meteorite. The rock exploded on impact. Anissa coughed up blood, her body twitching from the force of the attack. She gasped for air, but found none. Before she could lose consciousness and suffocate in space, Mark waved his hand. A barrier of air surrounded her. She had fought hundreds of battles across the cosmos. She had conquered worlds, broken warriors, and slaughtered civilizations. Yet now, she was helpless. Anissa coughed violently, taking in the air, staring at the barrier with disbelief. What? I possess some magical capabilities. Making a pocket of air was nothing, Mark answered simply. She stared at him, her mind racing. This wasn't something a Viltrumite should be capable of. Mark crossed his arms. But it is possible, and I would be happy to teach you and the rest of the Viltrumites under my rule. I don't want to kill you guys seeing as the Viltrumite population is already low enough. I just want to fix this empire and make it better. She got back into her stance, wiping the blood from her mouth. Her breathing was ragged, but her eyes burned with a hint of lust. You're stronger than I expected. Mark looked at her expression and guffawed. Is she? Hey, quick question, are you a masochist? Mark asked. Why WH? What are you talking about? Anissa stuttered out with blushing cheeks. Mark was stunned. It looked like she had those tendencies in comics, but he didn't expect it in real life. If he was being honest while he didn't like what Anissa did to Mark, he couldn't deny he was attracted to her. Anissa, like most Viltrumites, had a physique sculpted for war. Her body was the epitome of power and elegance combined, statuesque, toned, and radiating an almost primal allure. Her muscles, though defined, did not detract from her femininity. They only enhanced it, giving her a sense of raw, commanding presence that could rival even the most battle-hardened warriors. Her face was sharp, yet undeniably feminine. High cheekbones, a perfectly sculpted jawline, and full lips that could shift between a smirk of amusement and a sneer of dominance in an instant. Her piercing blue eyes burned with a fierce intensity, holding both pride and intrigue, their depths reflecting the hardened will of a warrior who had conquered entire worlds. Her body was built like a goddess of war, every curve accentuated by lean, powerful muscle. Her broad shoulders tapered down into a trim, sculpted waist, emphasizing her busted chest and hourglass figure in a way that was both intimidating and mesmerizing. Her arms and legs were honed through centuries of combat. As Mark looked at her, Anissa noticed his gaze towards her chest, smirking a little. Mark looked up, directing his gaze towards her face. He found himself attracted to her a little, but he already had girl problems back on Earth that he would have to deal with soon. Amber was fun, caring, and definitely a person he could see himself with. He had told her the truth about his identity early on in their relationship, so unlike in the comics, she was more receptive to his superhero identity. But they weren't in a relationship like Mark was in canon, since at the time he was scared about her lifespan and seeing her grow old and die, while he stayed young for as long as there were stars, and probably beyond that. Instead, they became friends with benefits, so she didn't have to deal with the baggage of his alien/superhero lifestyle fully. He was always supportive of both his superhero and personal identity. They were a great duo, whether it be fighting crime or just hanging out together. She was always a caring type of person, but despite her intelligence, power, and confidence, Eve has moments of insecurity, especially regarding her self-worth. She was also potentially one of the only people that could be with him for eternity, and she lights a warmth in his chest whenever she smiles at him. Amanda was someone who faced many hardships due to her condition, but she came out of it stronger. She was often frustrated or lonely back in her child form. But now that she returned back to her adult form, she exuded a quiet, mature confidence. She was sarcastic, witty, and a loving person, and since Mark was the one to turn her back, she had been pouring tons of her love onto him. He had been accepting her feelings because he knew it must must have been hard for her with her fear of her future, something he could previously relate to, and didn't want her to feel rejected now that she was putting herself back out there. But, as they spent time together once in a while, he found himself enjoying her directness and the way they spent time experiencing activities she couldn't in her child form. He still had to find a permanent solution to her condition, but he was making progress when he had the downtime. After thinking about the girls in his life, he put them aside for now to focus on the battle he was currently in, seeing General Craig returning. Craig, who had recovered, floated up to Mark, still clutching his chest from Mark's earlier attack. That single blow and the multiple damaged organs was enough for him to realize that Mark was way out of his league. His face twisted in rage. You are delusional if you think you can take over. Mark sighed. You're gonna go back to Viltrum and tell Grand Regent Thrag I'm coming. And I'm taking the Empire. Craig glared. The Grand Regent will crush you. Mark smirked. We'll see. Nolan floated up beside him, his own opponents beaten unconscious. Craig stared at them for a long moment before he and Anissa grabbed Thula and Lucan's bodies and flew back to their ship. This isn't over. As the Viltrumites retreated, Mark's wristwatch suddenly lit up. The emergency beacon. His friends. D. Sinclair. Mark turned to his father with a sheepish smile. I need to get back to Earth now, so I apologize in advance, but we need to get there the quick way. Nolan barely had time to process his words before Mark grabbed his shoulder and snapped his fingers. A portal opened up in front of them before Mark pushed Nolan through before following. And suddenly, they were now in their living room. Nolan staggered at the change in location, and then immediately kneeled and threw up. Debbie ran over from the kitchen. Nolan, what happened? Mark was already moving. I teleported him. He wasn't ready. He shot out the door. His friends needed him. The bright sun shone down on Upstate University as students strolled along the pathways. Among them were William, Amber, and Eve, following behind their enthusiastic guide, Rick Sheridan, as he gestured toward the various buildings and facilities the university had to offer. And over here is our main student center, Rick said with a grin. It's got a dining hall, study spaces, and a 24-hour coffee shop. Trust me, you'll need it for those all-nighters. William leaned toward Amber with an amused smirk. $20 says half the students here survive solely on caffeine and stress. Amber chuckled. Oh, for sure. I bet their bloodstream is at least 30% espresso. Rick, overhearing them, laughed. Not gonna lie, you're not wrong. Finals week here is basically a zombie apocalypse. As they continued their tour, Eve listened but wasn't fully paying attention. Her mind was occupied with other thoughts, specifically about Mark. She hated that he wasn't able to come with them, but she understood that his responsibilities as a hero sometimes took priority. He had left with his father to fight off aliens in deep space, and she had trust that he would come back in one piece. But she was still worried. She sighed, shaking off her thoughts. No point in dwelling on it now. She was here, and she might as well enjoy herself. They had just entered the plaza when a deep, inhuman roar suddenly tore through the air. Screams followed almost immediately. The students around them froze in confusion before panic set in, sending people scrambling for safety. What the hell was that? William shouted. Then they saw it. A hulking, grotesque figure burst into the plaza, its body covered in mechanical enhancements, its skin stretched and distorted around the metal. It moved unnaturally, its steps heavy and erratic as if it were being controlled against its will. Everyone, get out of here now. Rick shouted, trying to direct students away from the scene. Eve's eyes widened. She had no idea what the hell this thing was, but she knew one thing. It needed to be stopped. Taking a quick glance at her friends, Eve dashed into some bushes to change into her costume. The creature let out a mechanical groan, its movements jerky yet impossibly strong. People screamed, scattering in all directions. Eve reappeared in the sky, her pink energy signature flashing as she flew into action. She immediately spotted the monster rampaging through the plaza, students running in every direction to avoid its path. Eve's eyes widened. She had no idea what the hell this thing was, but she knew one thing. It needed to be stopped. A scream caught her attention. She turned just in time to see a massive chunk of concrete from a broken building hurling toward her friends and some other students. Shit. Eve darted forward, forming a pink energy construct in the shape of a large bat. She swung it with precision, smashing the debris midair and shattering it before it could reach William and the others. William, having shielded himself instinctively, slowly lowered his arms and gawked. Eve, Amber, standing beside him, looked equally shocked. Oh my god, you're Adam Eve. Eve realized that her cover was blown. She hadn't exactly planned to reveal her identity to them yet, but there wasn't time to worry about that. Less staring, more running, she called out before turning her focus back to the reanimant. The creature, still rampaging, grabbed a nearby food truck and, with horrifying strength, flung it toward a campus building. The truck crashed through the front wall, sending cracks spiderwebbing through the structure. The whole building groaned as it began to collapse. Eve acted fast. She extended her hands, her energy surging as she formed a massive construct to reinforce the structure, preventing it from caving in entirely. At the same time, she wrapped protective energy shields around the students still in the way of debris, carefully moving them out of danger. Holding up a collapsing building while protecting civilians was already stretching her limits, and the monster wasn't stopping its assault. Amber, realizing how bad the situation was getting, bit her lip before making a decision. She reached into her pocket and pressed the emergency watch Mark had given her. She didn't know if he was close enough to get here in time, but she hoped. As she glanced up, she noticed something chilling. The monster was staring at her. It let out a guttural growl before charging. Amber's heart pounded as she instinctively took a step back. It was coming for her. Rick, who had been standing beside her the entire time, grabbed her wrist and began dragging her away. Amber moved, but before the monster could reach them, something stopped it. A hand. A single hand grasped its face. The next second, the creature was sent flying across the plaza with a single devastating punch. The dust settled, revealing Invincible floating above them, his hair billowing in the wind. He had arrived. Amber let out a breath, her eyes widening in relief. Mark immediately shushed her, putting a finger to his lips. Secret identity, remember? He whispered. Amber gasped, clamping her hands over her mouth. Oh, all right. Sorry. Eve, who had just finished stabilizing the building, floated down near him, her expression both relieved and exasperated. You didn't need to come. I had it handled. Amber sheepishly rubbed the back of her neck. Sorry, I called him. Before Mark could reply, the monster got back up, letting out a distorted snarl. Mark narrowed his eyes. He recognized that despite its monstrous appearance, the reanimant was still a human being inside that body. He needed to be careful. Time to chill out, he muttered. With a deep breath, he released a powerful gust of cold air from his mouth. The freezing breath swept over the reanimant, encasing it in solid ice within seconds. Mark lowered his hands, observing his work. That should hold it. But he was wrong. The reanimant, despite being frozen, flexed its grotesque muscles and shattered the ice with sheer strength, its rage undeterred. The reanimant lunged at Mark once again. He dodged, parrying its attacks with swift movements, his hands deflecting each blow effortlessly. Eve took the opportunity to create another energy construct, a massive pink bat, and swung it with all her strength. The impact struck the reanimant in the head, knocking loose a device embedded in the back of its skull. Immediately, the creature stopped moving. Its body sagged before collapsing entirely. Eve blinked. Did I just? Mark looked down at the broken device on the ground. You didn't kill it. It was just being controlled, but not anymore. Eve's stomach turned. She had suspected as much, but seeing the evidence made it even worse. Mark exhaled sharply, seeing this in real life. This is sick. His eyes flashed with a little anger as he turned his gaze toward the hole the reanimant had emerged from. Eve saw where he was looking. Mark, come on, let's go down there, he said before floating down into the hole. Eve sighed looking at the dirty sewer, but followed. This is not going to be fun. Mark and Eve continued traveling through the sewers when the sound of rapid footsteps could be heard. Then, they attacked. The first reanimant lunged from the shadows, its enhanced limbs carrying it forward at terrifying speed. Before it could reach them, 3 more emerged from side tunnels, their cybernetic bodies moving with a horrifying mix of human-like fluidity and mechanical precision. Eve barely had time to react before the first one slammed into Mark, its massive metal fist swinging toward his face. The impact was thunderous. But Mark didn't move. The Reaniman's fist remained pressed against his cheek for a second, then slowly dropped as if it realized something was wrong. Mark tilted his head slightly, his expression completely neutral. That's it. The creature roared, bringing both hands down in a hammer fist. Another one wrapped its metal arms around him from behind, locking him in an inhumanly strong grip while the others started pounding on his torso. The sound of metal on flesh reverberated through the tunnel. Eve gasped. Mark. For a split second, she thought maybe they were actually hurting him. Maybe. Then, she saw his face. He looked bored. With a blur of motion too fast to follow, Mark moved. The one behind him was thrown over his head, slamming hard into the ground below, before removing the device from the back of its head. Mark shot forward, weaving between the remaining three, his fingers reaching the base of their skulls with surgical precision. He pulled the devices from their heads. One by one, they collapsed, their bodies going limp like puppets with their strings cut. It took less than 5 seconds. Eve hovered a few feet away, her eyes wide, her breath caught in her throat. Mark exhaled, his hands clenched into fists as he stared at the motionless bodies. Pathetic. His voice was cold. Too cold. Eve had seen Mark fight plenty of times before. She had seen him serious. But this was different. There was something wrong about it. The way he moved. The efficiency. The sheer ease with which he dismantled them. There was no hesitation. No restraint. For the first time, she felt a hint of fear. Not of him, but for him. Mark. She started, but stopped when she saw his eyes. They were burning with anger. Mark took a slow breath, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off a lingering thought. He turned to Eve. Let's move. Eve hesitated, but nodded, using her powers to gently lift the unconscious Reaniman. They continued forward, deeper into the nightmare ahead. The underground lair was a nightmare. Eve covered her mouth, trying not to gag at the sight. Bodies, some still twitching, lay scattered across the lab. Limbs, half mechanized, hung from operating tables. The stench of burnt flesh and chemicals filled the air. Then, they saw him. D.A. Sinclair. The man himself was in a frenzy, scrambling to gather his notes as he attempted to flee. Mark landed in front of him in a blink. Before Sinclair could react, Mark grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground. Mark's eyes glowed red with barely contained rage. How could you? Mark's voice was low, venomous. Sinclair wheezed, clawing at Mark's grip. You don't understand. I was making them better. Mark's grip tightened. Better. You turned dismembered people and turned them into mindless slaves. Sinclair grinned, even as he struggled to breathe. You're blind. My work will make humanity superior, even stronger than you. Mark's fist trembled. For a moment, Eve genuinely thought he was about to kill him. She quickly placed a hand on Mark's arm. Mark, stop. Mark didn't move. Mark, Eve said softly. You're better than this. Mark's breath was heavy. He glared at Sinclair, who continued to smirk. Then, finally, Mark exhaled. He realized he got a little too worked up. While his crimes were severe, he didn't deserve death since he didn't kill them. Mark thought he didn't deserve any of the comforts outside of a jail cell. He knew the GDA would want to use him, but it didn't factor into his decision whether or not to let Sinclair live, but his relationship with Eve would change irreparably if he did so. And with that, he tossed Sinclair to the ground, his eyes still burning with anger. If I ever find out you're still doing this to living people, Mark said darkly, I'll throw you into space. Sinclair coughed, but didn't speak. Mark activated his comms. Cecil, come pick this piece of trash up. As the battle settled, the chaos on campus slowly dissipated. Students who had taken cover behind benches and buildings were cautiously stepping out, whispering among themselves. In the aftermath, the GDA had arrived in full force, teleporting in with their Black Ops agents, securing the area. They moved efficiently, restraining the downed Reaniman and setting up containment fields around the wreckage. At the center of it all was D.A. Sinclair, who was thrashing in the grip of 2 GDA agents, his face twisted in rage. Let me go? You imbeciles don't understand. I was elevating the human race. Sinclair shouted, struggling against his restraints. One of the agents shoved him forward roughly. Yeah? Tell that to the people you mutilated. Sinclair sneered. Those people are now evolutionarily superior to the rest of you weaklings. Do you know what I've created? A future where we can challenge the likes of Invincible. Where we are not at the mercy of gods. Yeah, keep talking. Another agent muttered as they pushed him toward a swirling blue portal. We'll see how much your theories hold up in a cell. Before disappearing through the portal, Sinclair turned his wild eyes toward Mark and Eve. His lip curled into a snarl. You think you've won? You're fools. You of all people should understand. Invincible. You fight with such power, such brutality. And yet, you let weakness hold you back. You. His words were cut off as the portal snapped shut behind him, leaving only an eerie silence in its wake. He let out a breath. God, what a lunatic. Mark's expression remained tight as he watched the last traces of the portal fade. He knew Cecil wasn't going to just let Sinclair rot in a cell. He'd make use of his work, just like he did in the comics. Mark wasn't sure how to feel about that. Cecil walked over, hands still tucked in his coat pockets. Hell of a job, you two. We're going to make sure that D.A. Sinclair is locked up nice and tight. And we'll help his so-called Reaniman go back to normal. Mark just crossed his arms. Right? And you're sure you're going to lock him away and never use his tech, right? Cecil frowned slightly. Of course. We'll do what needs to be done. Mark's eyes narrowed. He took a step forward. I can hear your heart rate spiking when you lie, Cecil. For a brief moment, the older man's expression faltered. It was only for a second, but Mark caught it. Cecil sighed, rubbing his temple. Look, kid, I'm not going to bullshit you. His work is horrific, but that doesn't mean it isn't useful. If we can repurpose his tech for good, we'd be idiots not to. Mark just took a slow breath and stepped back. Cecil watched him carefully. Smart choice. You're good at thinking long term. Mark gave him a sharp look. Don't patronize me. Cecil smirked, nodding. Duly noted. With that, the GDA finished securing the area, and Cecil teleported away. Mark let out a sigh and turned to Eve, who was watching him with a soft expression. Thanks for stopping me from doing something stupid. Eve smiled. You weren't going to kill him, Mark. Mark raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? She tilted her head, considering. Maybe, but you hesitated. That means something. Mark then nodded. Yeah, I wasn't going to kill him. But what he did was inhumane and something I'll always be able to see vividly with my powers. They shared a brief, understanding look before Mark turned his attention back to the scene. All right, we should get back to Amber and Will. Eve agreed, and together, they flew back up to the surface to change into their civilian identities. By the time Mark and Eve rejoined the others, things on campus had mostly calmed. The students were still in shock, but the GDA's containment efforts had kept the major damage controlled. Mark and Eve were walking up to the others when Amber suddenly threw her arms around him. You're okay, she said, holding onto him tightly. Mark chuckled, returning the hug. I always am. Eve, standing nearby, crossed her arms. I did have it handled, you know. You didn't need to call him. Amber pulled back slightly, looking a little sheepish. Yeah, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. They resumed the tour with Mark officially joining them, though whispers of Sinclair's arrest and the Reaniman attack lingered around them. As the sun began to set, the group ended up in the dorms, chatting and unwinding before heading to a party. Eventually, as the two sat in Rick's dorm, William turned to Mark with a knowing grin. All right, dude. Spill. Mark raised an eyebrow. Spill what? William scoffed. Come on. You, Amber, and Eve. What's going on there? Mark blinked. What? Oh, come on. You know what? Replied William. Mark groaned. Jesus Christ. William smirked. It's obvious. Both of them like you, and you haven't made a decision. Mark hesitated. It's complicated. William leaned forward. How complicated? Mark sighed. I like them both. I turned Amber down at first because of, well, lifespan stuff, so we ended up being friends with benefits. But I might have a way to fix that so I can't use that as an excuse no more. And Eve, she's different. She just got out of a relationship. She's figuring herself out. I don't want to mess that up, but I noticed the signs she was putting out. Aside from both of them, I also have Amanda to think about. William's jaw dropped. Another one. Mark groaned, rubbing his face. Dude, stop making it sound so bad. William stared at him like he was witnessing the greatest drama in the universe. You're in so deep, man. Mark sighed. I know, and I need to figure out what to do. William grinned. Well, whoever you pick, you should be upfront with the others. Don't be an asshole about it. Mark groaned. Yeah, I know. William smirked. At least I don't have to worry about this mess. Mark's eyes narrowed mischievously. Oh yeah? You and Rick have been spending a lot of time together. William's face turned bright red. Shut the hell up. Mark grinned. Hey, my superpowers include Gaydar. William looked at him, suspicious. You're joking, right? Mark burst into laughter. William groaned. I hate you. The conversation devolved into laughter, the day's stress momentarily forgotten. Mark soared through the sky, his mind drifting between the present and the enormous future that awaited him. The cool wind rushing past his face did little to distract him from the thoughts that had been brewing in his mind for days now. He had made countless changes to this timeline, some small, some monumental, but one, in particular, stood out. His father was still here. Omni-Man hadn't left Earth for Thraxa. That singular change meant Oliver would never be born. There would be no Thrax and Viltrumite hybrids, no eventual war brought on by Thrag's desperation to maintain Viltrumite dominance through forced breeding. That entire branch of events had been severed. Mark wasn't sure how he felt about it yet. Oliver had been his brother in another timeline, but here, he didn't exist. He wouldn't exist. And that was just the start. As much as he wanted to reflect on the massive butterfly effects he had already set into motion, he had more pressing matters. His company, his future as Emperor of the Viltrumites, and, of course, his plan to explore other universes. That last thought sparked a small grin across his face. The potential experiences were exhilarating to think about. There were so many places he wanted to visit, so many people he wanted to meet. He imagined standing across from Superman, sizing him up, or racing against the Flash just for fun, meeting Wonder Woman and seeing just how hot she was. He had no real desire to meet Batman, though. The guy was too paranoid, too obsessed with knowing everything. Nightwing, on the other hand, he seemed cool. It wasn't just DC he had his sights set on. Marvel, Dragon Ball, even High School DxD. The last one made him chuckle perversely. That particular world had piqued his interest for, well, multiple reasons. Mostly the magic, probably. But all of that was in the future. For now, he needed to focus on stabilizing his company and getting it off the ground. Within moments, he reached his destination. His headquarters. The sleek, modern skyscraper that once belonged to Machine Head was now his. He had repurposed the building, turning it into the heart of his operations. It wasn't just a business. This was a foundation for the future Viltrumite headquarters on Earth. The elevator dinged as Mark stepped inside, pressing a floor number. The button flickered from red to green with a soft buzz before the lift began its smooth ascent. His company needed a name. He had been pondering Invincible Incorporated, but was that too on the nose? It had a nice ring to it, though. When the door slid open, he was greeted by a familiar sight, Eve. She had been the one to buzz him in, a bright smile on her face as she stood by the entrance to her new private floor. The moment she saw him, she wasted no time jumping into his arms, wrapping him in a tight hug. Thank you, Mark, she whispered into his shoulder. Seriously, I needed to get out of that house. Mark chuckled, holding her close before pulling back slightly. You would have left eventually. Yeah, but now I don't have to worry about where I'd go. Eve had taken him up on his offer to work with him, which meant moving out of her parents' house. She now had an entire private floor to herself, complete with a massive living room, multiple guest rooms, an indoor pool, a personal theater, a master bedroom with an attached bathroom, and even room for expansion. With her abilities, she could customize the space however she wanted. Mark let her down. All right, Mark said. Let's go over what you'll actually be doing here. They made their way through the building. There was a lot to discuss, and he wanted to give her the full rundown of what she could choose to work in. First, he took her to the laboratory. This is where I do most of the production, he explained, leading her into the expansive, high-tech space filled with machinery that were producing vats of his fluid fabric. Eve's eyes widened as she took in the sight of the black liquid being produced. So this is what makes your suit. Mark nodded. Yeah, production is still in the early stages, though. Right now, I'm barely keeping things afloat financially. The only reason I haven't gone under is because of Machine Head's old accounts. But that money won't last forever. Eve looked around, her mind already spinning with ideas. You need more labor, don't you? Mark smirked. Yeah, but I also don't want to deal with spies stealing samples of the raw stuff or corporate sabotage. So I have a plan for that. He guided her into another section of the lab where machines were printing out standard clothing designs, police uniforms, doctor and nurse outfits, even standard gear for the GDA. I talked to Cecil, Mark continued. He spread the word about my company, and I already have pre-orders coming in from law enforcement, hospitals, and the GDA itself. For now, we're only handling standard designs. Custom orders are going to take more time. Eve turned to him with a questioning look. And you want me to help with that? If you want, Mark shrugged. I can show you how to create and manipulate the fluid fabric with your powers. You'd be able to create custom orders much faster than I could with just machines. Eve hesitated, her fingers tracing the smooth material of a nearby uniform. You really trust me with that? Mark met her gaze without hesitation. Of course. A faint blush crept up Eve's cheeks, but she didn't comment on it. Mark then led her to another floor, an empty space for now, but one that would soon become something much greater. He had remembered the business Mark and Eve had in the show and took inspiration from that for his own company. This is going to be a private security division, he explained. I'm thinking about making it a heroes for hire type of deal. There are always people or businesses that need protection from monster attacks and villains. This could provide them with that while also giving heroes a stable source of income. Eve's brow furrowed in thought. Like a security agency? Exactly, Mark confirmed. And if I can get a few fellow Viltrumites to work with me in the future, this could become something massive. But I'll need someone I trust to oversee it. She nodded, already seeing the potential in the idea. During their tour of Upstate University, Mark had already explained his business with the Viltrumite Empire and his current plans for it. The conversation had come up naturally when William, Amber, and Eve started asking him about what exactly he was doing in space. Flashback start. Mark had expected curiosity, but he hadn't expected just how many questions they'd have. So, let me get this straight. William had started, crossing his arms while leaning against a tree in the campus courtyard. You're planning to take over an intergalactic empire by beating the strongest guy they have. Pretty much, Mark confirmed, hands in his jacket pockets. Once I win, the rest of them will have to follow my orders. Amber raised a skeptical eyebrow. And you're sure you can beat him? Mark just smirked. You doubt me. I mean, yes, Amber deadpanned. You're strong, Mark. Like, insanely strong. But this guy has been ruling an entire species of superpowered conquerors for centuries. You really think you can just punch him and take the throne? Mark shrugged. I know I can. I beat my dad pretty easily, and he's one of the stronger Viltrumites, and I'm just continuing to grow stronger by the second. Eve tilted her head slightly. Okay, but assuming you win, what happens next? You're just king of the Viltrumites now? What does that even mean? Will you leave Earth and stay in space? Do you even know how to run an empire? Well, he started. For the most part, I'll probably have advisors helping me learn how to rule, but it'll be a trial process as I'll learn as I go. And no, I won't leave Earth. A virus wiped out most of the Viltrumite population centuries ago. There are probably less than 50 of them left in the entire universe. Amber's expression softened slightly. That's not a lot. Exactly, Mark nodded. Which means we'll need to focus our time on repopulating the species. Since humans and Viltrumites are incredibly compatible, a union between the two produces a hybrid where Viltrumite DNA dominantly takes over the human DNA, producing an essentially 99.9% pure blood Viltrumite. That means Earth is the best place for the Viltrumites to repopulate, with some probably needing to take multiple partners to bring numbers up. At those words, Eve and Amber's expression shifted. They didn't say anything at first, but Mark could tell they were both thinking the same thing. Amber pursed her lips, her brows furrowing slightly. She wasn't opposed to the idea outright, but it was clear she was thinking about what that meant for her and Mark. Would she be willing to share if it came to that? Could she? Eve, on the other hand, was harder to read. She had a more neutral expression, but her arms were crossed, and she was deep in thought. She wasn't against it either, but she was probably weighing her options. Mark, of course, noticed everything. He wasn't stupid. He had put the idea out there on purpose, just to see how they would react. And their lack of immediate rejection told him everything he needed to know. It made him feel like a scumbag, in a way. He had strong feelings for both of them. Maybe even more than just them if he included Amanda. If he chose only one, then he would lose the others. But if this was a possibility, if they were open to it, then maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have to. Still, this wasn't something he could force. If it didn't work out, he'd have to accept it and move on. He couldn't string them along forever. But for now, it seemed like the idea wasn't completely off the table. Flashback end. Mark took Eve to another floor, this one just as empty as the last. This, he said, is where we're going to focus on producing resources for the human population. You mentioned how your powers could be used for more than just fighting crime, and that got me thinking. If we use cloning technology and your abilities, we could increase food production, improve medicine, and create resources that could genuinely better the world. Eve's face lit up. You actually want to do that? Mark grinned. Of course, you inspired the idea. Eve's enthusiasm was infectious. For the first time, she saw how she could contribute in a meaningful way outside of hero work. Finally, Mark brought her to the elevator and after pressing a few floor number into a number sequence, pulled open the panel with the elevator number buttons revealing a scanner behind it. Placing his hand on the scanner, the elevator continued down past the ground flood revealing an underground lair beneath his headquarters. As they stepped out of the elevator, Eve's eyes widened in shock. The massive chamber was reminiscent of Iron Man's armory, walls lined with displays cases filled with mannequins, advanced machinery, and, against the far wall, a massive computer akin to Batman's Batcomputer. To their left, several mannequins stood in display cases, each bare except for 3 of them. 2 of the mannequins were clad in the 2 different versions of Mark's suits that he wore. His old nanotech suit, so-called MK1, and a suit that looked like his new one made from fluid fabric, so-called MK2. One of the displays caught Eve's eye immediately, her suit. What is all this? And why is my suit here? She asked. Mark smirked. Because this is where we'll be operating as a crime-fighting duo. I designed this floor as our crime-fighting Overwatch room. The computer AI called Community, aka Unity, will monitor the city for us, so we don't have to waste time flying around looking for trouble and don't have to rely on Cecil all the time. Eve turned to him, still processing everything. And my suit? Well, it's mainly to pay homage to the original suit and for design choices for our lair, Mark said. Mark then pressed a button on his wrist, and a claw-like machine lowered another case from the ceiling. Inside was a brand new suit. It looked almost identical to her original, but it was enhanced, made with fluid fabric, packed with advanced features. I didn't change the design since I wanted your input, Mark said. But it's made from my fluid fabric and has some neat mentally commanded pre-built functions in case you were in a situation where you can't access your powers, use them fast enough, or want to conserve energy. It can morph into different modes automatically with 2 words, armor mode for defense, and instantly creates a suit of armor around her, preserving her body better than most of her constructs can. Space mode, which focuses on survivability in space or water, and creates a sealed suit providing her with breathable air from surrounding molecules regardless of where she is. Stealth mode for invisibility, and offensive mode for built-in weapons. Eve stared at the suit in awe. You did all this? Mark shrugged. Figured you deserved something as good as my own. She ran her fingers over the material, feeling how different it was from her usual constructs. It was alive in a way, Mark continued. If you ever need to store it, you can just morph it into a bracelet. And if you want, I can show you how to make regular fluid fabric outfits yourself. Eve considered everything before finally making her decision. I want to run the resource division, she said. If this can help the world, I want to be the one to make sure it happens. Mark grinned. Good. You're the president of that division, then. Are you sure about president? I don't even know how to run a business, Eve questioned. Mark replies. Look at me. I didn't understand business as well at first, but I put in a lot of studying to get better, and you always have me if you need help. Before Eve could respond, alarms blared through the room. The Overwatch screen lit up, showing a massive insect-like kaiju attacking a beach, heading toward the city. No heroes were nearby. Mark turned to Eve, his suit already morphing around him. Ready to test that suit? Eve smirked, her own suit forming around her. Let's do it. They shot out of the hidden exit, soaring into the sky. The roar of the kaiju split through the air like an ear-piercing shockwave, rattling windows, and sending civilians screaming in every direction. The massive insect-like monster, standing as tall as a skyscraper, flapped its 6 beetle-like wings, creating powerful gusts of wind that knocked over vehicles and shattered nearby structures. A single breath of its acidic exhalation melted an entire block of buildings, leaving nothing but sizzling debris and pools of bubbling liquid. As Mark and Eve approached, flying above the city, Mark's supervision took in the devastation with efficiency. The acid isn't just melting things, it's spreading like wildfire. If I don't get these people out of here, they'll be dissolved before they can run. Mark thought. Eve, on the other hand, examined the beast itself, analyzing its anatomy. The wings give it mobility. The exoskeleton looks pretty durable. That stinger? It's going to be a problem, she thought. Her hands curled into fists as her fluid fabric suit tightened around her form, preparing for battle. We're doing this fast and efficient, Mark said, eyes darting across the city. I'll handle the civilians, you take care of the bug. Eve grinned, flexing her fingers as her suit's molecular weave shifted. Perfect. Let's test this thing out. With a thought, she activated her suit's combat mode. Offense mode, she commanded. Her suit morphed seamlessly. Her sleeves extended into energy blasters, while a jetpack and leg boosters activated, boosting her mobility. Her shorts extended into armored pants, increasing protection. Mark nodded, already shooting off at hypersonic speed, appearing everywhere at once as he rescued civilians in the blink of an eye. Buildings collapsed where people once stood, only to be caught in Mark's arms and moved to safety before they even realized what was happening. Meanwhile, Eve shot forward, firing her blasters at pinpoint accuracy, sending concentrated beams of energy through the kaiju's wings. Zshhhh. The blast cut through the monster's flesh like butter, leaving behind massive cauterized holes in its exoskeleton. The kaiju screeched in agony, its wings flapping wildly to keep itself airborne despite the damage. Eve's eyes widened slightly. Holy crap, these blasts are even stronger than I thought. Eve exclaimed in her mind. However, the kaiju wasn't done. It let out another deafening roar before turning its gaze toward Eve. She reacted just in time as its tail curled forward, launching massive, spear-sized stingers directly at her. Wanting to try out the other modes in her suit, Eve mentally called out, defense mode. Her suit morphed instantly. The jetpack and boosters remained, but her armor thickened, a helmet formed over her head, and her arms reshaped into 2 halves of a massive shield. She crossed them together, creating a square-like metal shield, and then an additional hard light dome formed around her as a second layer of protection. The stingers hit the shield and instantly dissolved upon contact. Eve's eyes widened as she took in the efficiency of the system. Mark, what kind of genius are you? These are better than my own shields. Down below, Mark finished evacuating the last of the civilians and turned to see Eve's barrier, holding strong. He smirked. Looks like the Kryptonian defense barriers work just as well as I hoped. Only downside, too much solar energy consumption. But it didn't matter. Eve wouldn't need to hold it for long. With a thought, she switched back to offense mode, her right arm reshaping into a sonic cannon. Take this, she fired, and a blast of sonic waves struck the kaiju, stunning it in place. Eve didn't hesitate. Her arms shifted into massive plasma swords, and she sliced through the kaiju's wings, cutting them off in one swift motion. The beast fell, crashing through buildings below, but its defiance burned hotter than ever. With a sudden movement, it curled into a ball, using its hard exoskeleton as a defensive shell, and rolled toward the city. Mark saw it immediately. Nope, With a boom, he blasted forward, landing directly in front of the kaiju's rolling form, catching it mid-roll. The sheer force would have sent any other hero aside from him and his father flying, but he didn't budge. Instead, Mark lifted the kaiju into the air like it weighed nothing, his muscles barely even flexing from the effort before throwing it high into the air. Eve, finish it. Eve morphed her entire suit into a massive energy cannon, glowing with blinding solar energy as she unleashed a concentrated blast. Boom. The kaiju was vaporized, leaving nothing behind but a cloud of dissipating energy. Eve stared at her hands in shock. Damn, that was ridiculous. She flew down toward Mark, her suit returning to its normal state. Mark, this suit is insane, she exclaimed, excitement shining in her eyes. It's so fast, so powerful, and it lets me switch combat styles instantly. Mark smirked, arms crossed. I'm glad it works so well. Before they could continue, a voice called out. Wow, way to make a group of heroes feel inadequate. Turning, they saw the guardians of the globe approaching. Robot, Monster Girl, Duplicate, Black Samson, and Rexplode stood in formation. Eve's mood soured instantly at the sight of Rex and Kate, blatantly stepping closer to Mark. Mark greeted them casually. What brings you guys here? Robot responded. We were dispatched to handle the threat, but it appears you and Adam Eve neutralized it before we arrived. Rex, looking awkward, eyed Eve's suit. So what's up with the new outfit? Eve didn't even look at him. Just something thoughtful that Mark got me. Silence. Mark internally sighed as the awkward tension grew. Thankfully, Amanda, Monster Girl, broke the ice. She wrapped Mark in a tight hug. Hey Mark, she said brightly. Mark groaned, covering his face. Why do I even bother with a secret identity anymore? Eve, however, glared at Amanda, confused and slightly irritated. Who is this? Mark exhaled. I guess you didn't notice since she looks different. But this is Monster Girl. Amanda transformed briefly, but instead of her usual hulking form, her monster form looked smaller and scrawnier than before. Mark blinked. Damn, I didn't account for your monster form getting weaker the older you got. Amanda nodded. Yeah, that's something I wanted to talk to you about. Eve, still confused, asked. Wait, what's going on? Mark explained. I've been working on a cure for Amanda's condition. Every time she transforms, she gets younger. I managed to reverse her aging and restore her correct age. Now, I'm working on a way to permanently fix the curse. Nearby, Robot clenched his fist silently. Mark added, I just got my hands on a rare material that should help with getting her to not lose age as she transforms. Amanda hugged Mark again, this time causing jealousy to flare up, not just from Robot, but from Eve and even Rex. Rex had tried hitting on Monster Girl, seeing her as a total babe now that she was in her adult form. However, all that did was earn him a punch to the face, sending his body flailing from her monster form. That was another reason Robot decided against taking Rex's blood and was more interested in acquiring Mark's. Then, unexpectedly, Black Samson stepped forward. He looked directly at Mark. You fixed Monster Girl's condition. I was wondering if you could fix mine. Mark hesitated, surprised by the request. I can try. I'll stop by Guardians HQ soon and run some scans. Black Samson nodded, trying to keep his hopes in check, but deep down, a flicker of excitement grew. Then, Eve cut in, stepping between Mark and Amanda, grabbing Mark's arm possessively. Mark, let's get back to our lair. Rex, visibly jealous, asked. Eve, can we talk? Eve cut him off immediately. There's nothing to say. And with that, she flew off, pulling Mark with her. Mark glanced back at Amanda and smiled. I'll have good news for you soon. Amanda waved back with a goofy, sweet smile, but Robot, watching from the shadows, burned with frustration. His mind raced. He needed Mark's DNA, but every attempt to extract it had failed. His nanobots couldn't cut through Mark's hair. They couldn't pierce his skin, and skin cells wouldn't be enough. Robot's opticals narrowed. I need to find a way to get his DNA, because if he wanted Amanda, he needed to be just like Mark. The battle was over. The city was safe. Eve had been placated with ice cream. Mark flew through the sky, making his way home. Eve's suit had worked exceptionally well, more than he had expected. The adaptive transformation system, the hard light shielding, all of it functioned seamlessly, and her enthusiasm was contagious. She was beyond excited about its capabilities. As he descended toward his house, he was ready for a quiet night, but the moment he landed on the front doorstep and opened the door, he instantly regretted coming home. Mark's superhuman senses picked up everything immediately. The faint scent of sweat and pheromones still lingered in the air. The way the couch cushions looked a little too fluffed up. The floor had been wiped down hastily. The subtle but distinct rush of wind from a super speed cleaning job. Mark's brain shut down as he stared at his now very suspiciously casual parents, sitting together on the couch like a couple of teenagers caught breaking curfew. Nolan, looking far too composed, leaned back, arms spread across the couch. Debbie, sitting next to him, pretended to be reading a magazine, flipping a page way too quickly. For a few long, excruciating seconds, there was silence. Mark's face remained blank as he just stared at them. Finally, in the flattest, most deadpan voice possible, he spoke. I'm moving out. Without waiting for a response, he turned around and walked straight to his room. As he disappeared down the hall, Debbie whispered to Nolan, do you think he noticed? Nolan, crossing his arms, smirked confidently. I don't think so. Both of them sat completely oblivious to the fact that Mark absolutely noticed. Mark entered his room, rubbing his face in exasperation. I did not need to know that. Shaking his head, he turned his focus towards something more important, moving out. It's about time I left anyway. He had already built up his company, established a secure lab, and developed a private place for research and training. There was no reason for him to stay at his parents' house anymore. But before finishing his move, there was something else he needed to check on. Standing in the middle of his room, with the wave of his hand, he opened a portal. The fabric of reality warped, revealing a shimmering gateway leading to his private domain, his dimension of solitude. Stepping through, Mark entered his hidden laboratory, a massive space filled with cutting-edge technology, ancient flaxen artifacts, and genetic research. The first thing he saw was the Immortal's body. Lying on a metal examination table, the head and body were separated, but both were preserved perfectly. The Immortal's unique regenerative properties had kept the body from decaying, even in its dormant state. Nearby, on another table, was a prototype wrist device, the one he showed Omni-Man during their fight, a blue and yellow watch with an hourglass symbol. Mark picked it up. The concept came from the comics, where Rudy, Robot, had built a similar device for Amanda to prevent her from de-aging when she transformed. He had spent countless hours studying the temporal mechanics of the flaxen dimension and Monster Girl's blood, analyzing the discrepancies between time flow on different planes of existence and the temporal discrepancies between the blood of her human form and her monster form. By manipulating those principles, he was close to developing a way to halt her biological de-aging. Mark began to work on the device, and after spending 2 entire days in the flaxen dimension, working tirelessly without needing to eat or sleep, he had successfully stabilized the device. This should work for Amanda, Mark stated, his device now fully capable of halting her de-aging process, but allowing her to grow. Mark's eyes then drifted back to the Immortal's body. He had been contemplating what to do with it. The Immortal's genetic structure held the key to biological immortality. If Mark could isolate the correct sequences, he could potentially grant true immortality to others. But the ethical dilemma loomed over him. Immortality isn't a gift. It's a curse. The future version of the Immortal had become unstable, his human mind broken from centuries of loss and war. If those he loved and trusted wished for longer lifespans, he would have used the watch he made for Amanda, instead, modifying it to prevent aging rather than preventing de-aging. However, for a regular human, the burden of eternal life could be psychologically devastating. Mark sighed. He made his decision. I won't grant humans immortality. Instead, he would use his other solutions. He had long ago planned to give the modified watch to his mom for his father. However, he now thinks he could imbue people with Kryptonian genetics using the Codex within his soul. The Codex contained the genetic templates of all Kryptonian bloodlines throughout history. With it, Mark could theoretically transform other beings into Kryptonians themselves, granting them long lives, enhanced abilities, and even resistance to the mental strain of immortality. Mark thinks this would be a better choice for his mom, as being ageless could still mean you die, and her mental facilities would be better off with an enhanced Kryptonian brain, which could handle having a long lifespan. And with Yellow Sun-fueled Kryptonian bodies, they would be able to handle immortality. But it would always be a choice. and he needed to ensure there was a way to undo it if someone ever wished to return to normal. That's a task for the future, Mark thought. Now that he completed Amanda's watch, he could focus on moving out. Using super speed, Mark began packing up his belongings, transferring them one by one to his private quarters within his company's headquarters. Within minutes, the room was completely empty. Carrying one last box, Mark walked downstairs, where Debbie and Nolan were waiting. Debbie's eyes softened as she saw the boxes. Mark, you don't have to go. Nolan, meanwhile, looked suspiciously pleased. Mark raised an eyebrow. I really think you two need more space for each other. Debbie's face turned red, while Nolan smirked knowingly. Mark's all grown up now, Nolan said smoothly. He's more than capable of living on his own. Debbie sighed before placing both hands on Mark's face. Fine, but you better keep visiting us. Mark chuckled. Of course. Debbie smiled. And you'll have to show us your new place. Yeah, he said with a smirk before turning toward the door. I'll see you guys later. As Mark flew off, Nolan wrapped an arm around Debbie's waist, pulling her close. His voice turned flirtatious. At least now we have the whole house to ourselves. Debbie let out a small giggle as Nolan swept her off her feet, carrying her upstairs in a blur of motion. The house, once filled with Mark's presence, now belonged entirely to them, and neither of them wasted a second of it. A month had passed since I moved out, and life had been eventful, to say the least. Balancing hero work, running a company, and keeping up with my friends was a lot easier when you had super speed in a dimension where time moved slower. If I ever needed an extra week to finish a project, I could just step into my personal dimension for a few seconds. Time management was hardly an issue when I could cheat physics. During the month, I invited my parents over for dinner at my new place, my private floor at Invincible Incorporated. I showed them around, letting them take in the luxury, guest rooms, a private office, a master bedroom with an attached bathroom, a hot tub, a theater, a pool room, a gaming lounge, and my own lab. Nolan seemed proud, in his own quiet way, while Debbie kept sneaking looks between me and Eve, her expression a little too amused. You just had to leave the house so soon, huh? Debbie teased as she looked around my new place, arms folded as she exchanged a look with Eve. Or maybe it wasn't just to give you space you were after. Mom, I groaned, running a hand through my hair, already feeling the heat rise to my face. Eve, despite her usual confidence, also looked flustered, clearing her throat and very intently focusing on setting down the silverware. Nolan just chuckled, clearly enjoying my suffering. Traitor, I have to say, Mark, this is an impressive space, he admitted, eyeing my private floor with a knowing expression. You went all out. Maybe, I'll have to take a company from one of my villains. I told you I wasn't moving out for anything other than to give you two privacy, I said, trying to shift the conversation. Debbie just hummed, unconvinced and with a red face. I took a bite of my food and gave Eve a quick glance. We were spending lots of time together, helping manage the company, working on our humanitarian projects, and doing hero work together. It wasn't like we were dating, but I wasn't stupid. I knew where this was going. And so did my mom. Eve, being no help at all through the teasing, just smiled at Debbie. Well, it is nice to have a professional space for our work and a personal space to get away from my parents. We're making real progress on everything. That was true. Between balancing hero work, running our business, and managing our projects, things were moving faster than ever. The fluid fabric pre-order line had been launched for hospitals, police, and the GDA, finally bringing in income for the company. Eve also used her powers to supply free food to shelters and partnered with local farms creating plants and ensuring affordable, abundant food for struggling communities. Eve and I would sell food for much cheaper than should be possible, but since there is no production cost due to Eve's powers, we could afford to do so. We didn't want to sell high to make it more accessible, but we needed some money to open up facilities across the world as places to give out free food to the public. Eve also has been studying a lot about business in preparation for her new role as head of the resources department of the company and plans to get a business degree at Upstate U, which she plans to attend with me. Our company was growing, and with it, so was our impact across the world. But despite all the professional success, there were personal matters to deal with. One of them being Monster Girl. Amanda stood in Mark's dimension of solitude, staring at the strange, alien landscape around her. Towering red mountains, shimmering crystal fields, and floating AI drones roamed the vast artificial world Mark had created. The drones were designed after the Superman robots he remembered from modern media. He made them using his knowledge of Kryptonian robotics, but the only difference from the Superman robots was instead of the House of El symbol, they had the Viltrumite symbol. This place is unreal, Amanda muttered as Mark led her toward the main laboratory, where a device sat waiting for her. A sleek, yellow and blue wristwatch with an hourglass symbol rested on a high-tech platform. This is for you, Mark said, gesturing to it. Once you put it on, it'll stabilize your body. No more de-aging every time you transform. Amanda reached out, hesitant, before slowly picking up the watch. She stared at it, taking in the intricate designs before sliding it onto her wrist. That's it, she asked. Mark nodded. Try transforming. Taking a deep breath, Amanda shifted. Her form grew in size, muscles expanding as her monstrous figure emerged. But this time, she didn't feel the familiar pull, the sensation of losing years of her life. She looked at Mark, eyes wide. It worked. Mark smirked. Of course it did. Amanda flexed her arms, testing out her monstrous strength before reverting to human form. A weight lifted from her chest. You don't know how much this means to me. But then she frowned, looking at her hands. The only issue is, I've lost strength. Mark sighed. Yeah, since your body reverted to 24, your monster form is weaker than before. But I might have a solution. Amanda perked up. What kind of solution? Mark smirked. I can modify the watch so that while your human form stays at 24, your monster form continues to develop naturally over time. You'll also be able to work out in that form and keep the gains. Amanda blinked, processing his words. So, I'd still get stronger? Exactly. For a moment, Amanda just stared at him. Then, she lunged forward and pressed her lips against his. Mark stiffened at the suddenness before relaxing into the kiss. They continued making out for a while, passionately crossing tongues with each other. Thank you, she whispered after pulling back. Seriously, Mark, in a daze, just responded. Why yeah, no problem. Amanda seemed really grateful, then, hesitant about something. They were all alone in Mark's dimension of solitude. So, time here works differently, right? She asked, eyes gleaming with interest. Yeah, Mark nodded. 10 minutes in the real world is about a year here. Amanda blinked. A year. Mark smirked at her stunned expression. Yeah, it's useful when I need time to think, or work on something without the world noticing I'm gone. Amanda's expression shifted. She was inwardly thinking this would be a good place for some privacy together for a while. But after a moment, she knew she had to go back to her home and prepare herself if she wanted to stay. Amanda just nodded cryptically. Good to know. Mark had a feeling that the conversation wasn't over. Mark had already helped Amanda, but there was another guardian who needed assistance. Black Samson. Ever since losing his powers, Samson had been struggling to keep up with the new generation of heroes. That's why he built a restoration chamber. He built a chamber that would put Samson in a near-death state by depriving him of oxygen and shocking him with high-voltage electricity, essentially jump-starting his powers. It was a gamble, but it was the best chance he had. You sure about this? Mark asked as Samson stood in front of the machine. Samson clenched his fists. I have to be. I won't be dead weight anymore. Mark sighed, stepping back. All right, just brace yourself. The process wasn't painless. Samson screamed as his body convulsed, the machine draining oxygen before sending a massive electrical charge through his system. The pain was overwhelming, but then, something clicked. His body absorbed the energy. Samson gasped, eyes snapping open. Power surged through his veins. His lost strength had returned, stronger than ever. Mark helped him out of the chamber, watching as Samson flexed his hands. How do you feel? Samson grinned. better than ever. He turned to Mark, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. I owe you Invincible. If you ever need anything at all, you call on me. Mark nodded. You got it. A month of preparation had led to this moment. Mark, knowing that Angstrom Levy's appearance was imminent, increased surveillance on the Mahler twins, who were locked up in GDA cells after their last failed bank heist by none other than Eve and himself. And when the moment came, he was ready. Mark's POV. I had been monitoring the Mahler twins for weeks, waiting for the inevitable. And today it happened. My Overwatch computer pinged. I turned toward the holographic screen, watching as two glowing green portals formed in the Mahler cells, and they walked through it. I waited for a little bit, so that the trackers I implanted into their skin during the time Eve and I took them down would indicate when they would return to this dimension. Then, their location reappeared at a warehouse. It's time. I blasted off, soaring through the sky toward the warehouse where Angstrom Levy had brought the Mahler twins. By the time I arrived, the Mahler twins were talking with him, asking him what he needed them for. I didn't hesitate. In a blur, I moved behind them, tapping their necks with just enough force to knock each of them out. Levy had no time to react before I was on him. His eyes widened in shock before I knocked him out too. No dangerous supervillain today, buddy, I muttered excitedly. Opening a portal, I dragged his unconscious body through, straight into my dimension, leaving the Mahler twins face planted on the floor. By the time Levy woke up, he was strapped to an examination table, locked inside a containment cell, one designed to block interdimensional travel. Even I couldn't use magic to portal out of it, but I wasn't sure if it would work with Angstrom's abilities. If this worked, he was trapped. His eyes darted around in panic. Where am I? I stood outside the cell, arms crossed. Somewhere safe. Levy's face twisted in confusion, then rage. What did you do to me? I spoke plainly. Let's just say, I need your powers more than you do. This wasn't the most ethical thing I'd done, but I needed his abilities, and I couldn't afford to let him roam free. So, I had to place Levy into a medically induced coma, ensuring he wouldn't be able to escape, and I could work in peace. I surrounded him with scanners, for lines, and containment fields built using my Kryptonian knowledge of biology, technology, and medicine. My machines, made for genetic engineering, analyzed his DNA, pinpointing the gene responsible for his dimension hopping. Previously, months of research in the Flaxen dimension studying human genetics and Kryptonian genetic engineering had led to this moment. Now, after a few weeks of recording everything I could about Angstrom's biology, I built two chambers, one to splice Levy's DNA and extract the gene granting him his powers, the other strong enough to affect even Viltrumite biology and infuse those genes into me. I had some trouble substituting some Kryptonian technology for Flaxen, but I got the necessary components together. But before I could begin the process, I had to spend a long time draining myself of my solar levels to weaken my Kryptonian abilities. To do this, I spent a long time shooting my heat vision into space, but the time it was taking to do so would be too long for me to patiently do. So I resorted to something I didn't think I would be pushed to use for a while. Superman's solar flare. On paper, the technique seemed pretty easy, pushing out all your solar energy stores out into an omnidirectional attack. So I did just that. I went out into space, taking a deep breath before doing so, and dug deep within myself. Feeling the energy in my body, I began to push it all out, causing my body to deplete my energy levels and explode in light like a star. After doing so, I felt myself get dramatically weaker. I hadn't felt this weak in a while, but it seems like I'm still pretty strong. My half Viltrumite physiology continued adapting my strength, so even without my half Kryptonian physiology being fueled by a yellow sun, I'm still stronger than my father. When everything was ready, I placed Angstrom in his chamber before climbing into my own and pressing a button on the inside. This closed both of our chambers, starting up the machines and initiating the process. Levy screamed awake, agony contorting his features as the machine forcibly spliced his very DNA and stripped his abilities. I felt a moment of pity, but I didn't stop it. Then it was my turn. The pain was unbelievable, like my body was being torn to shreds and rewritten on an atomic level. My muscles seized as though they were locked in place. I had to build the machine strong enough to bypass my smart atom's resistances and force them to accept and adapt to the new gene, but that brought about unimaginable pain. Not so ashamed to say I blacked out at moments. And then, it was over. The machine powered down, and I stayed still for a long moment, before picking myself up and staggering forward, sweating for the first time in a long while. My breath hitched as I raised my hand, and without the use of my magic will, the green portal opened. Poking my head through the other side, I saw a familiar red sky, the Flaxen dimension. But there were differences, specifically the people who were looking at the portal. In this dimension, the Flaxens were still alive. Pulling back my head and willing the portal away, I clenched my fist, my heart pounding. It worked. I now had the power to go beyond just the invincible universe. Levy, meanwhile, groaned on the table, weak and powerless. His eyes, once filled with intelligent arrogance, now only reflected despair. What did you do to me? I met his glare without flinching. I took your powers. His face twisted in rage. You stole them. You had no right. I cut him off. You weren't equipped to handle them. I know what you would have done. In the future, you would have gone on to cause a war, killing millions of people for the sake of revenge on one single person that caused you no harm. Levy's rage turned to confusion. W, what are you talking about? What war? That doesn't matter anymore, because without your powers that future will be prevented, and I will use them for a better cause. I told him. I sort of embellished the truth since that was a different variant of Angstrom. Or, was it because I'm the different variant? Either way, it was a possible future, so it technically wasn't a lie. He kept shouting at me, cursing my name. I ignored him. I didn't want to kill him as he was the Angstrom who hadn't turned completely evil, but I couldn't leave him here either. I'd use my new powers to find a dimension for him, somewhere peaceful, where he couldn't cause harm. But this was the beginning point of new adventures across the multiverse for me. In the desolate expanse of his dimension of solitude, Mark stood amidst the barren wasteland, the silence around him profound. Angstrom Levy was placed back into a deep coma within his cell, monitored vigilantly by the ever-watchful Invincibots. Mark came to this wasteland in order to test the new ability gained from Levy. Mark hadn't brought himself out here just for the quiet. He was here to test the new power he'd taken from Levy. And even now, he could feel it thrumming beneath his skin, foreign but not unfamiliar. The gene transfer hadn't just changed his biology, it had changed his perception. Somehow, the moment he absorbed Angstrom's dimensional abilities, the knowledge came with it. It wasn't like learning a new language. It was more like suddenly remembering one he didn't know he knew. He could now sense the structure of the multiverse, feel its subtle shifts. When he opened a portal, he instinctively received essentially a snapshot of the dimension he was about to step into, a mental overview of the planet he'll land on, its key features, and how it differed from his own dimension. He can even do this better than Levy could do to his enhanced brain. Still, there were rules, limitations. He couldn't hop around within the same dimension using Levy's portals. They were purely interdimensional, and every portal always opened in the same spatial location. So if he opened one on Earth, he'd arrive at the equivalent location in that dimension. Kind of rigid, but honestly, that was fine. All he really needed was access to other fictional universes. Everything else, traveling within a dimension, he could handle with his body or his using his own portal magic. Mark's teleportation and portal magic operated differently from Levy's portal abilities, because, while he could teleport within a single dimension, crossing into different dimensions required Levy's abilities. This distinction stemmed from the nature of his powers. Unlocking the Kryptonian Magi gene from the Codex had granted Mark access to magical energy, or mana, a constant force permeating the universe. His body absorbed and stored this mana, with his capacity increasing as he aged. His portal magic, a fundamental application of dimensional magic, was basic and not limited to the Kryptonian Magi. Lots of mystics from different corners of the DC universe used portal magic. Even the Homo Magi could do so. Kryptonian magic was a realm apart, seldom utilized by Mark except for healing purposes. His ability to heal his father, Nolan, and Alan was actually a manifestation of Kryptonian magic. Historically, Krypton harbored a group of mystics in a secluded valley known as the Valley of Jiru. This valley radiated concentrated magical energy, granting those exposed to the energy for a long time the capability to learn magic. These individuals diverged from Krypton's focus on science and immersed themselves in magical studies, eventually identifying as the Kryptonian Magi. They categorized their practices into 4 elemental disciplines: air, water, fire, and earth. A practitioner's classification depends on their affinity and mastery over these elements, with some adept in multiple disciplines. Thanks to the Codex, Mark had the genetic potential to wield all 4, but he knew his strengths were strongest in the air element, likely because it was the one he had practiced the most. As an air magi, Mark possessed abilities such as healing, the skill he used to heal Nolan and Alan, purification, air manipulation, and object creation. Fire magi, in addition to healing, could restore a Kryptonian's powers, manipulate fire, and dispel magical spells. Water magi had healing capabilities, could possess individuals, exert mind control, induce temporal stasis, manipulate water in its various forms, and transfer essences or emotional qualities. Earth magi, while lacking the ability to heal others, could self-heal, produce, and transform into sunstones and other materials, manipulate earth, and craft weapons and armor. It was a lot, a whole other world of abilities inside him, waiting to be explored. But for now, he focused on his dimensional abilities. Mark started opening small rifts, peering through the swirling green portals. At first, all he saw were different versions of the Flaxen homeworld. That made sense. He was still in their dimension. Across the multiverse, their world probably occupied similar spatial coordinates. So he decided to portal back to Earth. With the use of his magic, Mark disappeared from the wasteland and reappeared on the rooftop of his company headquarters. Mark's use of magic to travel between the Flaxen dimension and Earth is only possible due to his familiarity with both. At first, he just used the device he built to travel between the two, but after spending time in both, he was used to the dimensional signature of both, allowing him to travel there. It also helped with both being in the same multiverse. Standing beneath the open sky, he activated Levy's powers again and opened a portal, this time to alternate Earths. That's when things got interesting. One portal showed a version of Canon Invincible standing beside Omni-Man, ruling over a conquered Earth. Another showed Canon Invincible bloodied and defiant, stopping Nolan's attempted takeover. There were even stranger ones, realities where he, the reincarnated Mark, became a tyrant. Intriguingly, these counterparts possessed Kryptonian abilities suggesting they had the Codex, but seemed unable to acquire Levy's powers, possibly due to the absence of a Levy with powers in their universes or the differing circumstances of their universe. Observing these alternate selves was a profound experience. Some versions of him lacked empathy, wielding their powers selfishly, while others dedicated themselves to the betterment of the universe. There were also those who prioritized personal relationships, choosing not to interfere with worldly affairs, with some even seeking ways to relinquish or seldom use their powers. One particular vision stood out, a version of himself who, alongside the immortal Eve, stood together at the end of time, witnessing the universe's rebirth. No words were spoken, just the weight of eternity shared between two people who chose each other. This introspection prompted Mark to reflect on his own path. He wasn't sure what his future would hold, but he'll continue to live in the present and have a nice future like the one he saw. Eventually, Mark opened another portal, one that led far beyond anything related to his own universe. And what he saw next made him grin like a kid. Mark saw a red and blue-clad web-slinger battling a man with mechanical tentacles attached to his back, exchanging quips amidst the chaos. A surge of excitement coursed through Mark as he recognized the scene. Memories flooded back of reading Spider-Man comics and watching The Spectacular Spider-Man. Spider-Man had always been among his top heroes, alongside the Flash and Superman, embodying an unyielding will to persevere despite life's adversities. Mark leaned forward, eyes wide. No way. It brought back everything. Memories of lying in a hospital bed in his old life, reading comics, watching Spectacular Spider-Man, wishing he could be like Peter Parker, not because of the powers, but because of the heart. The way he kept going, no matter how many times he was knocked down by life. That kind of strength would always mean more to Mark than super speed or flight. He remembered in the show when Spider-Man was trapped under a large machine and could have just given up when he was tired, but he pushed through just to save Gwen Stacy. Seeing him now, alive and moving, was surreal. The multiverse really is endless, he thought. And now, it was his to explore. He made a mental note, find a good world for Angstrom. Something quiet, peaceful, somewhere the guy could start over without being a threat. After all, Mark didn't hate him. He just couldn't let him keep that kind of power. The weeks that followed were packed. Mark balanced school, company work, and hero stuff with Eve like a pro. His time in the Flaxen dimension, combined with his super speed, gave him all the hours in the day he needed. Eve took the lead on community outreach, building food programs, coordinating disaster response efforts. And their company, it was thriving. Then graduation day arrived. Mark, Eve, Amber, and William all stood in the crowd, caps on, waiting to be called. Mark had always been a good student, even before his powers. But with his heightened intellect, senior year had been a breeze. Still, it was an accomplishment, one he was proud of. After the ceremony, he spotted his parents in the crowd and made his way over. Debbie pulled him into a hug the second she saw him. You did it, she said, beaming. I'm so proud of you. Careful, Nolan said with a smirk. Don't hurt our baby boy. Debbie rolled her eyes. He's literally indestructible. Nolan grinned. I meant the second baby. Mark blinked. Wait, what? Debbie hesitated, then laughed. Surprise. I'm pregnant. About 3.5 weeks. Mark's jaw dropped. Seriously? She nodded. And if it's a boy, we're naming him Oliver. After my dad. Olivia if it's a girl. Mark chuckled. It was another sign of how far things had diverged from the original timeline. In the comics, he had a Flaxen half-brother. But here, he was getting a human Viltrumite sibling. Before the moment could settle, Nolan's GDA communicator buzzed. He answered with a sigh. Cecil's voice came through, crackling. Doc Seismic's broken out again. You're up. On it. Nolan replied with a huff, already floating into the air. I'll drop Debbie off first. They flew off, leaving Mark to meet up with his friends. William left with his parents. Amber had plans to celebrate with her family on the weekend, and Eve, well, she didn't talk to her family much anymore. So it ended up being just the three of them, Mark, Eve, and Amber, heading back to his place. Amber had never seen where Mark and Eve lived, and she was curious. Once they arrived, they let loose, throwing a low-key celebration for themselves. Karaoke, snacks, and laughter filled the air of Mark's theater room. At one point, Mark took the mic and started singing Love by Keisha Cole, and he nailed it. Both girls stared, wide-eyed, caught off guard by how good he was. Okay, Amber said as he finished. Why didn't I know you could sing? Seriously, Eve added, smiling. That was amazing. Mark shrugged, blushing a little. I don't know. I never really tried before. Amber smiled, then threw a look Eve's way. What do you say? Hot tub. Eve hesitated for a second, then nodded, a bit shy. Yeah, sounds nice. Mark, oblivious to the silent exchange between the girls, led them to the guest room to grab swimsuits. A few minutes later, he was the first one in the tub, enjoying the calm. The heat didn't bother him, but the atmosphere, the peacefulness, that was something he could get used to. When Amber and Eve entered the room, he looked up and smiled. They were both stunning. Eve wore a pink tube top suit that complemented her perfectly, and Amber's violet one-piece gave her a graceful presence. Mark, feeling a sense of calm, just looked at both girls. You guys both look amazing. Amber and Eve smiled at that before dipping themselves into the hot tub on either side of Mark. The air was warm, the water soothing, and for a few moments, none of them said anything, enjoying the surrounding company. Amber and Eve looked at each other across Mark's chest, realizing that now was the time. Flashback. Amber and Eve had already decided to meet up with each other after Mark ended up joining them on their college tour and told them about how he and the other Viltrumites would have to focus on repopulating the Empire on Earth. They ended up meeting at Amber's house when her family weren't home. Amber, taking in a breath, started off the discussion. I don't know if you know this, but I've been sleeping with Mark. This threw Eve for a loop and she didn't respond immediately, and Amber hurried to explain. It wasn't some casual fling. I mean, it started that way because, well, we didn't think a relationship made sense, you know? His lifespan, his powers, his responsibilities. He tried to push me away, said it wouldn't be fair to me. And you didn't agree? Amber gave a dry smile. At first I did. I told myself I could handle it. That I could just be someone in his life for now. That even if he outlived me, even if we weren't together, I'd still matter to him. She looked down at her hands. But I was lying to myself. Eve's expression softened. The more time we spent together, the way he talked to me, how he looked at me like I was his anchor to a normal life, it changed how I felt. I fell for him, Eve. Hard. Amber looked up, her eyes clearer now. And I don't want to give that up. Even if I do die before him, even if he has to move on one day, I want to be part of his life while I can. She hesitated. I want to give him something lasting. A child. Someone who'll live on, even if I don't. The words hung in the air like thunderclouds. Eve felt her throat tighten. Are you serious? She asked gently. Amber met her gaze without flinching. Yeah, I am. And I know what that means. I know I'll probably have to share him. Because this isn't just about us. It's about his people, his future. And I'm okay with that. There was silence again, but this time it felt heavier, more intimate. The truth had been laid bare between them. Amber tilted her head. What about you, Eve? How do you feel about him? Eve looked down, fiddling with the hem of her shirt, her heart thudding in her chest. I love him. Amber didn't react, just waited, listening. It's not just admiration or a crush. Eve continued, her voice shaking a little. It's the way he's always treated me like an equal. The way he believes in me. He's been this light in my life, even when everything else felt dark. With my parents, with Rex, with everything going on in the world. He's just always there. Solid. Real. Amber gave her a small smile, but there was still one more question hanging between them. Do you love him enough to share him? Eve looked up at her, hesitantly, but not angry, just thoughtful. She thought of Rex, of how he cheated, how he lied, how he promised monogamy and broken it without a thought. Rex hurt me because he pretended I was the only one, Eve said. He said I was everything to him while he was sneaking around behind my back. Amber nodded, quietly understanding. But with Mark, Eve went on. I'd know from the beginning what I was getting into. He's honest. He doesn't hide his intentions. He's already said he's not sure what the future holds, but he'd never lie about it. She looked away for a moment, then back at Amber. So yeah, I'd rather be part of something honest with Mark than lie to myself in a relationship built on promises someone's not going to keep. Amber's smile grew, bittersweet but warm. Then I guess we're doing this together. Eve laughed softly, shaking her head. This has got to be the weirdest heart-to-heart I've ever had. Amber smirked. Yeah, but at least we're not fighting over him like some bad reality show. Eve raised an eyebrow. Not yet. They both burst into laughter then, an honest, relieved kind of laughter that came from two girls who had just stepped over a cliff together and found solid ground on the other side. No drama, no cruelty, just truth. Flashback end. Mark sat in silence for a long moment, staring down at the rippling water. Amber and Eve had just told him about their conversation. He felt his chest tighten, not in panic, but something more powerful. Gratitude. Oh, love. He looked at Amber first. You bring peace into my life. A sense of normalcy, even when everything around me is chaos. Just doing the little things with you, grabbing food, watching movies, walking through a park. It reminds me that I'm still human. And that means more to me than I can explain. Then he turned to Eve. And you've always been right there, even when things got crazy. You've supported my decisions, challenged me when I needed it, and stood by me through things most people would run from. I don't think I'd be half the person I am today without you in my corner. His voice dipped just slightly, the weight of the moment settling into the steam. I love both of you, and I know this won't always be easy, but if you're both sure, if this is what you want, then I want to be with you. I want us. For a heartbeat, no one said anything. Then Amber's eyes shimmered as she reached for his hand. He followed a breath later, sliding hers into his other. They squeezed in unison. Yes, Amber whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, Eve echoed, a tear slipping down her cheek. Mark leaned in and kissed Amber first, gentle, meaningful, before turning to Eve, pressing his forehead to hers for a moment before brushing a kiss to her lips. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't messy or wild. It was honest. Breaking away from the kiss, Mark stood up and lifted both girls with each arm, taking them back to his room and laying them down on his bed. Both looked incredibly sexy, and he'll take both of them right now. Let him start. After laying both girls on his king-sized bed, Eve used her powers to take off all their clothing, leaving them naked. Unintentionally, Mark compared the sizes of both girls. He noticed that Eve had D-cup breasts which were a cup size bigger than Amber's, whereas Amber had a fatter ass than Eve did. But both of those differences didn't mean anything to him, since they were both beautiful to him. The throuple started off by making out with each other. Each girl switched who would kiss Mark on the mouth, while the other would kiss up and down his body. Mark contemplated who to start off with first, but ended up having the decision made for him. Eve, you should go first. You haven't even got a taste of him yet. Amber spoke in a sultry tone. Okay, Eve said, slightly surprised at the idea. But she knew this would be her new normal in this relationship, having another person watching her have sex with her boyfriend. Mark reached into his drawer to pull out some condoms. When Amber asked why he was bringing those out, while I will need to focus on repopulating in the future, I don't think we should do it so soon, seeing as we'll be in college studying and such, replied Mark. All right, but the moment we graduate, you better stuff me with your baby batter, Amber whispered sensually into his ear. Mark had an anime-style nosebleed at the image of him surrounded by big-bellied, pregnant Amber and Eve. But he quickly wiped it away and focused back on the expecting Eve. And then put it in me. Mark, I'm ready, Eve said, her pussy dripping like a faucet. Mark needed no more words after that. He practically plunged his penis into Eve's expecting pussy, causing her to mewl in pleasure. On, shouted Eve, not expecting the wave of pleasure as she finally connected with Mark. He moved at a slow pace, at first gradually getting her used to his big size, before slowly picking up the pace. Eve clung tightly to his back as she continued to be plowed and missionary. Amber, nearby, was watching the whole thing. She was wondering if the way Eve looked was the way she looked whenever she would have sex with Mark. Just looking was getting her hot and bothered, so she started pleasuring herself in an attempt to soothe the heat in her pussy. This only grew the desires within her, making her finger herself more fervently. Plat, 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 plat. The sounds of Mark and Eve's lovemaking continued to echo throughout the room. The pleasure was mind-boggling to Eve as she swung her hips, trying to feel Mark's cock into her even deeper than it already was. Mark was in no better condition. Eve's pussy had a tightness and warmth to it that made him want to never let go. He couldn't stop himself from thrusting even if he wanted to. On, so good. I'm going to come. Eve practically slurred out her words, overcome by the pleasure. I'm coming too, Mark growled. He felt himself being drained as he came inside Eve, who was shuddering, back arching from her own orgasm. She felt the warmth of Mark's seed protected by the condom, strengthening her orgasm. That was incredible, Eve said before kissing Mark once again. Mark, my turn now, Amber purred out, grabbing Mark's member and stroking it back to life. Amber continued stroking Mark's cock, before dipping her head down and giving it a few kisses and sucking the tip. Moving on, she began licking the shaft, getting it wet with her saliva. She, then, started deep-throating Mark's cock. Oh, that feels good, groaned Mark as he put his hand on the back of Amber's head. She had gotten much better at blowjobs since their first time. Slurp, slurp, slurp. Amber continued sucking away, but before Mark could come in her mouth, he pulled her off, wanting to come inside her. After Mark put on a condom, Amber climbed on top of him, her soaking pussy hovering over Mark's cock. She then inserted Mark's member inside of her, feeling it in her stomach. Amber moaned out while biting her lip. She then began bouncing up and down with Mark grabbing handfuls of her ass cheeks, bringing her down faster. Her ass was big, perfectly shaped, and felt firm in his hands. Mark has been having sex with Amber for a while, so he knows what got her going. He brought his mouth close to her chest and started sucking on her nipple. Itchin' in. Mark's actions prompted a loud moan out of her. She loved it when Mark sucked on her nipples, and he continued to do so while also smacking her ass at the same time. In. Yes, Mark, keep going. I'm almost there, Amber said, moving even faster, like she was trying to wring the cum out of him. Mark felt the urge to come rising and bucked his hips, meeting with Amber's motions. Until they both came with Amber coming first, her body jerking as she did so, and Mark filled her guts with his seed. Amber, having had a massive orgasm, kissed Mark, deeply interlocking tongues before falling on his chest with the cum-filled condom plopping out of her. At seeing the condom, Eve, who recovered and was still watching, did something Mark was expecting and took off the condom before emptying its contents down her throat. The sight of this got Mark hard again. Think you could go a few more rounds? Asked Eve in a tone full of desire. Me too, chimed in Amber, who planned to keep going a few more times. Of course, for my beautiful girlfriends, I'm always ready, replied Mark, causing both girls to blush. And he meant it. He could never refuse no matter how many times they wanted to keep going. His strong body meant he had strong vitality and recovered quickly, so he had no reason to stop. This led to the three spending all night together, constantly switching back and forth between the two ladies as they hadn't gotten completely comfortable with the other taking part in the lovemaking just yet. However, this night would bring them closer to that level. Lemon end. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Mark's master bedroom, casting a golden hue across the bed's soft sheets. The hum of the city below was distant, muffled by the height of the building. His private floor was quiet, a world apart from the chaos Mark and Eve usually dealt with. Mark stirred first, basking in the morning light. He was warm, but not just from the sun. Eve was curled against his left side, her arm draped over his chest, her breathing slow and steady. Amber was tucked into his right, her head resting just below his shoulder, a small smile still lingering on her lips from whatever dream she was having. A soft, contented sigh escaped him. Eve was the first to speak, her voice still a little groggy. That was amazing. Amber giggled softly as she opened her eyes. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I haven't felt this happy in a long time. Mark let out a small laugh, brushing some of Eve's hair from her face and kissing her forehead. I'm glad. I honestly didn't expect last night to go the way it did, but I wouldn't change a thing. Eve stretched a little before propping herself up on one elbow, her fingers trailing gently across Mark's chest. Me either. Amber nodded in agreement. Definitely. But the peaceful air was suddenly pierced by Eve's next question, casually dropped into the silence like a stone in a still lake. So, who else have you slept with? Mark blinked, his smile faltering slightly. He glanced at both of them. Eve raised an eyebrow. Amber smirked, clearly amused. I mean, Eve continued, sitting up a little more. I'm not mad or anything. But if we're doing this, us, together, I think we should be honest. Mark sighed, then ran a hand through his hair. Okay, fair. Amber nudged him playfully. Come on, playboy, spit it out. Mark gave a sheepish chuckle. Well, obviously Amber. And now you, he said, glancing at Eve. But aside from you two, Amanda. Eve's eyes widened slightly. Amanda? As in, monster girl Amanda. Yeah, Mark replied, a little embarrassed. It wasn't a relationship or anything. The first time was after I helped her with the de-aging issue. I think it was her way of showing appreciation. But we hung out a few times after that, and it just kind of happened. Eve raised her eyebrows. So that's why she was all over you last time. Mark gave a small, guilty smile. Yeah, sorry. I didn't really know how to bring it up. Wasn't sure it'd come up at all. Eve leaned back against the pillows, looking thoughtful more than anything else. You two did seem close. I remember her hugging you like it was second nature. Amber turned toward Eve. So how do you feel about it? Eve gave a shrug. Honestly, I don't mind. I knew what I was signing up for when we agreed to this. What about you? Amber answered thoughtfully. I don't mind as well. So long as you're honest about whoever you bring into our life. Eve nodded, her tone serious. Exactly. But there's a limit, Mark. Amber crossed her arms, looking stern as well. Yeah, no harem of a dozen girls, okay? Mark held his hands up. I promise. I'm not trying to build a space empire of girlfriends or anything. Eve raised an eyebrow. Yet. Hey, Mark laughed, leaning forward to kiss her gently. Then he turned and kissed Amber too. You two mean everything to me. I'll be careful. I swear. Amber rolled her eyes, but smiled. You better. Eve leaned back again, finally relaxing. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, what do we do today? Mark grinned. Well, first we eat. I don't know about you two, but I'm starving. I could go for waffles, Amber said. Waffles sound amazing, Eve agreed. I'll have those ready while we shower, Mark said, already reaching for his phone. Let me summon my food bots. Amber groaned with a laugh. Of course, you have food bots. What? You think I'm gonna cook after saving the world every other day? Mark teased. Eve laughed. Fair point. After a nice breakfast with Eve and Amber, Mark escorted Amber back to her house. Standing on her doorstep, he leaned in, sharing a passionate kiss with his new girlfriend. Amber smiled warmly before stepping inside, leaving Mark with a contented grin as he ascended into the sky. As he soared above the city, a persistent beeping emanated from his wristwatch. Activating the device, a holographic news report projected before him, displaying chaotic scenes of Atlantean soldiers attacking coastal cities. Buildings lay in ruins, civilians fled in terror, and local heroes valiantly attempted to repel the invaders. Amidst the turmoil, an Atlantean soldier's voice rang out clearly. We seek the one who killed our king. Mark's eyes narrowed. He knew exactly who they were referring to. Without hesitation, he altered his course, heading straight for his parents' home. Upon arrival, Mark entered to find his father, Nolan, already clad in his Omni-Man uniform. Debbie, his mother, was engaged in a heated argument with Cecil Stedman, the director of the Global Defense Agency. Sensing the tension, Mark interjected. What's going on? Cecil turned to him, his expression grave. If you've seen the news, you know the Atlanteans are waging war against the surface. They're demanding the one responsible for their king's death. Nolan's face was a mixture of frustration and guilt. Debbie crossed her arms, her tone sharp. And according to some stupid Atlantean law, the killer must marry the king's widow and assume the throne. Cecil nodded. That's correct. That's why I want to send Nolan to them. Debbie's eyes flashed with anger. There's no way I'm sharing my husband with a fish queen. That plan can go to hell. Cecil sighed. This situation wouldn't have arisen if Nolan hadn't killed the Guardians. Nolan's jaw tightened, the weight of his past actions pressing heavily upon him. Mark stepped forward, determination in his voice. Dad and I should meet with the queen and negotiate. There has to be a peaceful resolution. Cecil considered this. Fine, but if negotiations fail, Mark, you need to ensure your father takes responsibility. With that, he teleported away. Debbie placed a hand on Mark's arm, her voice softening. Please, make sure our family remains intact. Before her tone changed into a threatening tone. If my unborn baby has a fish stepmom, we'll end up having sashimi for dinner. Mark nodded a little nervous at the homicidal intent leaking from his mom. We will. Father and son flew to the GDA headquarters, where Cecil awaited with 2 Atlantean guards. Nolan addressed them directly. I'm the one who killed your king. Take us to your queen. The guards exchanged glances before pointing their spears at the duo, gesturing for them to follow. They boarded an Atlantean vessel that flew across the city and then submerged, descending into the ocean's depths toward Atlantis. As they neared the underwater city, Mark discreetly released nanobots from his suit, interfering with Nolan's in-ear comms to prevent Cecil from eavesdropping. Mark's own communication system was custom-built, allowing him to control when he could be reached. For now, he chose silence. Back at the GDA, Cecil frowned at the static in his earpiece. What's going on with the comms? An agent responded. There's interference, likely from Atlantis due to war defenses. Cecil's suspicion grew. He had previously maintained contact with Aquarius in Atlantis without issue. Deploy drones. I want eyes down there. Before disembarking, the Atlantean guards handed Mark and Nolan rebreathers. Mark examined the devices, impressed by their efficiency in extracting oxygen from water. He made a mental note to study them further for potential space travel applications. They were led into the grand hall of the Atlantean palace. Guards commanded them to bow before the queen, Aquaria. Both refused. Mark, understanding that a future leader mustn't show subservience when commanded, and Nolan, driven by Viltrumite pride and stubbornness. The guards bristled, ready to enforce their command, but the queen raised her hand, halting them. Nolan spoke first. I regret killing your king, but I cannot marry you. The queen's eyes narrowed. That barbaric custom is of the past. Your punishment will be trial by combat. Nolan smiled, confident in his abilities. Perfect. My wife will be happy about this. The Atlanteans brought Nolan before the chained Depth Dweller, a monstrous sea kaiju held captive in a trench within Atlantis. As the horns were played, signifying the start of combat, the Depth Dweller lunged at Nolan. As the fight began, it was clear how much better Nolan was compared to Canon Mark at this time. Drawing upon centuries of combat experience, Nolan maneuvered through the water with ease and finesse. The creature's massive pincers snapped close, but Nolan evaded, delivering powerful punches to its armored face. Bubbles erupted around them with each impact, the water distorting the shockwaves but not dulling their force. Nolan moved like a spear through the ocean, darting around the beast's limbs with practiced ease. The Depth Dweller roared, its bellow reverberating through the currents as it twisted, swinging one of its enormous claws toward Nolan. He ducked beneath it, looping around and landing a kick to the creature's forearm. There was a cracking sound, muffled by the water. Its arm broke under the pressure, but that only enraged the beast. The Depth Dweller opened its maw and released a pulsating sound wave. It wasn't a roar, it was a weapon, a sonic attack that vibrated through the ocean, distorting everything in its path. Nolan screamed, his hands flying to his ears. Blood trickled from them almost immediately as the high-frequency sound pierced his inner equilibrium. He was thrown off balance, tumbling through the water in a disoriented spin. Mark, watching from the sidelines, winced in pain as the wave reached him too. His hands instinctively rose to cover his ears as his frequency damaged him as well. But unlike Nolan, Mark had more control over his senses. His Kryptonian-enhanced body quickly adapted, filtering the frequency out and dampening the effect. Still, the initial blow had done damage. Nolan, dazed, tried to reorient himself. The Depth Dweller, sensing weakness, struck with its remaining claw, swatting Nolan toward the seafloor. Sand and stone erupted as his body crashed into the ocean bed. But the second the sonic attack stopped, Nolan's eyes flared with determination. He burst forward, trailing bubbles, no longer holding back. He swerved behind the beast's back, his arms straightened and crossed over his chest, and with one sharp motion, he delivered the infamous Viltrumite chop, a chopping strike that cleaved straight through the creature's uninjured arm. The Depth Dweller screamed again, but this time in pain. Nolan didn't pause. He caught the severed limb mid-float and swung it like a club, smashing it across the beast's head with incredible force. The creature reeled back, disoriented, one limb bleeding out into the deep blue. And then came the finishing blow. With a surge of speed, Nolan shot forward like a torpedo, fists pointed together in front of him. He pierced the creature's chest, straight through, exiting the other side in a burst of crimson and shredded flesh. The Depth Dweller let out one last guttural moan before collapsing into the depths, its body slowly descending to the ocean floor like a sinking mountain. Silence returned to the arena. Mark floated forward as the surrounding Atlanteans began murmuring. Most looked shocked. Some booed. Others bowed their heads in solemn respect. The queen stood slowly, nodding once. You are free to go. Nolan only nodded, blood still in his ears. Mark drifted beside him, gently grabbing his father's arm. Come on, let's not stick around, he said. They didn't wait for the escort ship. Together, father and son launched themselves upward, rising steadily toward the surface. As they ascended, Mark was intrigued by their compact design and planned to take both rebreathers they'd been given. He planned to reverse engineer them later to see if their technology could be adapted for zero-atmosphere environments in space. Just before they broke the surface, Nolan held up a hand to stop Mark. He pulled the communicator from his ear, clenching it in his hand to prevent it from picking up their conversation, unaware that Mark already disabled his comms. Nolan looked at him seriously. You were affected by the sound? Mark nodded. Yeah, at first. It caught me off guard, but my extra powers let me control my senses pretty well, so I tuned it out pretty quickly. Nolan's brows furrowed. Still, that kind of weapon hurt a lot and messed with my ability to fly. It seems Viltrumite biology wasn't built for that kind of frequency. Mark tapped on his wristwatch, bringing up a recording. I saved a sample. A low vibration buzzed from the device, just enough to make Nolan disoriented and wince in pain. Turn it off, he hissed, and Mark did. It seems we found another weakness for Viltrumites, Nolan said. Just like the Ragnar's space racer's gun, and that plan I encountered when I was still young. Mark's expression turned serious. We can't tell anyone about this. Nolan agreed. If the Viltrumites ever come here after we take control, this will cause problems with Cecil and other Earthlings. Good thing the creature is dead. Nolan reinserted his comm. Mark activated the nanobots, restoring its connection. The second they breached the ocean's surface, a voice buzzed into Nolan's ear. Nolan, what's your status? Cecil. It's done, Nolan replied. Trial by combat. I won. It's over. There was a pause. Understood. The Atlantean troops are pulling back from the coastlines. Good work. The line went dead. But at GDA headquarters, Cecil sat back in his chair, thoughtful. He was still a little suspicious at the comm's sudden disconnection. Bring up drone footage, he ordered. Several agents worked quickly. The battle played back. Cecil watched as Nolan and Mark both clutched their heads in pain, as it seemed like the beast roared before the drones were destroyed during Nolan's fight. No audio, he asked. No, sir, said a technician. The drones weren't built for underwater auditory processing. Cecil narrowed his eyes. Whatever that thing did, it hurt them both. I want that corpse. He slammed his palm on the desk. I want it yesterday. Agents scrambled as Cecil leaned forward, mind already working. He didn't fully trust Mark. He didn't trust Nolan at all. But one thing was clear. The war with Atlantis had ended. But something more prosperous had been uncovered. And Cecil never wasted an opportunity. Cecil's shoes tapped against the hard, cold metal floor as he walked through the hallway of a secret facility. A massive slab of metal at the end of the hallway lifted with a hiss, rising to reveal the concealed entrance to one of the GDA's most classified underground labs, buried deep beneath a remote desert. Beside him, Donald followed silently, his expression unreadable behind his dark sunglasses. A gust of chilled, recycled air hit them as they stepped into the bustling laboratory, the hum of high-voltage machines and the pattering of scientists' feet echoing around them. Tell me it's mostly intact, Cecil muttered. Donald gave a nod. Our agents managed to retrieve the corpse without tipping off Atlantis. Pulled it from one of the deep trenches just beyond the continental shelf. The Depth Dweller's body is about 60% intact, damage from Omni-Man and a few opportunistic bottom feeders, but about half of the internal structures are untouched. Cecil exhaled, half in relief. Good. As long as the sound-emitting organs are intact, the lab boys should be able to pull something from it. I want that noise isolated, recorded, studied. If it messes with Viltrumites, we need to weaponize it yesterday. Right now, we're relying on a Viltrumite to keep another Viltrumite in check. But we don't know how long until father and son decide to say fuck it and betray us. At that moment, footsteps approached. A lanky figure in a lab coat emerged from the rows of high-tech equipment, his face half covered by a surgical mask. D.A. Sinclair, pale, brilliant, and more than a little unnerving, came to a stop in front of them. Director, Sinclair greeted, giving a small nod to both men. I assume you're here about the specimen. Cecil raised an eyebrow. Assume right. Tell me you've got something. Sinclair's eyes darted briefly to the chamber where the Depth Dweller's body floated in a suspension tank. Unfortunately, reviving it is out of the question. Its cellular degeneration is far too advanced. Standard regenerative protocols won't work. Its physiology is too alien for reanimation techniques. And while I've pioneered the reanimation process, my knowledge is rooted in human anatomy. I can't just rewire a sea monster's brain and expect it to sing the same tune. Cecil pinched the bridge of his nose. Damn. However, Sinclair added, if someone could bridge the physiological gap, translate my methods to suit this specimen's biology, I believe a viable hybrid reconstruction is possible. Cecil smirked faintly, his mind already moving 10 steps ahead. I know just the guy. The air was filled with laughter, the distant echo of a retro arcade game humming under the chatter. Mark's penthouse, sleek and sprawling with floor-to-ceiling views of the city skyline, was alive with the energy of youth and summer freedom. William and his new boyfriend, Rick, were going head-to-head on one of the classic fighting games, their intense button-mashing punctuated by playful insults and victorious whoops. Amber and Eve sat nearby on the plush sofa, their legs tucked under them as they watched the chaos unfold, occasionally tossing popcorn at whoever lost. Mark, meanwhile, stood in the open kitchen, digging through the fridge for another soda. He smiled to himself. This was nice. Spending time relaxing with no inventions and hero work. Just him, his friends, and having a peaceful moment. Hey, Mark. William's voice came from behind him, tight with anxiety. Mark turned to see his friend holding a small, flashing device, his coalition communicator. William kept it pinched between two fingers as if it might explode. This just started beeping on its own, I swear. I didn't touch anything. You remember last time, when I ended up covered in that glowing slime. Still have no idea what that was, by the way. Mark chuckled, walking over casually without a hint of urgency, and joked, you really need to stop messing with my bomb stuff. I didn't touch it. William squeaked, handing the device over like it was radioactive before scrambling back to Rick. Mark shook his head, still grinning, and tapped the side of the device. A holographic feed blinked to life, and Alan the alien's massive eye filled the screen. Hey Mark, Alan's booming voice crackled through the communicator. Glad to see you're still in one piece after all those Viltrumites showed up. Mark shrugged. Yeah, they weren't much of a problem. Dad and I handled it. Well good, because I'm almost in Earth's orbit. You and your dad ready. Mark sighed, already missing the carefree atmosphere of the room. Guess we are now. Alan gave a two-finger salute. See you soon, champ. The feed cut out. Mark turned around and immediately felt the twin stares of his girlfriends. Eve and Amber had approached quietly while he was distracted. Eve was giving him her patented suspicious look, arms folded. Amber just raised a brow, waiting. Mark tried to play it cool. So, I might have to go to space. Again. Eve rolled her eyes. Of course you do. Amber leaned against the counter with a small smirk. You're lucky we're used to this. You're not mad. Mark asked, surprised. Amber shrugged. You're an alien. Comes with the territory. And, Eve added, you literally came back the moment Amber called you last time. That earned you some points. Mark grinned and pulled them both into a hug. You two are the best. We know. They replied in perfect sync, making him laugh. Eve reached up and kissed his cheek. Just promise you'll try to be back in time for the first day of college. I'll do my best. Amber nudged his side playfully. Go kick some alien ass. Mark smirked. I am the alien, remember? Amber rolled her eyes. You know what I mean. With one last kiss for each of them, Mark turned and walked toward the balcony. He changed into his suit, wrapping around him like a second skin. With a final wave, he launched into the sky, a blue and gold streak arcing over the city. But before heading to his parents' house, Mark took a detour. The Guardians of the Globe HQ buzzed with subdued energy in the aftermath of their recent encounter with the Lizard League and their temporary leader, Supreme Lizard, following the death of Queen Lizard and the arrest of King Lizard. The dust from their battle with Supreme Lizard had been settled, but the team was already back on their feet, recovering, regrouping, and preparing for whatever came next. Inside the training wing, Monster Girl was off to the side, stretching out her limbs and practicing yoga poses. Her monster form was almost back to its peak. The absence of her curse, the one that once regressed her age every time she transformed, had given her the freedom to truly push her limits and train her monster form harder than ever before. And she'd been doing exactly that. That's when the sonic boom hit, faint but distinct, signaling someone was approaching the base at speed. Seconds later, a blur of blue, yellow, and red zipped through the main hangar doors, slowing midair to reveal Mark Grayson himself. He landed without ceremony, eyes already scanning the space for someone in particular. Amanda spotted him first. Her expression lit up, genuine, unfiltered joy, and she immediately jogged over to greet him. But before she could reach him, the Guardian's newest member, Bulletproof, shot into her path. Hey, who is this guy? How'd he even get in here? He demanded, placing himself squarely between her and Mark. Amanda blinked, clearly annoyed, and moved right around him. That's Invincible. He has clearance. And more importantly, he's here to see me. Bulletproof frowned, his eyes following her as she latched onto Mark's arm, hugging it close. His jaw clenched. He'd been trying to make headway with Amanda for weeks, always getting shot down or ignored. Now, watching her cozy up to Mark like this, it stung. Black Samson approached, clapping a hand on Bulletproof's shoulder. Don't waste your time. She's been hung up on Invincible for a while now. You're not breaking into that fortress. Yeah, Bulletproof muttered, voice tight. I noticed. Meanwhile, Mark leaned his head toward Amanda, his tone quieter. Hey, can we talk somewhere private? Amanda didn't hesitate. Yeah, of course. Follow me. She led him down a side hallway into her private quarters, a room with reinforced walls, workout equipment, and a modest desk cluttered with files and training logs. As soon as the door shut behind them, she turned, and before Mark could speak, she leaned forward and kissed him. He didn't resist. There was a beat of silence when they pulled apart, Amanda still holding onto his arms. That was nice, Mark said. Yes, it was. So why did you come? Asked Amanda. Well, I wanted to let you know that I have an idea to make your monster form stronger than you could ever imagine, replied Mark. Wow, that's nice. I'm almost back to my regular strength when my body was like 8, Amanda laughed. Mark looked uneasy, nervous, almost. She sensed it. What's wrong? She asked, stepping back slightly. Did something happen? Mark took a breath. No, well, yes, sort of. I just wanted to talk to you before I left. Amanda's brow furrowed. Left? Where are you going? I'm heading to space. To Telespria. Alan's coming to pick me and my dad up. We're going to take the next step toward bringing the Viltrum Empire under control. Amanda's eyes widened slightly. You're doing it. Already. He nodded. It's time. She reached up, cupping his face gently. Just don't die, Mark. He placed a hand over hers, steadying himself. I won't. But there's more. Something I wanted to tell you. Amanda tilted her head, sensing the shift in tone. I have a girlfriend, Mark started. Amanda froze. And, actually, I have too. Her eyes widened, a few unspoken thoughts flickering behind them. One of them is Eve. You already know her. He continued quickly before she could say anything. And they both know about you. They know about the time we've spent together, even though we aren't officially together. Amanda tried to find words, blinking in disbelief. Wait, so are you cheating on your girlfriend? What do you mean to? Am I a side? No, Mark said, stepping forward, holding both her hands. I'm being honest with all of you. You already know that the Viltrumite Empire will be rebuilding since we're low in numbers. Some of us are going to have to practice polygamy to restore the population. I don't want secrets or lies. I want trust, so I'm telling you now. Both Amber and Eve already know this and about you, so I came to tell you about this before I leave. Amanda looked down, biting her lip, her hands trembling slightly in his. And, Mark added, I came here because I wanted to ask you to be my girlfriend too. A tear slipped from Amanda's eye, and she gave a soft laugh that almost sounded like a sob. So what? You're asking me to be your baby mama. Mark chuckled, a little embarrassed. I was thinking more future wife, but we can take it one step at a time. Amanda didn't answer right away. Her heart was torn. If it had just been Mark asking her out, she would have said yes without hesitation. But the idea of having to share him, of being one of many, complicated everything. I need time, she finally whispered. I want to say yes, Mark, but this is a lot. I just need time to think about it. Mark nodded, understanding. That's okay. No pressure. No matter what you decide, I'll always be here for you. He reached into his belt and pulled out a small item, a key. This is to my place. You're always welcome. She took it with both hands, cradling it like something precious. When she looked up again, Mark gave her a soft kiss on the forehead before turning to leave. As he took flight out of the Guardian HQ, Amanda stood alone in her room, staring down at the key, contemplating her future with Mark. Unbeknownst to either of them, Robot was listening in on their conversation. From his private quarters, using an array of discreet surveillance tech, Robot had eavesdropped the entire conversation. He sat frozen in front of the monitor, expression unreadable due to his metallic face, until his hand curled into a tight fist and slammed against the desk, shattering the small gadget in front of him. He had already committed to Cecil's request. Now, he was more motivated than ever. Mark soared through the sky, leaving the Guardian's base behind him. His heart was a cocktail of emotions: hope, guilt, determination. Amanda's reaction still lingered in his mind, but he tried not to dwell. He knew it wouldn't be easy asking someone to step into a life like his, especially with the responsibilities of his heritage now weighing heavier than ever. The warm summer sun bathed the city in gold as he descended toward the familiar neighborhood where his parents lived, his body drinking in the sunlight, making him feel good. When he reached the front porch, he could smell something cooking. Pizza. He opened the door without knocking. "I'm home," he called out, a little smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. In the kitchen, Debbie's voice rang out, cheerful. He walked in to find both his parents standing at the kitchen island, hands messy with flour and sauce. Nolan had his sleeves rolled up, his once imposing Viltrumite figure swapped for an image of him wearing an apron that read "Grill Daddy." Debbie gave him a quick kiss on the cheek as she slid a pan into the oven. Mark laughed loudly at his father in the apron. Debbie laughed. "Don't mess with your father. He and I decided to do more together. And I bought the apron." Nolan looked up, giving Mark a relaxed smile. "Pizza night. Your mom's idea. I can tell," Mark said with a smile. "Hey, I didn't mean to interrupt, but Alan's ship is about to hit orbit. He wants us to meet him up there." At that, Nolan's smile faded slightly. His time with his wife being interrupted annoyed him. He had been much more affectionate with Debbie ever since he came clean to her. It was like having a weight off his shoulder. "Right, the coalition," said Nolan. Debbie turned, wiping her hands on a towel. "Both of you, be careful, okay?" Nolan nodded and kissed her temple gently. "We will, I promise." He was a little worried about how it would go when they got to Viltrum, since they were about to face off against the strongest Viltrumite in history. But he trusted in Mark's strength and extra powers. Mark gave his mom a reassuring hug before stepping outside with his dressed father. Both men took off into the sky, their figures streaking toward the upper atmosphere. As they passed the cloud layer, a sleek coalition cruiser shimmered into view, its surface pulsing with energy as it hovered silently above Earth. The landing ramp extended before they even arrived. Alan stood in front, waving them in. His eye was bright, and his expression a little nervous. "Mark, Nolan," Alan greeted, pulling Mark into a brief, tight hug before giving Nolan a more reserved handshake since he was still a little scared of him. "Glad to see you both intact." "Same to you," Mark said, looking at the polished ship interior. "Let's get this show on the road." As the ramp closed behind them, the engines hummed to life, and the ship angled away from Earth, cutting through the stars toward the coalition homeworld, Telestria. Telestria was full of life, lush continents, towering cities of sleek architecture and glass, and skies filled with peaceful air traffic. Mark leaned forward in his seat, eyes glued to the view screen. "So this is the heart of the coalition?" Alan, sitting at the helm, grinned and gave a proud nod. "Welcome to Telestria. It's the most heavily protected planet in coalition space, and for good reason. Every decision that shapes our galaxy happens here." Nolan didn't say much as the ship descended. He stood tall and silent beside Mark, his eyes scanning every detail, every potential threat. A Viltrumite warrior through and through. Even now he couldn't switch it off. As they docked in one of the central towers, a group of armed coalition soldiers formed a welcoming escort. Not in an aggressive way, more ceremonial than anything. Mark and Nolan exchanged a look before stepping off the ship. The tower's main hall was massive, polished floors, hanging banners of every coalition member world, and a circular table in the center surrounded by representatives of over a dozen alien species, each of them unique and strange in their own right. Some had scales, others shells, and a few hovered off the ground entirely. All wore expressions of cautious interest. At the head of the table stood a tall, armored figure with a face covered in a heavy, metallic cowl. Thetis, leader of the coalition. "Welcome to Telestria," Thetis said in a voice like thunder. "It's an honor to meet you both in person, Mark Grayson and Nolan." Mark stepped forward first and bowed his head slightly. "It's an honor to be here. I'm grateful for everything you've done for the universe so far. I'm ready to do my part." Thetis gave a nod of approval. "You've already done more than most ever could. Your efforts against the Viltrumite scouts saved millions on Earth. And now, we have a champion to challenge the Viltrumite authority. We're also glad to have you here as well." Thetis looked at Nolan, a Viltrumite elite who saw the truth, who broke from the Empire. Nolan looked around the room before nodding. "Earth changed me. My son changed me." Mark glanced at his father briefly. It wasn't often Nolan admitted things like that out loud. Before anyone else could speak, the chamber's main doors suddenly exploded inward in a violent burst of smoke and flame. The coalition guards moved instantly, drawing their weapons and surrounding the council members, who rose from their seats in a mixture of shock and anger. Through the thick smoke, a towering figure strode into the room, his arm made of metal, his face scarred, one of his eyes blinded. Mark's eyes widened in recognition. Behind the towering figure, four more figures floated in, each one bearing the same expressionless, imposing aura. "Stand ready for my arrival, worms," said the newly revealed Conquest. Conquest floated there with four other nondescript Viltrumites floating behind him. The roof of the chamber exploded inward with a deafening crash, metal and concrete raining down like ash. The coalition guards reached for their weapons, already aiming at the figures descending through the smoke. One led the group, tall, brutal, and unmistakable. "Stand ready for my arrival, worms," said the figure. Nolan's fists clenched at his sides. Conquest. The smoke began to clear, revealing the grinning brute. His face was half-scarred, and one arm gleamed, made entirely of reinforced alloy. A monstrous Viltrumite survivor. A relic of brutality. "If it isn't Nolan," Conquest said, his voice a mocking purr. "I remember when you were young. So much promise. It's a shame to see you throw it all away for this." Conquest's eyes flicked to Mark, and the smile on his face stretched wider. "And you must be the special boy, the Viltrumite, with magic. You look strong as your father. Maybe stronger. Lucky me, I get to kill you." Mark smirked, stepping forward calmly. "You can try." The chamber was on edge. Coalition soldiers, all on high alert. The other four Viltrumite warriors behind Conquest stood like statues, ready to pounce. Thetis' voice cut through the rising tension, firm and cold. "You've made a mistake coming here, especially with only 5 soldiers. That may be a tenth of your empire's strength, but here, you're outnumbered." Conquest scoffed, waving off the threat. "So it seems that Nolan leaked our numbers. Figures. And here I thought he still had some backbone." He turned to Nolan again. "But no matter. 5 are enough. The coalition's always been weak. The only reason we haven't crushed you is because we feared you might use the Scourge virus again. But now that we know Nolan and his son are working with you, it's time to clean house." Mark floated forward, a cocky smile still on his face. "I'll make you a deal, Conquest. Leave. Go back to Viltrum. Wait for us there. Or die here." Conquest burst out laughing. "The ball's on this kid. Nolan, are you proud?" "I am," Nolan said with a smirk. "And you should leave before my son kicks your ass." Conquest's smile faded. He raised his hand and brought it down sharply. "Kill them all." Everything exploded into motion. Mark shot toward Conquest like a missile, his body a blur. Nolan went for one of the other Viltrumites while Thetis launched himself at a third. The coalition guards opened fire on the 2 remaining invaders, but the Viltrumites were already out of the chamber, flying toward the city. "Alan," Thetis barked mid-combat. "Take one down." Alan hesitated, fear creeping up his spine. "Are you kidding me? I got destroyed last time. You're stronger than you think. You can take them on now." Thetis shouted before slamming his opponent into a wall. Alan gulped, then soared out of the chamber. He spotted one of the fleeing Viltrumites careening through the skies of Telestria, blasting through a building like paper. Civilians screamed, chaos erupting in the streets. "You two-eyed monkey." Alan roared. "Take this." He punched the Viltrumite across the jaw. To his surprise, the impact sent the soldier spinning, blood spraying from his nose. Alan blinked at his own fist, dumbfounded, then grinned. All right then. Meanwhile, Mark and Conquest collided midair with the force of a small explosion. Their arms locked as they pushed against each other, neither yielding. But Conquest's robotic arm began to groan and warp under the pressure of Mark's strength. With a scream of rage, Conquest shoved backward, retreating midair. Mark hovered calmly. I'll ask one more time. Leave. Now. You think you've already won? Conquest sneered, furious. I was holding back. I wanted to savor it. Conquest flew at him, throwing everything he had into a brutal barrage of punches. Mark parried every strike, barely moving. He ducked one punch, spun, and slammed his elbow into Conquest's side, denting his ribs. Conquest roared, and Mark ended it. With a flash of speed, Mark chopped off Conquest's robotic arm with a Viltrumite chop, then slashed across his stomach with a sharp motion of his hand. Blood and viscera spilled out as Conquest's eyes widened. Before he could scream, Mark planted a heavy fist into his temple. Conquest hit the ground like a meteor. Unconscious. Broken. Mark turned, scanning for his father. Nolan had just driven a stone pillar through the Viltrumite he was fighting, knocking him unconscious. Across the chamber, Thetis stood over his enemy's unconscious body, his fist still coated in gore from the hole he put in his opponent's stomach. Mark flew off toward the city where the last two Viltrumites were causing havoc. One of them was being overwhelmed by coalition forces who were shooting at him. Mark just dove down from the sky, his boots landing directly on the soldier's back with a spine-shattering crack. The body went limp, and Mark threw it over his shoulder. Nearby, Alan was locked in combat with the last Viltrumite. The fight was obvious. Alan was winning. The Viltrumite was bruised and bloodied, but Alan was barely scratched. Still, Mark acted fast before Alan could deal the finishing blow. His eyes lit up, and a searing beam of heat shot through the Viltrumite's back, rendering him unconscious. Alan staggered back. You stopped me. I had him. Mark landed beside him, the second unconscious Viltrumite slung over his shoulder. I don't want them to die. They can be reformed. They were trying to kill you. Alan shouted. Trying to kill everyone. They're still my people, Mark said firmly. And if I'm going to rule them one day, I'm not going to weaken the Empire before I have a chance to change it. Alan stared at him. That's insane. Maybe. But this is what leadership means. Mercy when you can afford it. Ruthlessness and power when you need it. Mark flew back to the coalition chambers, Alan following reluctantly. He dropped the two unconscious Viltrumites beside the others. Thetis, Mark said. Do you have a ship ready? One with medical chambers? We're going to Viltrum. Thetis stood tall, his cloak billowing faintly in the breeze of the coalition's launch bay. Before him stood Mark, Nolan, and a handful of trusted coalition pilots. The 5 unconscious Viltrumite captives were held in medical chambers on the ship, unconscious and healing from their wounds. I hope the next time we meet, Thetis said, it will be during a time of peace between our peoples. Mark nodded. That's what I'm aiming for. Thetis's tone hardened slightly, which is why I'm sending someone with you. A representative. He turned toward Alan. Alan blinked. Wait, what? You brought them to us. You've seen their strength. I trust your eye, Alan. If things go south, I need someone I trust to get out alive and report back. Alan's singular eye darted between Mark, Nolan, and Thetis. I right. No pressure, huh? He sighed and walked up the ramp, muttering under his breath. I swear, I didn't sign up to spend more time with Viltrumites. The doors sealed shut behind them, and the coalition vessel blasted off, angling sharply toward the stars. As the ship soared through the silence of space, Nolan sat across from Mark in the common room, the soft hum of the engines surrounding them. You know, Nolan said with a small smile, I always imagined bringing you to Viltrum one day, after you got your powers. I had this whole idea of watching you take your first step on the soil of our homeworld. Mark let out a soft chuckle. Well, it's a good thing I got them late then. Otherwise, I might have ended up a proper Viltrumite zealot. He said it lightly, but internally, Mark couldn't help but reflect on it. Would he have still clung to his morals, the memories of his past life, if he'd been raised under Viltrum's warlike ideals from the start? He'd seen other evil versions of himself in alternate timelines, so it was some food for thought. Nolan nodded. It was a blessing in disguise. I stayed on Earth long enough to unlearn some things, and you, well, you became more than I ever expected. There was a pause between them, a comfortable one. Then Nolan asked, how's the device coming for your mother? Mark's face brightened slightly. It's done. It can completely halt her aging process, but I haven't given it to her yet. Why not? 2 reasons. 1, she's pregnant right now. I don't know how the anti-aging stasis would affect the baby. And 2, Mark hesitated. I might have something better in mind. Nolan tilted his head. Better. I want to give her powers. Not just prolonging her life, but also making her strong like us. Probably even stronger than you. Nolan's brows furrowed. You're talking about turning her into a Viltrumite? Mark shook his head. No, a Kryptonian. Nolan blinked. Come again. You remember the device that gave me my powers? From the Flaxen dimension? Nolan nodded slowly. Yes. Well, it's called the Codex, and it stores the entire genetic blueprint of a race called the Kryptonians. Their planet exploded a long time ago, and when the Codex fused with me, I became a hybrid. My body can metabolize yellow sun radiation, enhance my Viltrumite powers, and grant me more abilities, heat vision, enhanced intelligence, and heightened perception. It's what makes me so overpowered. Nolan leaned back in his seat, clearly trying to process everything. So you're saying, you can use that Codex to make your mother like you? Exactly. She'd get the same benefits. And the longer she absorbs yellow sunlight, the longer she'll live. She could outlive even Viltrumites if she wanted to. No aging, no frailty, just more time. Nolan looked amazed. How did a race that strong go extinct? Mark exhaled. Their planet orbited a red sun. Kryptonians can't absorb energy from red sunlight. So while they were extraordinary under a yellow sun, they were normal, less fragile than humans on their own planet. When Krypton exploded, they were wiped out. I found their legacy in the Flaxen dimension. That's humbling, Nolan said. To think, a race like that vanished. They kind of sound like the Viltrumites. Even down to experiencing an extinction-level event, although we managed to survive. Mark sat back. Yeah, they seem so similar to Viltrumites that I had an idea. What if I used the Codex to make the Viltrumites stronger? Not just better fighters, but more intelligent. You'd use Kryptonian DNA to enhance Viltrumites? Nolan asked, stunned. Mark nodded. Call them Kryptomites maybe? Or Viltrunians. Nolan snorted at the last name. Sounds ridiculous. Maybe, but think about it. We'd be smarter than ever. With longer lives, this new strength and intelligence would be used to bring peace all throughout the universe. Since we wouldn't need to conquer other planets for their resources and go about different ways of gaining them with our new powers. Nolan stared at him, awestruck. You really do mean to rebuild the Empire? I do. And the first Viltrumite I want to enhance, Mark added with a sly grin, is you. Me? Nolan laughed, surprised. Why? The Emperor can't have a weak dad, and I can't give it to Mom first and let her watch you wither while she thrives. Nolan rubbed his face, clearly overwhelmed. Well, I guess it'd be embarrassing to have a weak father. Can't make it worse by being outlived by my wife, too. Mark chuckled. Exactly. At that moment, Alan walked in from the helm. Hey, we're about to arrive at Viltrum. Mark and Nolan stood and moved to the viewport. The descending door of the ship opened as they hovered over the landing pad. Mark paid homage to one of the greatest phrases he'd ever heard. All right, maximum effort. The ship touched down on a smooth, silver platform. 3 figures descended from the sky in perfect unison. Lucan, Thula, and Anissa. They had healed well since their last encounter. No signs of their prior defeat remained, but the tension in the air was thick. Anissa stepped forward, posture confident. Follow us. The Grand Regent is waiting. As Mark stepped down, he couldn't help but notice the way Anissa's eyes lingered on him. Seemed like she was showing him interest. He didn't comment on it, walking alongside Nolan and Alan. Lucan followed at their rear, clearly bristling at Nolan's presence. Mark didn't miss the way he glared at his father. Nolan, on the other hand, just smirked. They passed towering corridors, engraved with murals of ancient Viltrumite battles and legendary victories. The Empire had pride, no doubt, but the energy was cold and unyielding. Finally, they arrived at a set of massive stone doors. Anissa reached forward and pushed them open with little effort. Inside was the throne chamber, and on that throne sat Thrag, A mountain of muscle and menace, 6 feet 10 inches and 400 pounds, draped in a regal red cloak trimmed with white fur. His eyes were as sharp as his hairline. It seems that dog, conquest, failed, he said with venom. So, the traitors return. Mark stepped forward, unfazed. I'm not a traitor. I was never part of this empire, but I've come to claim the right to change it. Frag's gaze narrowed. You wish to challenge me? Mark nodded. Yup, for the throne. Frag chuckled. You haven't even been alive a full century, and you think you're fit to rule? I do. He turned his eyes to Nolan. This is your fault. You raised a fool. Nolan stepped forward. No, I raised a better Viltrumite than I ever was. Frag's face darkened. So be it. He has the right to challenge me. Viltrumite laws dictate that the throne may be challenged through combat ever since the heirs to Argal went missing, to the death, or until mercy is granted. He raised a hand. Bring him to the Colosseum. Mark was led away. Nolan was taken to the viewing chamber. Anissa followed Mark, stepping into his waiting chamber. Mark raised an eyebrow. What are you doing here? I'm here to go over the rules. She leaned in, unintentionally protruding her busty rack. No weapons, just natural might. You fight until one is dead, or the stronger spares the lesser. No surrender. Mark gave a light nod and smiled. I understand, and I don't plan on losing. She held his gaze for a second longer, a little phased at his smile. We'll see. She turned and left. Moments later, the bell rang, and Mark walked into the arena. Standing across from him, shedding his regal cloak and handing it to another Viltrumite, was Thrag. The announcer's voice echoed across the Colosseum. For the first time in a millennium, a challenge has been issued for the throne of Viltrum. The Traitorborn, or the Grand Regent. Who shall rule? The few Viltrumites who were on the planet watched in silence. The bell rang again. Mark and Thrag launched themselves at each other, and the battle for the Empire began. Mark and Thrag launched themselves at each other. Their initial clash sent a shockwave rippling through the arena, a testament to the immense power both combatants wielded. Mark had clashed with powerful opponents before, but Thrag was different. His strength, his precision, and the way he moved, it was obvious that he was much stronger than the rest. This was someone who had refined his combat technique over thousands of years and became the strongest Viltrumite in history. Mark could feel it in every strike. Thrag wasn't wasting a single movement. Every punch aimed for a vital point. His neck, his solar plexus, his heart. Anywhere that might cripple or kill a lesser opponent. But Mark wasn't a lesser opponent. Mark allowed some of these blows to land, just to see what the guy was working with. And as expected, they didn't hurt. But he recognized that if they were equal in strength, speed, and durability, Thrag's technique could have overwhelmed him and caused serious damage. Still, Mark wasn't going to let the old man run the show for much longer. He had to show the people why he was fit to rule. All right, he muttered under his breath, shifting his stance. Deciding to shift tactics, Mark adopted a boxing stance, a style he hadn't utilized at all since gaining his powers. It was the first martial art he'd ever learned when he realized he was in the Invincible universe. He hadn't used it ever since he got his powers, since his raw strength and speed were always enough to get the job done. Something he'll have to fix in the future. He didn't want to become like Superman, who always relied on his powers, but he realized it was hard to find someone to practice against at full strength. Sparring was the best way to get better, and while he had his Invincibots, they were too fragile for him. Maybe I should contact an alternate version of me to spar against. Whatever, I'm getting distracted. Focus on the fight. Mark ducked under a sharp hook from Thrag and slipped in close, landing a quick body shot that made the larger Viltrumite grunt. Mark could feel Thrag's bones creak beneath his fists as he hammered into Thrag's ribs and stomach, while dodging and weaving with the ease of someone who drilled this for hours in a gym on Earth. The Viltrumites watching were stunned at how good of a fight Mark was putting up against Thrag. Many believed he would just get killed, but Mark was putting him on the back burner. Thrag snarled, clearly thrown off by Mark's sudden shift in style. Smart as he was, Thrag wasn't going to play Mark's game for long. He growled, spread his arms wide, and rocketed upward into the sky. Mark followed, breaking through the clouds just behind him. They hovered for a moment, facing each other under the bright light of Viltrum's sun. Thrag scowled, blood running from a cut near his temple. You're good, he admitted, voice gravelly. Better than I expected. Mark grinned. I told you I was coming for the throne. Best believe I'll have the power to back it up. I am. But don't get cocky, boy. When I'm done with you, your traitorous father and that mongrel he bred with will be next. Thrag taunted, trying to get under Mark's skin. Mark's eyes narrowed. Insulting his mother crossed the line. You shouldn't have said that, he replied coldly. Thrag barely had time to register the movement before Mark drove into him like a human missile, both fists extended. The impact sent a shockwave through the upper atmosphere. Thrag's body crumpled around the hit, ribs crunching, blood flying from his mouth. Mark didn't stop. He kept pushing, spearing Thrag down through the sky. They crashed into the earth with a deafening boom, carving out a crater nearly 20 meters deep. Mark shot back up, grabbed Thrag by the ankle, and hurled him high into the air like a ragdoll. And then the real fun began. Mark blurred into motion, zipping from one side of the sky to the other, punching Thrag around like a volleyball. He hit so fast, so hard, that to the watching Viltrumites below, it looked like there were a dozen Marks surrounding Thrag at once. They couldn't believe what they were watching. Eventually, Mark caught Thrag midair and spun, launching him like a cannonball back down into the Colosseum floor. The ground shook on impact. Mark hovered above, X-ray vision scanning Thrag's injuries. Broken left arm, a fracture in his right, multiple cracked ribs, and some internal bleeding. The guy was wrecked. Yield, Thrag, he muttered. I am showing you mercy. You have been beaten. From within the crater, Thrag stirred. Then he rose. Thrag staggered to his feet, blood dripping from his mouth, left arm dangling uselessly at his side. And yet, he kept walking. He looked up at Mark with wild eyes. I will not be defeated by a child barely a century old, Thrag said, panting. He was caked in his own blood and sweat, but he moved forward through pure determination and force of will. Thrag roared, charging forward on trembling legs. With all the strength he had left, he swung a desperate punch, one of the strongest punches he had ever thrown toward Mark's chest, and screamed as his own arm snapped on contact, with bone peeking out through the muscle and lots of blood gushing out. He kneeled in pain. Taking the opportunity, Mark delivered one final punch to his head, causing Thrag's eyes to roll back. Silence. Then a whisper from the announcer's booth. The winner, and the next Emperor of Viltrum, Mark Grayson. A moment passed, then another, and then, one by one, the Viltrumites dropped to their knees. Mark stood there staring at the heads bowing before him. Even his father knelt, though Mark could tell Nolan was holding back a proud smile. Stand, he said. Some of you may know that my father was stationed on Earth, where I was born and raised, and that while there, his father's value on life had changed. Well, I will be bringing this change to Viltrum to lead it to a better future than the path it is currently on. With such a low population, and most of the universe fearing and plotting against us, I will bring change to Viltrum and make it better than it was before. Mark proclaimed. Then, from the crowd, a shout. For the Empire. More joined in. For the Empire. For the Empire. 2 weeks passed in a blur. Viltrum was alive with movement. A massive ship was being fueled and prepped for launch to Earth, and Viltrumites who were stationed across the universe were ordered to return home. When the news of Viltrum's change in leadership was spread to the returning Viltrumites, many questioned it at first, while others outright denied it. But that was until they saw the recording of the battle, where they saw Thrag, the unchallenged Grand Regent for over 2 millennia, broken in a crater while Mark stood over him without so much as a scratch. Dissent died quickly after that, but there was something else, too, that made everyone more obedient. The reveal that Mark was the grandson of Emperor Argal. It started during a conversation with General Craig and his father in the Imperial Archives. Mark had been studying Viltrumite history, with General Craig being one of his new advisors, helping him. General Craig was old enough to survive the Great Purge and Scourge virus, so he was a good source of historical information. They were going over history when General Craig brought up the search for Argal's heirs. After the Scourge virus, Craig said, arms folded behind his back, we just assumed Argal's bloodline was lost. However, Mark knew this was not the case, so he put on an act to get this information. So, Dad, were you ever tested for Emperor Argal's bloodline? Nolan looked confused, eyebrows furrowed. Not that I know of. I mean, maybe when I was a kid. I was born around the time of Lord Argal's death. I don't really remember if I did get tested. Putting on a smile that looked like a scammer's, Mark just said, well, you should go get tested now. I mean, just in case, you know. Nolan looked even more confused and said, I don't see a reason for it. I mean, you already beat Thrag, and it's not like just because I take the test I'll be declared an heir to Lord Argal. Cut to the testing lab. A Viltrumite scientist stared at the results on a glowing screen and nearly fell out of his chair. Oh my god, he whispered. I know they don't believe in God. You're Emperor Argal's son. Nolan blinked. Huh, well, what do you know? News spread fast. Thrag, who was recovering in a Viltrumite hospital, crushed his bed's armrest when he heard. His jaw clenched. The muscles in his arms trembled with suppressed rage. All those years of searching, all that time spent trying to rebuild a broken empire, and the heir walks in and takes all my hard work after a single battle. He hated it, but there was nothing he could do. He had lost the duel. After another week, it was time for all remaining Viltrumites in the universe to leave the planet. Mark stepped onto the command deck of the massive Imperial vessel. He wore the traditional garb of the Viltrumite Emperor, a crimson upper body suit, a long white robe beneath, and the white fur-lined, red mantle that once belonged to Argal and Thrag. The Viltrumites gathered before him, waiting. This is a new era, he began, his voice steady and powerful. One where Viltrum will stop being a force of conquest and start being a force of unity. Our strength is not to be wasted on meaningless wars for territories not needed. With great power comes great responsibility, and we're going to use our power to build a better universe. He looked out over the crowd of warriors, many of whom had known nothing but conquest their entire lives. We are heading to Earth, my home. But before that, we will stop at Telestria and end the war with the coalition. We are no longer conquerors from this day forward. The crowd roared with approval. They now followed Mark, thinking he had inherited Emperor Argal's wisdom, which was the reason they followed Argal. Mark took one last look at his people and gave a final command. Set a course for Telestria. News of Thrag's defeat had spread to the coalition. The moment Thrag was defeated, Alan flew to Telestria to deliver the news. As the flagship reached Telestria's orbit, the sight alone was enough to send the entire planet into panic. Coalition citizens screamed in fear, broadcasting emergency alerts as 3 Viltrumites exited the massive ship. It was Mark, Nolan, and Anissa. Anissa flew close to Mark's side. She had effectively cemented herself as his right hand, equal parts advisor, bodyguard, and enforcer. He knew what she was really doing, but he was a little uncomfortable at first with how she followed him everywhere, even went as far as to follow him into the bathroom. But now he barely even minded her. You don't have to be beside me all the time, you know, Mark said without turning. I'm your guard, Anissa replied smoothly. It's my place. They were brought straight to the newly rebuilt Coalition Council Hall. The damage from Conquest's earlier attack had been repaired with impressive speed. Alan stood near the front of the room, bouncing on the balls of his feet. He waved excitedly the moment he saw Mark. Hey, you made it. I told these guys all about what you did. Showed him that insane fight too. Man, you really wrecked him. Anissa stepped forward immediately, voice sharp. Bow when addressing Emperor Mark. Alan flinched. Whoa, okay. But Mark just found Anissa's enthusiasm funny and waved a hand. It's fine. He's a friend. He then smiled at Alan. Hope you got my good side in that footage. Alan gave him a double thumbs up. Across the chamber, Fetus rose from his seat, cloak billowing behind him. Welcome back, Mark. Or rather, Emperor Mark. Mark gave a respectful nod. Fetus, your reign will change everything. Fetus continued. With you as Emperor, there is hope for true peace between the Viltrum Empire and the Coalition. Mark addressed the rest of the council, who couldn't believe what they were hearing. The conquering ways of the old empire are finished. There was practically no reason for it in the first place. Viltrum will be stronger than ever, and instead of promoting domination, we plan to promote unity across the universe. From this day forward, we will bring peace to every planet we've ever touched, and we start with an alliance with the Coalition. Applause followed. Alan clapped hard. Even a few more skeptical council members began to stand in support. Until it happened. Death to the Viltrumites. A voice cried out from the stands. A grenade hit the floor with a clang, bouncing once, twice, then a hiss. Green smoke exploded outward in thick, rapid tendrils, clouding the air with a sickly hue. The smoke traveled to Mark, Nolan, and Anissa. But before Nolan and Anissa could even react, Mark took a step forward, before taking in a deep breath and sucking in all the smoke. Then, laughter from the traitorous council member, a Mobian from Mobius 6 named Zwabert. You fool, Zwabert cackled. You breathed it in. That was an enhanced version of the Scourge virus. Fetus thought he could hide it, but I had one of the scientists who made it bring it to me. You Viltrumites will all die for your transgressions, and there will never be peace until all of you are dead. Mark dropped to a knee, a faint burning sensation simmering in his chest. Nolan rushed forward, but Mark raised a hand and shook his head. Nolan froze mid-step, while Anissa, who was initially stunned, soon turned angry and grabbed Zwabert by the neck, preparing to kill him. Anissa then heard Mark command, stop. She looked back at Mark when he did something completely unexpected. Mark let out a massive burp. The sound echoed loudly and awkwardly through the chamber. Ugh, that gave me some serious heartburn, said Mark while dusting off his shirt. It seems like he had been completely unaffected by the biological weapon against his Viltrumite half. Fetus with a look of sheer disbelief just said, How are you okay? I'm just built different, Mark said, but when his father got closer to check on him. Seriously, don't get near me. I absorbed it all, but until I burn it out completely, I'm a walking biohazard to other Viltrumites. Drawing on his Kryptonian air magi abilities, Mark created an aura of energy around himself. A protective air bubble formed, isolating the virus within his own space. Let him go, he said to Anissa, his voice steady. She had the traitor locked in a tight chokehold. Anissa didn't loosen her grip. Her eyes narrowed. He tried to kill you. I know, Mark replied calmly, but I understand why. Zwabert stared at him, anger still evident. What? Mark turned to face him fully. You're angry. You're scared. The Viltrumites have left a trail of destruction across the stars. I don't blame you for hating us. Zwabert's expression shifted. His anger faltered for just a moment. But that's why I'm here. That's why we're all here now, Mark continued. This is our chance to change, to do better. And that begins by choosing a little something called mercy. Zwabert was still taken into custody, but the message had been made loud and clear. The new leader of the Viltrumites was completely different. He looked toward Nolan and Anissa. Head back to the ship. I need to take a sun bath. Hey what? Anissa asked, blinking. Without another word, Mark blasted off into the sky. Nolan and Anissa stared after him for a beat. Did he just say sun bath? Anissa asked. Nolan sighed and brought his hand to his face. Yeah, he does that sometimes, always leaving people confused. Mark was already gone, chasing his enemy. Omnipotus continued soaring through the sky like a meteor, unconscious from Mark's previous punch. His body finally jerked as his eyes snapped open, awareness rushing back into him. That strike, it knocked me out. He clenched his jaw, twisting his body midair. Reality warped around him with a shimmer as he stabilized his flight. Looking down, he spotted Mark hurtling toward him, eyes glowing with focused rage. You shall die. Omnipotus bellowed, extending both hands and firing a red and black beam of condensed energy. It crackled like lightning and screamed through the air before striking Mark square in the chest. Mark didn't expect it to hurt, but it did. A searing pain tore through his chest as he screamed, the beam blasting him down toward the earth like a missile. He crashed violently into an old runway, tearing up concrete and steel in a thunderous explosion. Omnipotus floated down calmly, holding a jagged staff formed from the same crackling energy as the beam. He sneered as he saw Mark trying to push himself up. Mark groaned and placed a hand on his chest. His suit was scorched away, and underneath, his skin was burned and bleeding. The pain made him wince, even as his body began knitting itself back together thanks to his Viltrumite and Kryptonian healing. What the hell was that? Mark muttered, breath ragged. Omnipotus grinned. That was a refined stream of the cosmic energy that I've absorbed from planets across dimensions. I fused it with my reality-bending abilities to enhance its destructive force. It disintegrates everything it touches. Looks like I didn't use enough power to finish you the first time. Let me fix that. He raised his hand to unleash another blast, but before he could release it, Mark was already moving. A flash. Mark reappeared in front of him and delivered 2 vicious punches to Omnipotus's face, followed by a knee straight into his jaw that launched him upward. Recovering midair, Omnipotus growled and extended both arms. 5 copies of himself materialized out of nothing, surrounding Mark in a perfect circle. The air distorted from their sudden appearance. Mark's eyes narrowed. So this is how he fights, mixing power with strategy, using his manipulation abilities. The clones moved with intent, throwing calculated punches that Mark actually felt. Each hit was heavy, like getting smacked by chunks of a planet. They're not just illusions, Mark thought, weaving through them, barely dodging the coordinated attacks. They're real and strong. Mark lashed out, catching one clone by the throat and slamming his fist through its chest. The body burst into mist. He fired his heat vision, sweeping across the battlefield, slicing through the remaining 4 clones with surgical precision. Then, silence. He looked to the real Omnipotus, who was now hunched over, glowing. Electricity crackled around his bulging muscles. His aura turned red and pink, the energy humming in the air like an angry swarm of bees. His white skin darkened to a bruised purple, and veins popped like cables underneath. This, trash, is my full power, he growled, voice deeper, layered with echoing distortion. This is what I become when I channel all the energy I've absorbed. I become a god. Mark, still breathing hard and bearing burns on his chest, scoffed. Well, lucky me. I've been looking for a god to slay. He fired his heat vision, but Omnipotus blocked it with a shield formed from his aura. The beam ricocheted off harmlessly. Mark shot forward. Their fists met in a clash that shattered the sound barrier and sent out a ripple of force that leveled nearby trees and crumbled runway hangars. They traded blow after blow, too fast for anyone but themselves to track. Mark ducked under a wide hook and delivered a sharp uppercut to Omnipotus's ribs, causing the cosmic tyrant to grunt in pain. But Omnipotus retaliated with a spinning elbow that cracked Mark's cheekbone. Mark wiped the blood from his lip. His healing kicked in immediately, but Omnipotus didn't give him time to recover. He raised his hand, bending time around himself, accelerating his own movements. Mark's eyes widened. He's faster now, too fast. Punches rained down on him like meteors. Each one hurt, not just physically, but on a deeper level. His molecules felt like they were vibrating apart from the destructive force imbued into each strike. Enough, Mark yelled, catching both of Omnipotus's fists. He threw the arms aside and clapped his hands together with a thunderous boom. The shockwave ripped through the air, sending Omnipotus tumbling backward, blood leaking from his ears. Before Omnipotus could recover, Mark unleashed another blast of heat vision, slamming into his chest and launching him high into the sky. Mark chased after him, and when he caught up, he brought both fists down in a devastating hammer fist. Omnipotus plummeted like a meteor and crashed into an empty cargo plane. The resulting explosion lit up the night sky. Mark hovered above the wreckage, X-ray vision confirming no civilians were nearby. Collateral damage I can fix, but I can't let him injure civilians. Out of the smoke, Omnipotus rose, wounds already sealing. His grin had returned. You can't win. I shape reality. I am reality. You're just a strong ape. Mark's jaw clenched. You're right about one thing. I'm strong. Omnipotus charged again. They clashed in a flurry of punches, each blow sending out waves of force. Mark dodged a sweeping leg kick and retaliated with a strike to Omnipotus's temple. Omnipotus recoiled, blood spurting from his mouth. Mark grabbed Omnipotus's face and fired twin heat beams into his eyes. Omnipotus screamed and swung wildly, using gravity manipulation to toss Mark aside like a ragdoll. Mark hit the ground, skidding across the tarmac, but rolled to his feet just in time to throw up a telekinetic barrier that blocked another destructive energy beam. Then he felt it. Burns on his arms where the energy splashed past the shield. Still healing. Always healing. With a deep breath, he reached for the earth beneath them, calling on his earth magi affinity. 2 giant stone pillars rose up and slammed together, crushing Omnipotus in between. Mark flew in, but Omnipotus tore himself free, laughing, and summoned shadows that swarmed toward Mark. They clung to his skin like oil, burning even his Viltrumite Kryptonian durability. He flew higher, away from the shadows, then shouted, unleashing a telekinetic pulse that shredded the shadow creatures into smoke. Mark hovered, checking his body. The damage was already healing, but for the first time in a while, he was getting tired. Then he noticed something. Omnipotus's aura. It was flickering. He's burning through his energy reserves. Mark narrowed his eyes. That's it. He's strong, but reckless. He can't sustain this level of power forever. Omnipotus lunged forward. Mark met him head on, catching the incoming punch and slamming his forehead into Omnipotus's face, breaking his nose. He didn't stop. He threw a rapid series of punches, each more brutal than the last. Omnipotus tried to fight back, but Mark was relentless. Faster, smarter, angrier. You want to destroy my world? Hurt my people? Mark roared. You picked the wrong damn planet. Omnipotus screamed in frustration and unleashed a massive omnidirectional blast, vaporizing the area around them. Mark was thrown back, body scorched again, but he got back to his feet, smoke rising from his shoulders. He looked up and froze. Omnipotus had changed again. This time, his aura was lashing wildly, the sky above darkening. I'm absorbing the planet's energy. Omnipotus declared, voice thunderous. I'll finish this battle and devour Earth in one go. Mark's heart sank. Damn it. I pushed him too far. Without another word, he rocketed toward Omnipotus, grabbed him mid-sentence, and launched both of them straight into the sky. They broke through the stratosphere, speeding past the clouds and into the void of space. Mark didn't stop. Omnipotus pounded against his body, but Mark clung on, flying them deeper and deeper into the vacuum, closer to the sun. Then Mark's skin began to glow. Omnipotus saw it too. What are you doing? Mark didn't answer. He focused, his body drawing in the solar energy and using up his own reserves. Every cell buzzed, charged with light and heat. I told you. I see the future, he said, voice calm but resolute. And in it, you die today. And with a primal roar, he detonated. A blinding solar flare burst from his body. The shockwave obliterated Omnipotus's energy field. Omnipotus screamed, trying to absorb the flare, but it was too fast, too intense. Mark kept pushing. He poured every ounce of stored power into the blast, drawing on the sun's energy directly behind him. Omnipotus's body started to crack, splintering into light. No, I am a god, he bellowed. Mark's voice echoed one last time. Not anymore. With a final scream, Omnipotus was vaporized. Reality warped for a moment, and then went still. Mark, drained and glowing faintly, floated in silence. Every part of him ached, but he was alive, and Omnipotus wasn't. Then, a hand gripped his wrist. Mark's eyes snapped open to see Anissa, her expression filled with awe at how strong her emperor was. Was I out long? He asked telepathically. Only a few minutes, she replied, using her telepathy implant. Mark looked down at Earth. He saw no sign of Omnipotus. I told you die today, he thought. Then he turned to Anissa. Let's go check on Eve. And Amanda, too. The battle was won and cemented Invincible in Earth's history as one of the greatest heroes of all time. The silence of space was almost peaceful after the chaos that had just unfolded. Floating beside Mark, Anissa cast an occasional glance at him. The solar energy from the nearby sun slowly replenished the reserves he had just burned through. The damage from the battle had already begun healing. The cuts were closing, bruises fading, the seared burns on his chest reduced to light marks. He really is something else, she thought, her eyes drifting to the powerful yet calm expression on his face. As they flew in synchronized formation, Anissa's voice broke the calm. May I ask something, sire? She said, her tone unusually reserved. Mark glanced at her briefly. Go ahead. She hesitated for a moment, then asked, back there, when you rushed to heal those 2 women, who among them is your mate? Mark didn't answer right away. His eyes remained on the path towards Earth. Then he finally said, both. Anissa's posture stiffened, but she said nothing immediately. Her mind whirred with thoughts. Both? He's bonded to both women? I didn't think Earth had the same relationship values as Viltrum, but that's not a bad thing. Then, as if choosing to seize the moment of privacy, she spoke again, this time a bit more boldly. Sire, would it be acceptable if I were to bear your children? Mark nearly stumbled mid-flight. He tilted in the air slightly before catching himself. Whoa. She turned to him, her face serious, but her blue eyes searching. I only asked because I know the Empire needs to grow stronger. And I admire you. You're not just strong, but you're wise. And fair. Mark blinked, then unexpectedly let out a chuckle. Anissa raised an unimpressed brow at the sound. Sorry, he said, waving a hand. It's not that the question's funny, just wow. Talk about timing. She folded her arms, her expression flat. You think I'm joking? No, Mark said, shaking his head. Not at all. I'm just saying, it's the first time someone's offered to have my kid while we're flying back from vaporizing a god. A faint smile tugged at her lips. So is that a yes? Mark smiled softly. I'm not saying no, but maybe we could get to know each other more first. Spend time together. Talk. Maybe even go on a date. Anissa frowned slightly. Hey what? Mark chuckled again. A date. It's something humans do when they're trying to connect. Usually starts with food and a conversation. She pondered that for a moment. We fought together. That's connecting. Sure, Mark said with a grin. But imagine doing that without punches and with dessert. Anissa let out a quiet huff, amused despite herself. Very well, Emperor. I will entertain this concept of a date. The two then continued flying towards the GDA, where Eve was with Mark explaining what a date was in more detail as they went on. Mark sat at the helm of the Viltrumite Imperial ship, one leg crossed over the other, flipping through a thick old book on Viltrumite history. The pages were worn and dense with text, but he soaked it in quickly. His eyes scanned faster than a normal person could ever dream of, taking in centuries of militaristic customs, political hierarchies, and the harsh rites of Viltrumite tradition. Nolan stood to his right, arms crossed, quietly watching his son read. Occasionally, he answered a question or pointed out a footnote. Anissa hovered close by as well, silent but attentive, seemingly more interested in Mark's focus than the book itself. You really read all this stuff when you were growing up? Mark asked, raising an eyebrow without looking up. Nolan grunted. Not all of it, just the parts about war. The rest was fluff, right? Because political strategy and diplomacy are so fluffy, Mark muttered. Before Nolan could respond, Mark's head twitched to the side. He went still. His eyes narrowed as a faint, high-pitched pulse hit his ears, a frequency only someone with his hearing could catch. It was coming from his wrist, the communicator he'd given to Eve and Amber. A distress ping. Then came the voice, faint, but unmistakably Eve's. Mark, please, we need you. Mark shot up, the book falling to the floor with a soft thud. Eve, he said sharply, already moving toward the ship's airlock. She's in trouble. Nolan's eyes widened as he followed behind. What happened? I don't know yet, Mark said, but I'm not waiting to find out. You stay here. Keep the Viltrumites heading to Earth. Make sure they land on the moon, not the planet directly. We don't need global panic. Nolan gave a nod. Understood. Anissa stepped forward without hesitation. I'm coming with you, sire, in case you need backup. Mark gave her a quick glance. Fine, but try to keep up. They reached the airlock in seconds. The moment it opened, Mark launched forward, slicing through the vacuum of space with Anissa close behind. The ship would have taken a few days to reach Earth at sublight speed, but Mark wasn't in the mood for waiting. With the speed they were flying, they'd be there in less than a minute. Descending like a meteor, Mark tore through the upper atmosphere of Earth, the air around him igniting in a corona of blazing fire. He zeroed in on the epicenter of frequency and saw the city of Chicago in ruins. Entire blocks leveled, skyscrapers toppled, fires blazing out of control. Craters dotted the urban landscape, some still smoking from recent impact. At the center of it all, sprawled among broken concrete and debris, lay heroes, dozens of them. Capes Incorporated members, Fight Force, even Brit. Some groaning, some unmoving, some were barely alive. Eve, Mark whispered. He found her. She was crumpled beside a shattered wall, bloodied, her arm bent at an impossible angle. Bone jutted through her skin. She was unconscious, barely breathing. Mark dropped beside her, his expression torn between rage and desperation. He used his super hearing and heard her heart beating, which was good. Mark summoned a soft green aura through his hands. The air magic flowed outward, coiling around Eve like mist before condensing over her shattered limb. With delicate control, he knit bone, tissue, and skin together. Her breathing evened. Then, slowly, her eyes fluttered open. Mark, she whispered, her voice cracking. You came. I always will, he said, hugging her tightly. She clung to him, trembling, before pulling back just enough to meet his eyes. Her lips met his in a kiss filled with relief and love. Behind them, Anissa landed, taking in the sight. For a moment, her chest ached with jealousy and longing, but she said nothing. Mark broke the kiss and looked into Eve's eyes. What happened? Who did this? Her voice was filled with fear. It's a being called Omnipotus. He called himself the World Shaper. He came here to consume Earth's energy. Said he's already devoured multiple worlds across different universes, and that he has reality manipulation abilities and cosmic strength. The name stirred something vague in Mark's memory. Normally, his brain would instantly recall any memory down to the smallest details, but he barely remembered Omnipotus before he even gained his powers, so his memories weren't as clear as back then. I'll stop him, Mark said. You can't do it alone. His powers allow him to warp reality. My powers can counter it a bit, but he's too strong physically for me. Mark helped her to her feet. Then we'll fight together. He turned to Anissa. Help the wounded and save who you can. She nodded and took off immediately. Mark pressed 2 fingers to his communicator. Cecil, are you there? Cecil's voice crackled through. Thank God, Mark. It's very bad right now. Most of the Guardians are down, and Omnipotus is tearing through the city. We're mobilizing everything we've got. Have your people move the injured around here. My companion will assist them. I'll stop Omnipotus. Go get him, Invincible. Mark ended the transmission, and both he and Eve launched themselves toward the direction of the battle. Mark streaked through the ruined skies of Chicago like a bullet of vengeance, his eyes glowing with heat, his muscles tight with rage. The deeper into the city he flew, the worse the devastation became. It was a war zone. Whole city blocks had been flattened into jagged debris. Cars were flipped and melted, their metal shells twisted like paper. Craters pockmarked the ground as though meteor showers had rained from above. And then he saw them, the Guardians. The sight stopped in cold midair. Hundreds of identical duplicates lay scattered across the battlefield, most unmoving and dead. One copy was twitching slightly, but unconscious. Shrinking Ray lay nearby, her body mangled, legs twisted beyond recognition. Rex was down, one arm missing completely from the elbow down. Blood pooled around his motionless form, with some leaking from his head. And Monster Girl, his heart stopped. Amanda was heavily injured. Half her face was missing, scorched down to bone. Her chest had a crater punched into it, ribs splintered, organs exposed. Her monstrous form hadn't reverted, and he saw that her heart was beating slowly. That meant she was still alive. Barely. Amanda, Mark muttered, instantly diving toward her. He didn't even register the robot drone nearby, which was crawling pathetically toward her without its 2 legs and left arm, and its voice box crushed. Mark knelt beside her, his hands trembling as they hovered above her ruined form. A gentle glow formed over her destroyed face and chest as Mark poured air magic into her system, knitting tissue and repairing bone. But almost immediately, he hit a wall. What? He muttered, focusing harder. The light wavered. His healing faltered. No. Fuck. He focused again, but something pushed back. There was a resistance. His healing energy was being rejected. Behind him, Eve floated toward him, concerned by the face he was making. Mark, what's wrong? He looked back over his shoulder, panic creeping into his voice. It's her curse. It's tied to her powers, and it's not reacting well to another person's magic. My healing magic, it's being pushed out. Eve's eyes widened. Is she? She's alive, barely. But I can't keep her that way for long. Not like this. Mark stared at Amanda's face, his thoughts racing. Back when he developed an anti-aging solution for her curse, he'd intentionally left the core of it untouched. It was what made her who she was. He could have used the purifying aspect of his air magic to completely get rid of her monster form, but he hadn't. But now that same curse that gave her powers was rejecting his magic. I need to stabilize her manually, he said. Eve, stay here. I'm taking Amanda to Invincible Incorporated. Eve nodded, but argued. Go help Amanda, but I'm heading back to the fight. Mark activated his telekinesis, lifting Amanda's unconscious body into the air with gentle care. All right, fine, but don't get hurt again. Then he turned to the sky. Anissa, he shouted. A blur shot into view, and Anissa landed beside him. Yes, sire. I need you to assist Eve and the Guardians and support the defense. Eve will guide you. I'm taking Monster Girl to get medical attention. Anissa nodded. Her face was stern. Understood. I'll keep her safe. Without another word, Mark shot into the sky, flying eastward at a blur, carrying Amanda with him like she was made of glass. As he disappeared into the horizon, Anissa turned back to Eve. Point me to the bastard. Eve smirked, already shaping constructs with her glowing pink hands. That way, Mark flew to Invincible Incorporated, and when he entered, headed towards one of the medical bays he had set up just in case. Dozens of Invincibles snapped to life at his arrival. Secure her into one of the medical chambers. Mark ordered, voice firm. Stabilize her vitals. I want one of you looking for magical and medicinal herbs to boost her monster form's recovery capabilities. Use the data we gathered from testing her monster form to find the best herbs that'll help. One of the bots saluted and zipped out of the room. She'll hold, he told himself. She'll be okay. He closed his eyes for a moment. And then, the immense rage returned. He stood tall, and then he turned back to the ruined skyline in the distance. Omnipotus was in the heart of the crater now, swatting aside heroes like they were paper dolls. Black Samson had powered down from his amped state that he achieved when he saw some of the Guardians going down. He had an electrical aura around him and was one of the only reasons the battle lasted so long, but now he was unconscious. Bulletproof and Tech Jacket, the last remaining heroes from the initial group, were both out cold. Anissa and Eve were the only ones still standing. Anissa had blood streaming from her brow as she exchanged blows with Omnipotus. The World Shaper laughed, swatting her like an insect and sending her flying across the skyline. A massive warhammer made from Eve's offensive mode struck him across the jaw, and he stumbled slightly. It was a good hit, but not good enough. Omnipotus snarled. He raised one hand and conjured a spear of jagged dark metal. He hurled it toward Eve like lightning. Her suit morphed into its defensive mode with dual shields, giant rectangular plates in defensive formation. But, with a flick of his hand, Omnipotus warped the shields, tunneling the spear straight through her defenses. It pierced her stomach. She gasped, collapsing midair before falling. Mark caught her before she hit the ground. No, 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 he whispered, cradling her in his arms. Eve, stay with me. But before he could heal her, a pink glow enveloped her. Her atoms deconstructed, then reconstructed. Within seconds, she was whole again, naked and unconscious, but alive. Mark exhaled shakily and wrapped his Emperor's cloak around her. Anissa, he shouted. She flew over, bruised and battered. Yes, sire. Take her. Keep her safe. Anissa took Eve gently into her arms, holding her like a princess. It should be me fighting. Not. No, I'll handle this. Mark's voice dropped low. Omnipotus sneered. Oh, another bug comes to die. Mark looked at him. I see the future, he said quietly, his hair shadowing his eyes. And in it, you die today. And then he moved. A single punch cracked the sound barrier tenfold. It shattered the air, cracked the sky, and launched Omnipotus across the horizon. Anissa shielded Eve from the blast, grabbing the unconscious bodies of the other heroes in one arm, while cradling Eve in the other. She stared in wide-eyed awe at the massive crater where Omnipotus had once stood. The moment his boots hit the ground of the GDA, Mark was already moving, down sterile white halls, past stunned GDA agents, toward the medical wing. Anissa matched his pace, keeping a respectful step behind. Eve was in one of the secured recovery rooms. According to the latest report, she was stable thanks to her full power awakening and reconstructing her body after being impaled by Omnipotus' spear. Still, the act had drained her, leaving her unconscious. She hadn't stirred since. Mark stepped closer, gazing at her. It was then that he noticed a subtle but undeniable change. He blinked, then laughed slightly. Eve's breasts were noticeably bigger. Some things never change, he thought, amused, remembering how the same thing happened to her in the comics. Mark leaned down and kissed her softly on the forehead. Rest up, Eve, he whispered. I'll be back soon. He turned to the nurse stationed at the door, a young woman who looked like she might faint at being addressed by the hero who just saved the world. Mark simply smiled and said, please keep an eye on her. The nurse nodded frantically, almost tripping over herself to assure him. Mark left the room, Anissa quietly following, her steps almost ghost-like. The hallway barely gave them time to breathe before Cecil Stedman himself came walking up to them. Well, hell, Cecil said, a grin tugging at his scarred face. If you hadn't showed up when you did, the world would be ashes. Good timing. Mark shrugged modestly. Would have arrived days later if Eve didn't call me. Cecil huffed. Then the world owes your girlfriend a hell of a thank you. He looked past Mark at Anissa, raising an eyebrow. So who's the helper? Anissa's expression shifted instantly into a scowl, her spine straightening. I am Anissa, she said, her voice low and cold, like a sword being drawn. Advisor to His Majesty, Emperor Mark, and his personal assistant. Not a helper, you mongrel. Mark placed a calming hand on her shoulder before she did something drastic, like rearranging Cecil's face. He smiled at Cecil and said with a playful shrug, I wouldn't make the scary planet conqueror angry if I were you. Cecil chuckled dryly. Lucky for me, I know the Emperor. His tone then sobered quickly. We need to talk about the Viltrumites. About what this means for Earth. Mark shook his head. Later. I have something else to handle first. Without waiting for permission or a goodbye, Mark took off down the hall, Anissa right behind him. Cecil watched them go and sighed heavily. Donald, ever the quiet second in command, appeared beside him with a tablet in hand. How's that project going? Cecil asked without looking at him. Donald tapped at the screen. On track, sir. The creature should be restored in about 3 weeks. Robots working on it around the clock. Seems very dedicated. Cecil narrowed his eye. Yeah, Robot's interest in that project is starting to get real suspicious. Keep an eye on him and report any odd behavior. Donald nodded. Cecil leaned in slightly, lowering his voice to a whisper. Did you manage to retrieve any of Mark's blood from the battlefield? Donald's expression tightened. No, sir. We have drone footage showing Mark bleeding during the fight, but by the time we got agents on site, nothing. Not a drop. Cecil frowned. What do you mean, nothing? Donald showed him security footage from one of the drones. It showed a patch of the battlefield where Mark had fought, but there was no blood. It was as if it had been cleaned. Cecil cursed under his breath. God damn it. Having a blood sample would have been insurance. In case he ever stopped being one of the good guys. Donald added. It's like the moment he was done fighting, all the evidence just disappeared. Neither of them realized how true that was. Before arriving at the GDA, Mark had used his supervision and water magi affinity to carefully pull every microscopic drop of his blood from the battlefield, gathering it midair at super speed, and then burning it all away with his fire magi abilities. He wasn't going to make the same mistake as Superman, letting some random lab cook up a nightmare version of himself. An evil clone version of himself would just be annoying. Mark and Anissa landed outside of Invincible Inc. Mark led the way in. This is my home/lab/company, he said casually, voice echoing in the wide, polished lobby. And it'll be the future headquarters for the Viltrumites stationed on Earth. Anissa glanced around in mild amazement. The sleek corridors, the high-tech displays, the army of Invincibots patrolling or working. The building was far more advanced than anything she had expected from Earth. Her brow furrowed. You planned all this, even before becoming Emperor? Mark smirked, looking over his shoulder at her. Yeah, I was pretty confident. Anissa was awed at the pure cockiness Mark had. Finally, they reached the medical bay. The room was dimly lit. Amanda floated in a specialized chamber, suspended in a luminous green fluid. She looked peaceful, but the damage to her body was still evident. Her monstrous form had absorbed most of the trauma, but the injuries had carried over to her human side. Several Invincibots moved around the chamber, monitoring vitals, adjusting herb injectors, and checking scans. Mark approached the chamber and rested a hand against the glass. "How is she?" he asked. One of the bots responded, its voice smooth and efficient. "Her vitals are stable but weak. The damage to her neural network suggests moderate to severe brain damage. She remains in a comatose state. Magical herb infusions into the medical solution have enhanced her monster form's physical regeneration, but barely, and are ineffective on neurological healing." Mark frowned, his eyes lingering on Amanda's face. "So even if her body heals, which will take a long time, she might not wake up. Would Viltrumite medical technology help?" Mark asked, not taking his eyes off Amanda. Anissa hesitated. "Our technology focuses on brute force healing, making the body use its resources to heal itself," she said honestly. "Compared to your technology, I'm not sure if it would be enough, but we could try." Mark's jaw tightened. He thought it through at super speed. Amanda's monster form had borne the brunt of the injuries. Her human form had inherited the damage when she reverted. If she stayed human, her normal healing capabilities would be too slow and she would die. But if he tried to forcibly heal her through magic, the curse tied to her monster form would resist him just like it had during the battle. He could purify her curse completely and then heal her with magic, but she would lose her powers forever. Mark sighed, his forehead leaning against the cool glass. "I can't do that to her. I know I wouldn't want someone to take my powers away." He pulled away, his mind racing with possibilities. He needed more time. He had an idea that would take some time to implement. Standing straight again, he placed his palm against the tank, a silent vow passing through his mind. "I'll make sure you wake up soon, Amanda. I promise." Anissa watched him silently. She bowed her head slightly out of respect, even though he couldn't see it. Just then, a few of the Invincibots whirred up beside them, reporting on the continued search for magical herbs and experimental recovery options they were working on. Mark nodded but didn't say much, still watching Amanda. The television flickered inside countless homes across the globe, airing the same emergency broadcast. Heroes rallied to defend the Earth against a world-devouring threat named Omnipotus. However, at the darkest hour, a mysterious new hero emerged, clad in a suit reminiscent of Omni-Man's, bearing the red and white colors and symbol, but clearly stronger, faster, and unlike any hero we've ever seen. The news anchor shuffled the papers nervously on his desk. "We still don't know the identity of this new champion. What we do know is, without him, Earth would likely have fallen today." Footage played showing a red and white blur clashing violently with a monstrous figure midair. Explosions rippled in the background. At Debbie Grayson's house, the volume on the TV was maxed out. Debbie sat cross-legged on her couch, gripping a pillow so tightly that her knuckles were white. She stared at the screen, tears brimming in her eyes. Not from sadness, but pride. The footage wasn't clear enough for most people to recognize the new hero. But Debbie, she knew that figure, that posture, that speed. That was her son. That was Mark. When she saw a moment where Mark punched Omnipotus so hard that the villain spiraled through the air, she jumped to her feet. "Yes, Mark," she shouted, pumping her fist into the air. "Kick his ass." The neighbors probably heard. Debbie didn't care. Her baby boy had saved the world. She was used to her husband saving the world and all, making her pretty apathetic to it. But seeing her son doing so from such a major threat brought about her motherly pride. Later, there was a knock at her door. Debbie rushed to open it and nearly knocked Mark over with a hug. She squeezed him tight, burying her face into his chest. He chuckled and returned the hug, patting her back gently. "I knew you'd win," she told him. Mark pulled back, smiling warmly. "Of course you did." Behind him, Anissa stood stiffly, arms crossed behind her back, looking every bit the soldier. She wasn't used to these family scenes. Before Mark could even introduce them, Anissa suddenly dropped to one knee, bowing low with her arm across her chest. "It is an honor to meet the mother of His Majesty, Emperor Mark," Anissa said formally, head lowered. Debbie blinked, startled. "Oh, no need for all that," she said hurriedly. "Please, get up. I'm just a mom. No bowing necessary." Anissa rose obediently, though she still looked unsure how to act. Mark grinned. "She's still learning. Earth customs are different." Debbie gave Anissa a warm, forgiving smile. "You'll pick it up fast. Welcome to Earth." Mark clapped his hands lightly. "Anyway, I actually came to check up on you, Mom. I know Dad's not here yet, and with everything that's happened, just wanted to make sure you're okay." Debbie softened, her hands moving to cup Mark's face affectionately. "I'm fine, now that I know you're safe." Then she stepped back, hands on her hips. "Speaking of your father, where's Nolan?" Mark shrugged casually. "I left him in charge of the Viltrumites when you called for me. They're en route. Should land on the moon in about 3 or 4 days." Debbie made a face. Must be nice. Wish I could call Nolan and have him show up instantly whenever I need him to go shopping." Mark burst out laughing. "Yeah, that would be nice." His laughter faded into a more serious tone. "Mom, listen, with everything that happened, there's a good chance my identity might get leaked. A lot more people are paying attention now. I think it's safer if you stay at my place until Dad arrives." Debbie hesitated for a second, but then nodded. She wasn't stupid. She had lived this life long enough to know the dangers. "I already have an emergency bag packed," she said, motioning toward the closet where a suitcase sat ready. Mark grinned, pride shining in his eyes. "That's my mom." Within minutes, Mark scooped Debbie into his arms like she weighed nothing. Anissa followed, carrying the suitcase effortlessly. They took off into the sky, streaking toward Invincible ink. As they landed, Mark set Debbie down carefully. "Anissa's going to stay here with you while I finish some things," Mark said. "She's more than capable of keeping you safe." Anissa bowed slightly again. "I will guard her with my life, sire." Debbie chuckled awkwardly. "You don't have to risk your life. And Debbie is just fine." Mark gave them both a wave. "I'll be back later." And with that, he launched into the sky again, with one last stop to make. Mark landed outside Amber's house a minute later, the familiar suburban neighborhood feeling weirdly normal compared to everything else going on. Mark knocked on the door, smiling. He expected Amber. Instead, the door creaked open and revealed a middle-aged man. He was thin, had glasses perched crookedly on his nose, and blonde hair streaked with gray. Amber's father. Mark blinked. Amber's dad blinked back. There was a long, awkward pause as the two stared at each other. For all the times Mark had been to Amber's house, he never ran into her father. Mark realized, belatedly, that he was still wearing his full Emperor uniform, the red and white colors, the same as the figure who had just been broadcast all over the news saving the world. Amber's dad's face turned pale. He wobbled, and then, thud, he fainted right there in the doorway. Mark stood frozen for a moment. "Well, shit," he muttered. He heard rapid footsteps pounding down the stairs and looked up just in time to see Amber herself. "Mark," she shrieked, running toward him. He had all the time in the world with super speed to brace himself before she leapt into his arms, wrapping herself around him. He caught her effortlessly, his hands instinctively grabbing her ass. She clung to him, her arms tight around his neck, her legs curled around his waist. He laughed, planting a kiss on her lips. "I'm back," he murmured. Amber pulled back just enough to smile at him, her eyes shining. "I know. I saw you on the news. You were incredible." Then her face turned serious. "Is Eve okay?" Mark nodded, reassuring her. "She's fine. Just resting. She'll be awake in a few days." Relief washed over Amber's face. She let out a breath and then grinned mischievously. Still in his arms, she tugged at his shoulders. "Come upstairs with me. We need to talk." Mark raised an eyebrow, glancing down at her dad still unconscious at their feet. "Shouldn't we, deal with that first?" he asked, half laughing. Amber looked down briefly at her father's prone form. Then she shrugged, smirking coyly. "He'll be fine. And honestly, I'd rather he not be awake for what we're about to do." Mark felt his face flush. For all his strength and boldness, Amber could still catch him off guard like nobody else. She giggled, delighted, sensing his embarrassment. With a playful growl, he shifted her weight and carried her upstairs, her laughter echoing through the house. Down below, Mr. Bennett lay unconscious and blissfully unaware. Mark laid in bed beside Amber. Their naked bodies were tangled under the sheets. Amber curled up against Mark's bare chest, her fingers lazily tracing a line down his collarbone. Her skin was warm against his, her breath steady, relaxed. I missed you, Amber murmured, voice soft and a little sleepy. Mark smiled, turning slightly to kiss the top of her head. I missed you too. There was a pause, just long enough for her to soak in the moment. Then she asked, so, how was your trip? You've been gone for like 3 weeks. Mark gave a soft shrug, eyes drifting to the ceiling. Pretty smooth, honestly. Went out to meet with the Coalition Council. There was some talking, boring stuff at first. Then, a few Viltrumites decided to crash the meeting. Amber's eyes widened. What happened? Mark yawned, like he was recounting a long day at work. We handled them. Took them down pretty easily and brought them with me to Viltrum. Amber blinked. You went to Viltrum? What was it like? Mark's expression softened as he recalled the alien world. It's hard to explain. Imagine the kind of planet humans picture in sci-fi movies when they talk about utopias. It was full of advanced tech, white buildings, and pristine skies. The architecture is super clean and organized. It's kind of surreal. Amber's mouth opened in wonder. Wow, that sounds incredible. I'd love to see it one day. Mark smiled down at her. I'll take you. Promise. One thing he didn't tell her was that there was a ring of dead Viltrumites surrounding the entire planet. For a few seconds, they just lay there, bathed in the fading light and soft silence. But then Mark's eyes flicked to the window, and he noticed how the sun had nearly disappeared. He sighed and gave her a quick kiss on the lips. I should get going. Amber pouted, pulling the blanket tighter around them. Why? Just stay here. Mark chuckled. Tempting, but your dad's still home. And let's be real, if I stayed here, I wouldn't be able to keep my hands off you. And we'd make noise. Amber laughed and nuzzled his neck. I'd be fine with that. I bet, he smirked. But there's another reason. Anissa's at my house, and she's not exactly used to Earth yet. I trust her, but I also don't want to come home to a crater in my kitchen. Amber giggled again, but then sat up, letting the blanket fall and revealing her chest. Then let me meet her. Mark blinked. Why? I want to meet her, she repeated. I've never talked to a real alien before. Mark raised a brow. You're literally dating an alien. Amber rolled her eyes. You were raised here. It doesn't count. Mark stared at her for a beat, then sighed. All right, but you're telling your dad. Amber groaned, but nodded. Yeah. I guess it's about time I introduced you properly anyway. They got dressed, taking their time, but eventually making their way downstairs. But when they reached the living room, they looked towards the ground. Mr. Bennett was there, still unconscious, lying sprawled across the hardwood floor exactly where he had fainted earlier. Mark knelt and easily lifted him onto the couch like he weighed nothing. With a small puff of his cold breath, he blew over Mr. Bennett's face until the older man jolted awake, arms flailing. What the? He gasped, sitting up straight, eyes darting wildly. Dad, calm down, it's okay, Amber said, rushing over to steady him. Mark and Amber sat side by side on the couch across from him, while Mr. Bennett slowly came to his senses, adjusting his glasses and squinting at Mark. He didn't say anything at first, just stared. Mr. Bennett's eyes stayed locked on Mark longer than Mark was entirely comfortable with. He scanned him head to toe. The suit, the solid build, the quiet composure that didn't look like it came from being someone who literally fought a god a day ago. It was all a lot to take in. There was something about Mark that didn't just say superhero. It said something more authoritative, like he was someone of great importance in the government. Eventually, Mr. Bennett cleared his throat and sat up a little straighter on the couch. I guess I should start with introductions. I'm George Bennett, Amber's dad. Mark smiled and extended a hand. Mark Grayson, and I'm her boyfriend. Amber glanced at her dad from the corner of her eye. She kept her hands in her lap, her knees drawn in close. She didn't say anything, but her nervousness was all over her face. George shook Mark's hand stiffly. His grip wasn't weak, but somehow it managed to not hurt him. Boyfriend, he said, repeating it to himself. It was clear he was trying to process everything, not just the guy sitting across from him, but what that guy represented. George had watched the news. He'd seen him take on that cosmic monster that hooped the Guardians of the Globe and other heroes like they were babies. And now that same guy was here, on his couch, with his daughter. So what's your superhero name? George awkwardly asked. Well, people usually know by the name Invincible, Mark said. You're Invincible, George said slowly in awe. Mark nodded. That's right. There was a beat of silence. George looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. I've heard of you. So has everyone else. You're one of the greatest superheroes in the world. People often compare you to Omni-Man. Mark had to hold back a laugh at that. Being compared to his father, who almost took over the world, was ironic. George leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I'm gonna be honest with you. This isn't easy for me. You seem like a good kid, but you're not just a kid. You're a superhero, and that scares the hell out of me. Mark nodded. I get it. Not everyone can handle having a superhero in the family. George looked down at his hands, turning them over slowly like he was staring through them. You know, my dad was a superhero. He went by President Mike. He wasn't famous. He had the ability to create weird energy guitars that could fire off sound waves when he played them. Pretty ridiculous looking back, but he meant well. I asked him one day why he became a hero, and he told me that when he got his great powers, he felt that he needed to use them with great responsibility, and his way of doing that was by putting away bad guys. Mark inwardly stiffened. Amber blinked and looked at him. You never told me that. I didn't think I needed to, George said, smiling faintly. But the thing is, it cost us everything. One day, a guy my dad put away recognized him walking around in regular clothes. No costume, just him and my mom, grabbing groceries. Mark could tell where this was going. They both got shot. Mom survived, but she'd been in a wheelchair ever since before she passed. My dad didn't make it. I'm really sorry, Mark said. George nodded, but didn't say anything right away. He looked at Mark again. You saving the world is great. I'm glad you're out there doing it. But when you're doing that, it's not you that I worry about. It's her, which is why I can't accept this relationship. Amber gently reached over and took her dad's hand. Her grip was soft, but firm. Mark spoke. You're not wrong to be worried. You're right. People around me do get hurt. It's happened before. During the fight with Omnipotus, I almost lost 2 people I care about. One of them is still in a coma. I won't lie and say I'll always be around to protect Amber, but at this pause, Mark gave off an oppressive feeling. I'll be sure to do anything to make sure she's safe and alive, even if I have to travel to the afterlife and drag her soul back. Amber's eyes teared up a bit. She leaned into Mark, resting her head against his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her slowly, gently. After a few long seconds, George exhaled deeply. All right, he said. I still don't love this, George admitted, standing. But I believe you. If you say you'll protect her, I'll hold you to it. Mark stood too, his posture respectful. You have my word. Amber was already smiling through her tears. She stood up and threw her arms around Mark's neck, whispering, I love you. Mark held her close, trying not to sense her dad staring daggers at him. And just when things started to settle, Amber looked up and said, casually, I'm staying at Mark's tonight. George's calm shattered instantly and was replaced with fatherly anger. No, you're not. Dad, come on. I don't care if you save the planet. You're not. I am, she said firmly. And I'll be fine. Eventually, George sat back down at her firm attitude and rubbed his forehead. Fine. This is what I get for spoiling you so much as a kid. Thank you, Daddy, she said, planting a kiss on his cheek. Yeah. George waved her off. Mark flew towards his home with Amber snug in his arms. When they arrived, Mark introduced Amber to Anissa and his mom as his girlfriend. Anissa already knew about him having multiple partners, but Mark's mother was shocked as she thought Eve was his girlfriend. This brought about an awkward interaction with Mark having to explain that both were his partners. Debbie hadn't taken to that too kindly and ended up scolding him, having him kneel in front of her while yelling at him about monogamous relationships. The only way Mark could get out of the situation was by mentioning that the Viltrumites will arrive in about a day's time. Nolan stood near the viewport of the Viltrumite Imperial cruiser as it descended toward Earth's moon. He had once stood on this moon planning to conquer Earth, prepared to bring its people to heal for the glory of the Empire. Now, he was returning alongside dozens of his kind, not as an invader, but as visitors. He'd never imagined this would be the future. His son, Mark, had done more in a short lifetime than most Viltrumites did in centuries. Nolan had lived for over 2,000 years, fought through galaxies, and toppled planets. But nothing made him feel more pride than what Mark had become. When the ship landed, Mark was already there waiting, floating with his arms crossed above the docking bay as the airlock opened for him. A meeting was called for all the Viltrumites. One by one, the Viltrumites filed into the hall under the orders of the new Emperor Mark administration. He stepped forward, addressing them with a firm voice. Things are going to be different from now on, he began. Your time on Earth won't be about conquest. It will be about learning to coexist with other species. The crowd remained silent, their attention fixed. You'll integrate into human society. That means blending in, keeping your powers hidden unless necessary to save lives. No grand displays of power, just living like them and understanding them. A few furrowed their brows. Others glanced at each other, visibly unsure. You'll take on human identities, live among the population, and you'll need to find mates. That's how we'll rebuild our numbers. There will be quarterly check-ins. If needed, I'll provide jobs, housing, and funds through my company to help you adjust. Once you've confirmed impregnation with your partner, you can come to Invincible Incorporated, where the child will be chipped and you can decide to raise the child however you like until they gain their powers. They'll be trained on Viltrum to control their powers when the time comes, so they don't endanger the world we're trying to protect. When they have good control over their powers, they'll be allowed to stay on whichever planet they choose. There was some hesitation among the crowd, especially from the older ones. Thrag stood with his arms crossed, a scowl etched deep into his face. Conquest stood beside him, quiet but clearly displeased. Mark knew Thrag wouldn't openly object. Not anymore. He'd been dethroned, and his strength was not enough to challenge Mark's rule. Still, that bitterness was there. Mark could feel it like heat from a distant fire. Thrag clenched his jaw. Inwardly, he cursed Mark 1,000 times over. His reign as Grand Regent had ended in defeat, yet he lived, and now he was just another one of Mark's advisors. A soldier with a title, nothing more. The humiliation was sharp, but he held his tongue. For now, Mark turned back to the assembly. Cause trouble, and you'll be punished. Hurt a human, and you'll answer to me directly. Detain if it's necessary, and with restraint. However, if the reason behind hurting a human is reasonable, like self-defense, then there will be no punishment, but your actions will be judged if self-defense was needed. At the end of his speech, he distributed prepaid cards, each loaded with $100,000 to help them settle in. A practical gift, but also a message. This wasn't just an assignment. It was a new lifestyle that they'll have to adjust to. After the meeting, Mark and Nolan stood off to the side. I hope this works, Nolan said quietly. Mark nodded. I'm not saying it'll be smooth, but Earth changed you, so I think it can change them too. Inwardly, Mark thought about how easily the Viltrumites had accepted Earth in the comics. But real life wasn't a comic. Things were messy here. He added, I've also left a team back on the ship to monitor all the Viltrumites. They'll make sure nothing crazy happens while they're blending in. Plus, the quarterly check-ins will help us catch anything early. Just then, Nolan's communicator chirped. A familiar voice came through the feed. Nolan, are you back on Earth yet? Nolan responds. Oh, Cecil, leaning in to whisper to Mark. By the way, see if you can get this tracker off my shoulder. I already protect the world anyway. I don't need Cecil over my shoulder telling me how to do it. Mark thought it over. Yeah, I mean the punishment is kind of useless, because you already work with him already. I'll try and work things out. Cecil's voice cut through again. We've got some things to talk about. Meet me at the GDA. Mark spoke through his own communicator. Actually, that works out. I was planning to meet with him anyway. We need to talk about Earth's future and the Viltrumites. Nolan tapped his chin. Might want to talk to him about documentation, too. Back when I first arrived, I had to get the GDA's help just to exist on paper. Mark chuckled. Noted. GDA headquarters. Walking in, Mark noticed Cecil looked much better and less stressed than the last time he saw him. You sure took your time, Cecil muttered when Mark and Nolan entered. Mark gave him a calm nod. You look way better than the last time I saw you. What's your secret? With a deadpan voice. I sit in a tub of goop for 30 minutes, and it re-energizes me. Mark laughed, but he vaguely remembered something like that from the comics. Cecil then dove right into the topic at hand. First, you're aware of your newfound fame? Well, we've been trying to cover it up, but your appearance during the omnibus fight wasn't subtle. The whole world saw a guy in red and white punch a reality-warping god into the stratosphere before we could block the news. I'm fine with him connecting that to my invincible identity, Mark replied. Just not to Mark Grayson. My mom's still got a house. I'd like to keep it private. Cecil waved a hand. Fine, we've been scrubbing footage, filtering interviews, even paid off a few news anchors, so we can make it so that you are identified strictly as Invincible and not Mark Grayson. Now moving on to the second topic, reports are flying in from every continent. Multiple unidentified objects entered Earth's atmosphere about an hour ago. Dozens of them were moving so fast that we lost track of them. You wouldn't know anything about that, seeing as you guys were on the moon, would you? Mark responded. Those are the Viltrumites that I've led here. Cecil stared at him like he hadn't heard correctly. You brought them here? Without even giving us a heads up? Mark calmly says. Well, it's not like I'd come back without them. Plus, I want them to experience Earth life so they can change their mindsets when it comes to other species. Cecil irritated. You just introduced a species that can squash humans like bugs into the general population, with no warnings to protect ourselves. Mark crosses his arms and has a stern expression. I know, but I'm their emperor now, and I've ensured that the Viltrumites will behave properly while on Earth. They'll even save human lives if able. So what's the plan? Cecil finally asked. They just hang around, punch criminals, and go on Tinder dates? They're not here to play superhero, Mark said. They're mainly here to start families and gain emotional maturity. Cecil sat back in his chair, tapping the table with a finger. All right, let's hear it. What does this alliance look like? Mark nodded. Simple. Earth will let the Viltrumites live here. They integrate into society and start families. In exchange, we offer Earth access to our technology, which helps with cleaner forms of energy, helps with increasing the number of natural resources, and even restores the atmosphere to combat global warming. We're talking a cure for climate change, food shortages, maybe even space exploration. Donald glanced up from his notepad at that. Didn't even know he was here. We'll also promise to return to Viltrum in a few generations, once our numbers reach a satisfactory level. But for now, Earth is our refuge. Cecil narrowed his eyes. And you can guarantee they won't go rogue? No massacres? No coup attempts? I can, Mark said. Because they're following me. And I'll hold them accountable even if I need to kill them. Cecil was quiet for a moment. Then, and the humans involved with them? The partners, the children. Mark nodded. They get essentially dual citizenship. Freedom to visit either planet. Full protections under both governments. And the kids? Cecil asked sharply. You're talking about god-level toddlers born to humans. What happens when they start throwing trucks in preschool? We'll track their development using standard Viltrumite trackers when they are born. When their powers emerge, we move them to Viltrum for training and education. Taught how to control their strength before being able to return if they want. Cecil's expression remained skeptical, but he was listening. Donald continued scribbling notes. And if they don't want to stay on Viltrum, they'll have that choice once they're trained, Mark replied. Cecil sighed, glancing at Donald. This is a hell of a proposal. It's not a proposal, Mark corrected gently. It's a solution. One that benefits both sides. Besides, it's not like you can refuse, as it's already happening. Better to take advantage of the opportunities. Donald looked up. You said these children would be tracked. How? Mark hesitated only briefly. Harmless trackers that will be embedded at birth. They're already standard procedure on Viltrum, since they need a way to keep track of their people that are capable of flying through space. Cecil mulled that over. And if someone decides to weaponize one of these kids, raise them to hate humans. Mark's face was serious. Then I'll deal with them. That seemed to satisfy Cecil more than any contract ever could. 10 hours later, the treaty was drafted. Terms were laid out. Conditions were reviewed. Exceptions were made, like Nolan's punishment, and contingency plans were debated. When the last page was written, Mark and Cecil stood up and shook hands. You're a hell of a politician, Cecil said. You know that. Mark grinned. I had to read a lot. They left the meeting room in silence, and the beginning of an era was forged. While Mark and Nolan were moving towards the exit, Mark turned around. I'm gonna check on Eve. Mom's at my house, so you could fly there. before he started walking towards her room. The halls of the GDA were quiet this late, lit only by the soft hum of overhead fluorescence. Mark moved briskly past nurses and agents until he reached a familiar door. He pushed it open gently. Inside, Eve sat upright in bed, and her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Mark," she said softly with a smile. He smiled. "Hey, gorgeous." But the warmth of the moment was immediately undercut by the presence of two other people in the room. Eve's parents. Her mother sat beside the bed, looking tired and worried. Her father, on the other hand, stood stiffly near the wall, arms folded, disapproval etched across every inch of his face. Mark gave a polite nod. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilkins." Eve's dad didn't return it. Instead, he turned toward his daughter, voice already raised. "I told you this job was too dangerous. And now look at you. You almost died." "Dad," Eve groaned, rubbing her temples. "Not now. You should quit and focus on finding a stable husband and having kids." Mark raised an eyebrow. "I'd be pretty heartbroken if she went and got a husband while she's still dating me." The silence in the room was immediate and thick. Eve's dad blinked, clearly realizing who had just spoken. "You're," he stammered. "You're that guy? The one on TV." Mark just nodded. "Mark Grayson, superhero, and Eve's boyfriend." Eve smiled faintly at the introduction, but her father's face darkened again. "We'd like some privacy," he said, stepping toward Mark. Mark merely walked past the man, ignoring him, and approached Eve's bedside, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "You okay?" "I'm fine," she whispered. "I was just exhausted." Eve's father exploded. "I don't care who you are. She's my daughter, and I have a right to speak to her without being interrupted by some stranger." Mark didn't raise his voice, but his tone dropped cold. "I'm not some stranger. I'm her partner. You know, the one who didn't walk away when she needed support." Eve's dad clenched his jaw. "She shouldn't be doing this in the first place. She's not cut out for it. She should have stayed home, like I said, instead of running around in a skimpy suit pretending to be a hero." That was it. Mark's anger appeared. "You need to shut the fuck up," he said, eyes narrowing. "You think she's not cut out for it? She just helped save the world. She was inches from death, and you're worried about the way she dresses?" Eve's father tried to cut in, but Mark wasn't done. Mark said plainly, "I'm not going to stand here and let you pretend your outdated 1950s worldview is somehow right. I won't let you talk to my Eve like that, especially when she'll be an important figure remembered far into the future, while you'll be an old man all by yourself with no one to visit you since you pushed your daughter away." Mark then looked at Eve's mom. "And you need to stop feeding into his ego by being so submissive, and actually stand up for yourself and for your daughter. How are you supposed to be an example for your daughter with the way you act? Either get it together yourself or come and ask us for help." The room was silent again. Eve's mother looked visibly torn, her hands clenched together in her lap. Her father, red-faced and seething, finally growled, "Come on, we're leaving." He didn't even look at Eve as he turned toward the door. Her mother hesitated a second longer, then followed. Mark stood still, waiting for the door to shut. Then he sat down beside a tearful Eve and gently took her hand. "I'm sorry for that," he said. Eve shook her head. "Don't be. They were always like that. You just got through to them better than I could." She wiped her eyes, but her smile was sincere. "I love you," she said. Mark leaned in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "I love you too." Eve's grin returned with a mischievous edge. "Now get in this bed before the nurse comes back." Mark smiled. He slipped off his boots and crawled gently onto the bed beside her. Eve slid into his arms immediately, her head resting on his shoulder. The hospital blanket barely covered the both of them, but they didn't care. Eve's fingertips traced lazy circles on his chest through the fabric of his shirt, and Mark felt himself relax. She smiled and leaned up to kiss him. It was a very intimate kiss. Eve's fingers slid up into his hair, and Mark wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her closer. She moved on instinct, swinging one leg over him, so she straddled his waist, the blanket slipping further. She pulled down Mark's pants and then removed her own, before hovering right over Mark's cock. They both froze when they heard a soft gasp. Both of them turned to see a nurse frozen in the doorway, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. A thick silence filled the room. Mark opened his mouth. The nurse flushed bright red and quickly turned around, closing the door behind her with a thud. They could still hear her heels echoing as she walked off in a rush down the hallway. The nurse inwardly thought, "He's so big." Eve laughed a little. Mark groaned. "Man, I should have heard her coming." She looked into it. Eve giggled. "Did you see the look on her face?" She was blushing all the way to her ears, Mark muttered. Eve lowered her waist, inserting Mark into herself, while moaning, "In. Well, maybe we should give her something to really talk about." Mark groaned. "You are a menace." She grinned. "You love it. Giving him a kiss. I really do."